options for the enemy to MOBA team comp builder.
God, he gets halfway through a sentence and he's like, quickly, let's write, like, MOBA team comp builder, yes. So today. So Freedo made that video that I responded to, the 6v6 Overwatch Flat Earth, and has not ceased his yapping ever since. And from my perspective, his arguments haven't changed in any way. He's just repeating them over and over. He just turns his camera on, says RPG team builder game 4 different times over the course of 15 minutes and turns his camera off every single time. But he's made another one, 67% downvoted to your own audience, man. He has so many subscribers and he's 67% downvoted. That's difficult to do. That's difficult to do. How do you manage to get under 50% like ratio on YouTube? What you do is you act incredibly entitled, you recycle old arguments, you bring stuff up that isn't even relevant to the topic, and then you act like you are better than other people. That's really how you get it, right? The smugness is how you really turn people off towards you. Can we do anything else? No, because he keeps doing it, and nobody else is beating him over the head with the truth, so I've got to do it. Sadly, I don't have a choice but to beat him over the head. It's not my fault that, like, nobody's responding to it. Look on YouTube, search for any response. It's not there. Somebody have to do it. Keep saying Spilo basically said / agreed with everything Freedo is saying. Well, Spilo's welcome to agree with him. Over at Spilo, a new one as well. You think I care? I'm fine. It turns out I've tried to ignore this, right? I've tried to ignore this. So this one was released 3 weeks ago. I just scrolled to the middle. I can't not because he won't stop. I can't not. Now, this is just Freedo shooting the shit over Spilo's video. Just absolutely shit. I've read the comments. I've seen things about him not ever playing 6v6 or stuff like that. That sounds really good for making an opinion piece. Maybe if you spent the amount of time playing the game mode instead of making your opinions and recording your opinions on the game mode, or maybe the same amount of time thinking about it as the time you spent recording, maybe you'd have some interesting stuff to say. But I seriously doubt he does. I wonder if he purposely engaged with the haters. I feel like he's definitely farming. Don't get me wrong, he's definitely farming. When I do 6v6 stuff, I don't feel like I'm farming because I feel like I have something genuinely important to say. But the fact that he doesn't really add anything new to the conversation at any other time, he just repeats RPG team comp builder over and over like he did in the first video. It really makes me feel like he's just farming views. Why not just call him a shill and move on? Because it's not a shill. Okay, so this is a weird one, Alfie, right? Because Freedo's this guy who would only be making these videos if he genuinely believed this, right? He'd only be making it if he genuinely believed it. Certainly not getting paid by Blizzard. He has barely any affiliation to Blizzard anymore. He's relatively well thought of, but as I said in the first one, yeah, you don't have to be a shill in order to say stupid things. You can just be stupid. That's an option. Idiocy over malice is it's a thing we go for when we're trying to judge people's actions, right? Which is much worse, right? Because if nobody challenges the things he's saying very confidently, then essentially what he's going to do is take over the conversation. Because how conversation on the internet and the tone of the conversation on the internet kind of works is there is a window of acceptable things to talk about, and people, by and whole, just repeat arguments they've already heard. Nobody makes their own arguments. Nobody thinks anything new up. What people do is repeat stuff that has been on the internet. So I thought I have to respond to it, sadly. The few people that are willing to listen tried podcasting with him while he played on his phone. Right, let's go. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry. It's not my fault. I have to. You know I have to. Come on. I have to. Let's go.
Hey guys, it's Freedo here for your Overwatch. Today we're going to be reacting to a video made by Spilo, former Overwatch league coach, who has entered into the 5v5, 6v6 debate in sort of a neutral point of view, I would say, being pretty fair to both sides. And here he made an extensive video after doing lots of testing himself, and I want to react to the things that he says and some of the things he highlights about the trade-offs, which I always like to bring up, about either version of the game. We know 6v6...
Before we get into this, I just want to say my reaction to Spilo's video was essentially, as I said, his version of the game mode with 250 health pools have dumpstered the mode because they misbalance the ability to pocket DPS on the off angles, and therefore the ability for DPS to be able to 1v1 or 2v2 a tank on an off angle. Therefore, the DPS can't get any space on that place. Therefore, all of the things he was saying about the DPS not being able to get any space on the map was partially self-inflicted. That's essentially what I've said. I'll probably repeat it a couple of times during here, but that's essentially it.
Is on the way. The developers are working on it. It's going to take X amount of months for them to get the tech up and running, for them to be able to put it into the game for testing, and we'll see based on its popularity which way the game goes. Either way, I enjoyed the game, but I think some of the things that Spilo shows off in this video is going to surprise you. What's often about this intro is he's highlighting both that he understands lots of different types of team compositions, but also lots of different tiers of play, focusing more on, I think even now,
yeah, he's getting his bona fides in.
Personal coaching, so really getting into the thick of how everybody plays the game normally, as well as what can be done at the highest.
Please really start texting someone. Okay, guys, we have to explain this, though, because some people won't understand. So the other day we watched an episode of the Group Up podcast, and I was trying to work out whether he was saying anything interesting or new arguments or anything like that, and in the middle of it, he just started texting on his phone and would not stop for like 20 minutes. He would just go straight back to his phone, SVB would call on him, and he would be like, well, I wasn't listening, just over and over. And then Samito had to go because something personal happened. So Samito went, and it was literally just FVB and Spilo sitting there talking to each other with Freedo looking at his phone. It was awful, man. And SVB said, no, it's okay, don't worry if you've got something important. But, I mean, you did sign on to be on a podcast, so maybe at a certain point, you know what? It's more polite to say, I have to take this, take a phone call and come back, than it is to shoot a text message if you're going to be shooting 20 text messages over the course of half an hour, right? It's the professional thing. Sign off for a little bit, go deal with something, come back. What if family emergency of something? Exactly. Family emergency, you go deal with the family emergency. You go call whoever you want. That sort of stuff. It's just how you handle it in a professional environment, isn't it?
First off was Sustain Watch. Overwatch had a series of really unfortunate metas, whether it was Double Shield and a lot of other metas that just basically revolved around not taking space, not taking angles, denying the fun of a lot of the more fun support and DPS hero categories, with the goal of just going towards moving into big clumps, denying off angles, sustain, shield.
Which I think we'll all agree was based on, and this is one of the weird things that the classic format has kind of revealed. This was not in the original game at all. The original game was very swingy. You always had attacking advantage because attacking with ultimates was pretty much just favored compared to the defensive stuff. When we started putting lamp and stuff like that into the game, the bursty stuff that could deny aggressive pushes into you, that's when the game slowed down. That's when the game turned into this. And essentially what's happened is we kept all of those denial abilities into Overwatch 2, but we've reduced even further the amount of aggressive use cases. The game's a lot more in-depth, but still scales out a lot more than it used to.
Shields, more healing, and more healing. This was a big issue because of a lot of hero design.
There's a non-zero chance Freedo's watching the subway run. I guarantee you Spilo's editor put subway surface in the corner just because I did it that one time. I guarantee you.
Look at this lineup real quick. I mean, like, I can't think of anything less fun ever having some of these abilities put together. And we don't even like Arisa now. Most people don't like
abilities. Interesting that he's talking about abilities and not the format there.
It's a rework and how it's fit into the game. I think, though, I will say, I find these far less offensive in 5v5. These two put together, obviously, were obnoxious.
You find Moira and Brig less offensive in 5v5. Well, Moira's an AoE healer, so it makes sense they'd be more impactful in 6v6. The same with Brig. And let's be honest, Brig wasn't offensive in 6v6 to begin with. Brig was never offensive once they actually fixed Brig to the point where they were reasonable. Bat was actually the one holding it together. All that entire time, just the one holding it together.
You can counterpick Sig, you can ignore him, you can run him over, you can find the lamp, you can get around Brig. Like, when I see these for 6v6, I have PTSD. When I see them and think of them for 5v5, other than how easy Moira is to duel things, I'm not a huge fan of that, but other than that, like, I don't know if any of these stand out as, like, breaking the game in 5v5.
It's all balancing.
When you have more players, you always are going to be able to synergize something. So whereas Spilo says, like, well, if they balanced it better or designed differently, maybe we wouldn't have had these problems. But I think there's a certain fact of the matter that more pieces allows for more synergy. You just have one more teammate on the field, more synergy is possible. And I think he'll get into making further points on.
He's right there. He's genuinely right there. But he has agreed that it was the individual abilities that were problematic, and there's no reason that we can't balance these synergistic abilities in a reasonable way in terms of numbers. They can't cross-pollinate to the degree where they can just hold you in a position that is bad, and you can just stand there and whittle down the enemy before they get to you. There's no reason to suggest that in any way, shape, or form. There never has been a reason to suggest that.
On this as we go through.
Agreeing with Freedo, this isn't my streamer? No. Okay, so there's another thing that I haven't said. Freedo is really fucking good on his critique of the game in the most part. He is pretty clear thinking, but there's literally this one thing that Freedo cannot talk about. For whatever reason, he just loses the fucking plot and starts reiterating the same points that have been refuted 10 times over and over and over instead of making anything intelligent. Freedo's been really good for the game. Freedo's an incredible person. Like, I don't disrespect Freedo in general. I disrespect his views right now, but I don't disrespect Freedo. I like Freedo. Sadly, that's what makes it so ridiculously frustrating.
Now, I have watched this before, so I kind of know what's going to be coming up, but I want you to bookmark that. Sam doesn't agree on this, Spilo doesn't agree on this, but I think he contradicts himself later in the video on this exact point. He thinks it's not 6v6 if they just balanced it differently or designed differently, but I think a lot of these high-level competitive guys really don't pay credence to how difficult to design.
There's the other verbal tick, and you'll notice this verbal tick, right? We've got these two verbal ticks going in. So the two verbal ticks you've got to watch out for is high-level competitive design. So high-level competitive design. So this is your opinion doesn't matter because you are a type of player, which is literally, it's literally a fallacy, right? This is a fallacy. To say that the high-level players can't think about what the game might be like for low-level players and medium-level players, especially high-level coaches don't know what the game is like for medium-ranked players, the people they are spending the majority of their fucking time coaching, is absolutely insane, and he will repeat it ad infinitum every single time whenever they say something he doesn't like. And the second one is RPG Team Comp Builder. Okay, so keep an eye out for RPG Team Comp Builder. This is just a conglomeration of 15 different points that individually you can refute. But when he says RPG Team Comp Builder, he's essentially saying it matters more what you pick. That's the short of it. It's not a fallacy, but it's something that's been refuted so many times, and he just brings it up over and over and over again. Let's see if we're gonna add any verbal tics to the Freedo chart while we're going through this. And obviously there is the inbuilt thing. I talk for the common folk. The common folk that have given him 67% downvotes on his new video about this topic. Now, is that bad? He essentially, I suppose his response to that would be the common folk aren't even the people that watch YouTube videos, which is true, but that just means he actually disagrees entirely with the whole of his audience, which is interesting. But yeah, I'm not sure where people get the idea that high elo never think about low elo, because if it's truly is a problem, it probably affects high elo even more. I think I have like 80-20 odds of tuning into a stream and seeing my face. Well, that's all we do here. That's all we do here, Spilo. Why do you tune into the stream if you don't want to see your beautiful face? Oh, Spilo. Violence. There we go. It's keyed in. There you go. Freedo extrapolates the RPG builder with Overwatch Classic versus 6v6 when it's not inherent to 6v6, just Overwatch Classic. Yeah, we're watching the response to your 6v6 video. I've looked at a bit of the Overwatch Classic video that he's got before. It seemed like the 6v6 conversation didn't even need to be there in the first place. It seemed like he kind of clickbaited with Overwatch Classic and then just wanted to talk about something else from what I've seen. Yeah, so high-level competitive design. That means your opinion doesn't matter because you're a type of player and can't think about low-level players. So Spilo, your opinion doesn't matter because you are a high-ranked player. And RPG Team Comp Builder is the other one. Let's see if any other verbal tics we pick up.
And the entire argument of how the devs explained how difficult it was to design new characters that didn't break the game in 6v6. Because there's more options, it made it harder to design something new that was interesting and complicated enough to be like novel, to do lots of things and advance the game forward without synergizing with too many other things. Whereas
I think this is kind of ridiculous. I think that individually in 5v5, there's a lot more things you can't design than in 6v6. I think that in 6v6, there are problematic things with like AoE components, definitely, like agreed entirely. There's problematic things with burst. So for instance, when you get a certain amount of bursty abilities on a team, like Bubble and DM and Lamp and things like Life Grip, all of those things, you can combine them in a degenerate way. So you have to essentially cap the amount of those things that you put into the game or balance it like there would be 6 on the team. And that's how you have to balance that. But I'd say that there are certain things in the 5v5 format that cannot work, fundamentally. I just think they cannot work. I think the extreme designs in 5v5, like Widow, are significantly worse for the game. I'm a big Overwatch Classic hater, but I don't like how much osmosis we see between Classic and 6v6. Yeah, well, it's a standard thing, and I am a little bit concerned with the amount of tests that are going on before the actual 6v6 mode, the 2-2-2 mode, because I think that regardless of whether the devs intend it or not, there's going to be a lot of community kind of like cross-pollination on their thoughts about the old mode that's already been tested and the new mode. Luckily, I'm good because the only feedback I see online for Overwatch Classic and the 2-1-2 test is literally that 2 tanks are fun. So I'm happy, I don't mind, because everything else is a downside apart from 2 tanks are fun, which is a unilateral win for me, I'd say.
When there's limitations in the 5v5 format, they can kind of just toss a new thing out, and maybe a character like Mauga breaks the game or something, but he's pretty inoffensive now, right? It's not like we have years of Mauga breaking the game.
Oh, fuck off. No, Mauga is not inoffensive now. So, no, Mauga is not inoffensive because tank busting in general is more oppressive in 5v5 because in 6v6 you have more players on the team in order to actually counteract the tank busting or play around the tank busting. And if one individual tank was tank busted, then the other tank had more room to play in. Arguments like that have been made 100 times and you keep bringing them up for some reason. I don't get it.
It's just one wonky character that is kind of oppressive, probably needs a rework or whatever, but they eventually kind of put him in a better spot over time. It's pretty hard to say they ever got Orisa into a spot where she was fun to play and not horrible in Overwatch 1. She was just always going to be bad design, not fun for anybody.
She was always going to be boring, I think, because Orisa was a boring character. In terms of bad design, I think Orisa could have been salvaged. It just would have took a little bit more stuff in the kit because there really wasn't enough in the kit for anyone to want to play them. Holt was fun. Everyone loved Holt. Shield was boring. Left foot was boring. Fortify was boring. That was the entire kit. So it's like, was the design salvageable? Was the design worse in 5v5 than 6v6? I'd say that the Orisa design in 6v6 couldn't be moved over to 5v5. Because in 5v5, it's a lot less permitting on the type of things you can have. Because if you have a character that can brute an angle by itself in the 5v5 format, then you've necessarily made a poking character that can't be aggressed onto. And if you made a poking character that can't be aggressed onto, that sucks ass. That's really bad. So definitely we couldn't put old Orisa into 5v5. But I think that kind of goes against the point rather than to it for the most part.
Ever. And, well, Anyway.
Next up, individual impact through space, because this is something that when we're going into a first-person shooter that's going free to play, is people need to have a little bit, or need to feel like they have a little bit more individual playmaking. Now, whether 5v5 succeed with that is up for debate, but one thing's for certain is that one player technically does have more impact on the battlefield in Overwatch 2 now. Finally, and maybe most importantly, were queue times. Now, I'm not gonna...
I think the easiest way to prove that point is to go to 6v6 and see all of the new players for Overwatch 2 be shocked at the things Spilo's going to show later.
Freedo, you've literally already said you didn't even test the mode. You've literally already said that you didn't even bother to play it. What are we talking about testing here?
The video. Like, the individual impact theory is like, can you actually get to ground to maybe hit some shots or not? Whereas in 6v6, there's a lot of cases where you can't even get to the ground to ever do anything meaningful.
I think there's two things playing against each other here that are pretty similar arguments for and against the different modes. The first argument is that you are blocked off from angles and you are more contested in 6v6, which is obviously true. You are more by default tested. And the counter to that is that the things you are being contested by are more easily dealable with, right? So you actually do have some impact when you are being contested. I think that's, in general, is a bit of a wash of an argument in both sides. I think that's personal choice, and these two things can kind of be written off as a personal choice, kind of like a dichotomy there. I don't want to call anyone out, but I feel like Double Shield traumatized people into thinking 6v6 games means I can't play the video game. Yeah, for the most part, that's true. And don't get me wrong, Double Shield would have been more impressive if the players had ever learned to play Double Shield. Because if Double Shield was played properly, then there'd be a shield on every single angle instead of double stacked double main like idiots. So, yeah, Double Shield needed a lot of power taken out of it. It was OP because it was good enough that you could stack up like stupid people and still play it, which is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. It should have been easy to see. Sent you something for chat?
Hello, Rels chat. I have one message for you. Violence.
Oh, for fuck's sake. I'd like to say, Spilo, by the way, your dev interviews have been absolutely fucking fire. You've done amazing recently. And you know it. You've done better work for the community than any other person in the last like, couple of years, I'd say. By far. It's not even close. I think everyone can easily agree to that. You aspire to drop into my DMs now? I'm doing my best. Well, yeah, that's the thing. And the best thing you can do is listen to me, because obviously all my opinions are correct. So every moment you're here, you're actually getting more smart. I said a couple of weeks ago that we're in the golden age of Overwatch because the devs are actually listening to people that are fully connected with things that are reasonably true. And I think the fact that they're listening to you in any way is unilaterally good.
Great developer blog post on this. But basically, queue times for tank were a big bottleneck. Partly because tank is just not the most popular role in any game, period. And secondly, because tank was plagued with a lot of really crappy, unpopular hero designs. Sigma's done better since Overwatch 2, but Sigma in Overwatch 1, Orisa in Overwatch 1, and a lot of the other tanks that were meta in Overwatch 1, it just wasn't a very fun role to play. So not only were tank players not very common, but tank was plagued with a lot.
Huge problem with his argument, because tank was unpopular before these heroes were added. Tank was historically always unpopular. It was unpopular when Winston and Reinhardt were the only tanks you could pick. It was widely unpopular, in fact.
Oh, fuck off. Like, you go into Overwatch Classic, tank's unpopular. Do you know why it's unpopular? Because it's a terrible experience, right? You go into Overwatch 6v6 Double Shield, and it's unpopular because it's a terrible experience. It's really bad. I think that the best balancing between the roles is done by actually paying attention to the characters in the roles. If we have all the... I see no reason to believe that if all of the roles have about the same number of heroes and all of the roles have about the same number of experience, people would want to play tank less than the other roles. I know that's kind of a bold claim, which people have been basically ignoring for years at this point. They've been saying, oh, well, World of Warcraft, tanking, am I right? Nobody likes playing tanking. Tanking is tanking. If it's tanking, people don't want to play it. But realistically, I feel like every single game has had this effect where they've purposely made tanking more awkward to play or more oppressive to play or put barriers in the way of tanking, leveling in World of Warcraft being awful if you don't play DPS, etc. Yeah, like, if tanking is asked, people don't want to play tanking. And weirdly enough, clearly people do want to play tanks because the Max 2 mode was not Max 2, it was 2-1-2. That's just true, right? That's just true. That's why we put Mei into the tank role and Venture into the tank role and Sombra into the support role when we did our tests, because now I want to play all the fucking roles, right? We made interesting experiences in all the roles. It, like, what, we're talking about Overwatch 1? Your choices are you play Reinhardt, who's bad, you play Roadhog, who's boring, and you only play it if you're an asshole and want to insta-kill people. You play D.Va, who's good and interesting. You play Sigma, who's relatively boring. You play Orisa, who's terrible, right? And then you play Winston, who's very interesting. And how much depth is there? Ugh, not that much, right? There's a good amount of depth. Like, they release characters like Bull, who are interesting and fine, but would never be interesting to the majority of the player base because they had a massive skill curve to get onto the character and actually be useful with them. Queen is simply best designed hero and was really well balanced until healing numbers were up through the roof. I know it's not too bad relatively. Yeah, if instead of Orisa you release release Queen, we would have a whole different game, and I don't think it would have happened the same.
Where you would often not have a tank player on your whole team in the open queue era. So this idea that if you just pick the fundamental competitive tanks, like if the whole game was only Winston and Reinhardt, competitive players like Spilo and myself, we'd be having a ball. We'd be like, oh my God, this gameplay is great. But do casuals actually pick that? And I'll tell you from experience of seeing it happen for years, the answer is no. And I think because
Is that
a lot
true?
of these guys...
Is that true? Overbuff, obviously we're going to have to compare against Overwatch 2 tanking versus Overwatch 1 tanking. I assume that the general play rates would be not too far off, obviously, not crazy far off. So see Junkie Queen Sigma, Reinhardt Ball, this is comp this month. Let's go 6 months, because we don't care about the individual balancing. Junkie Queen, Reinhardt, Diva, Ball, Sigma. The ones that are unpopular, I'd say Roadhog and Zarya are definitely off tanky. I think it's pretty evenly split. You can say that people hated main tank more in the 2-2-2 format because they didn't have off tanks all of the time. I think that was true in a way. But then again, you only really had Reinhardt, Winston, and Bull that could initiate in a reasonable way. And that's not a lot of variety in the gameplay. And now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 out of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 out of 12 heroes, right? Over 50% can now initiate. When before it was kind of like, I say around like 30%. So yeah, if you have 30% of the characters that can initiate, 30% of the player base is going to be playing initiators. Like, it seems reasonable to me. I don't get it.
We're in the competitive scene, either as competitive players or competitive coaches, you get this myth in your head that Winston and Reinhardt are popular. Winston is not a popular hero in ranked. Where Reinhardt is, yes.
I don't think that's fucking true. Like, genuinely, I don't think that's true. I don't think he's looked up these numbers. I don't know if anyone wants to refute this, but we just looked at the numbers for the 6 month. Winston's kind of like middle to high. Winston's always been relatively popular. Like, and you just go through these videos and they're just random claims that make no sense whatsoever, and I just don't know why he's saying these things.
The lowest pick rates in all of ranked. Go look it up. And you think what? Like, that's gonna...
Okay, you said go look it up. We need to reopen Overbuff, right? Reopen Overbuff. Last 6 months. Overbuff isn't accurate, though. Overbuff is relatively accurate. In terms of statistics, you'd have to say there's a sampling bias from Overbuff in order to say it was inaccurate. If you get a sample of, say, 3,000 people, it's always going to be relatively accurate as long as you can't say there's a sampling bias. There's a little bit of a sampling bias because non-private profiles, there is. It's not that bad. Relatively accurate according to the dev Reddit, yeah. So Reinhardt's unpopular because Reinhardt's an initiator. Winston's unpopular. I don't think that's fucking true. Okay.
Like to the average player, if you make more characters like Winston, the devs have to decide if they're going to make tanks that appeal to a shooter fan base or tanks that appeal to the small subset of tank players that actually understand the role in a more complicated MOBA format, which 6v6 is. And I think...
Why don't we have tanks that are appealing to both in some way, shape, or form, and a wide, diverse variety of tanks so that people want to play them? I don't get it.
The evidence will be overwhelming once these 6v6 tests come out. The reality...
It's not! It's not! We do 2-1-2 instead of 1-2-2 because people actually did want to play the tanks. They thought that was more fun. And yeah, sure, it was better, so people would play it more because people want to win by default, but people were playing it as well because they thought it was enjoyable. Oh, God, yeah.
It's very different than what the perceived philosophy is going to be, which is typically the case with anything in life, frankly. Like, your dream of what the idealized version is never what happens in reality. What you have to look at in reality is what real human behavior looks like. What tanks do they actually gravitate towards? Like, a more popular tank that never gets mentioned is Diva.
You're making a statistical argument based on information you have no access to, and you're doing that while being fucking smug that other people don't have access to the data and are making a statistical argument based on the information they don't have access to. Like, what are you doing? How are you smug about this? Well, you don't look at the data. There's no fucking data. We haven't looked at it. Why are you acting like other people have information? I don't get it.
It was popular in both games, partially because the character's popular, and sort of plays the game in a more fluid, easy way, especially even in Overwatch 2, which is hotly contested that she's a bad hero in 5v5, but the pick rates kind of don't prove that. So it's difficult to have this conversation because we both have to deal with the players that know everything about the game versus the vast majority of players that know very little about the game. And that knowledge gap is pretty punishing. Whereas I would prefer that we move into a draft format or pick and ban.
What just happened over the last 15 seconds? No, I have to go back. I'm sorry, this is the first Freedo Rewind. This is branded for the Ralph channel. Freedo Rewind. It means I have no fucking idea what he said, and I need to rewind him because he went over 4 different topics at once.
What the perceived philosophy is going to be, which is typically the case with anything in life, frankly. Like, your dream of what the idealized version...
Okay, so he's clearly talking about how they should balance tanks to be either more for the shooter in terms of 5v5 or more for the tanks or the MOBA players for 6v6, right? That's the topic he's onto. He's saying that the devs need to make a choice there. Cool. We're on board. Guys, stay on board. We got this.
Is never what happens in reality. What you have to look at in reality is what real human behavior looks like. What tanks do they actually...
Okay, he's saying that tanks in general like the shooters, and we should be balancing more towards shooters. I really do try. I'm not being an ass. I do try.
Gravitate towards. Like, a more popular tank that never gets mentioned is Diva, who is popular in both games, partially because the character's popular. And
okay, yeah, that's the other balancing concern. If you want to make a role popular, people play heroes, not roles, for the most part. So you make interesting characters, sure.
Sort of plays the game in a more fluid, easy way, especially even in Overwatch.
Fluid, easy way. So you're saying that you need to balance towards more fluid, easy to play tanks, or players maybe not easy to play, but characters that are easier to onboard to. I kind of agree with that, but I think there should be a wide diversity of types of characters, so different players have different things to play.
Too, which is hotly hotly contested that she's a bad hero in 5v5, but the pick rates kind of don't prove that. So
it's hotly contested that she's a bad hero in 5v5, but the pick rates don't prove that. What does that mean? Surely you mean win rates, right? First off, and it's hotly contested in 5v5 because people are generally stupid. You can make any tank in 5v5, and if you increase the numbers enough, it will be good enough to have a good win rate. That is by default. That is kind of like why 5v5 is designed in terms of tanking, because Blizzard thought that you didn't have to balance things against each other and matchups against each other. They thought that you could just increase the numbers until they were all relatively similar, and that'd be a good gameplay experience, and it definitely wasn't. That's why we had so many problems. So sorry, I'm trying.
It's difficult to have this conversation because we both have to deal with the players that know everything about the game versus the vast majority of players that know very little about the game. And
how did we get here? Okay, how did we get here, guys? So he's saying that Blizzard have to balance for mechanics versus positioning, basically MOBA versus shooter. And then he's saying that Winston and Reinhardt were unpopular, which is untrue. And then he's saying that D.Va is unpopular because people were a bit silly and don't really know. Okay, so then he goes to, we had to balance D.Va relative to players because players are sometimes a bit silly, which is fair enough. That all works. And now he's saying we need to think about, it's very jumbled, man.
That knowledge gap is pretty punishing. Whereas
the knowledge gap is pretty punishing. It's just a weird sentence.
Or that we move into a draft format or pick and ban rather than restructure the entire game in a way that really only benefits a small percentage of players that deeply understand it.
Man, I'm trying, man. I'm really trying. You're too knowledgeable, so your opinion doesn't matter, and you're not knowledgeable enough, so your opinion doesn't matter. Yeah, all roads lead to your opinion doesn't matter. He's essentially saying we have to balance heroes around the knowledge curve of players, which makes entire sense. I'm happy with that. I just don't know what the point is, I guess. If anyone can help me with this, please say. I want to know what he's talking about.
Just after all that, why are we reconsidering 66? First off, let's talk about philosophy about why 5v5 has issue. Number one is the solo tank problem, where we only have one person taking the attention, taking space, baiting attention. You can feel a little bit like a human punching bag. And with two tanks, yes, you were a lot squishier, but at least you had the opportunity to have somebody else split the attention with you. In addition to that, a lot of the design philosophy around solo tank is leaning more into the raid boss style of things instead of having basically a slightly tankier DPS. And so we have these giga raid boss tanks that feel almost impossible to do anything to, and they can definitely introduce a lot of pain points in the gameplay. I will say that it doesn't necessarily mean that tank is always the most impactful role. It often is, but Gavin Winter has elaborated that at least at higher ranks, the convergence of which role contributes the most to winning a game is actually really close.
I'll call bullshit out on Spilo here, because which role contributes? Tank is literally half the player base, so if the tank role contributes more, tank has a lot more control individually per player. And I feel like they've been very, almost purposely, confusing on that point.
So that's good news from a balance perspective, but it doesn't necessarily make the game more fun to play.
So interestingly enough, I kind of disagree. I think tank is easily the most powerful role, basically because you can do so much with just one hero choice. So if you're a flexible player and you know not just how to counterpick the enemy, tank in the TikTok counterpick triangle, but like how to solve the entire equation of the team fight. But maybe that's me speaking as someone who just peaked into top 500, like a master's level, just outside of top 500. So I'm around a 1%
Humble brag.
tank
Humble
player
brag,
right
yeah.
now after the last few seasons of improving and working on my hero pool, kind of forcing myself into the thick of it. While he points out a lot of the downsides of tank, it's the major benefit is that you don't desperately need a key teammate to play around you just to function, which is what 6v6 is going to reintroduce, where the tank synergies, while on one hand feel fun, they also become utterly required for the gameplay to even function for any—
I don't think that's true, apart from in 2 or 3 examples. 2 or 3 examples is that if you're on Ryan Zarya against Ryan Sigma, I don't think you are significantly disadvantaged. You might be a little bit disadvantaged in the brawl, but when you're not in the brawl, you're significantly advantaged. So I think there's a give and take there, a really easy give and take, and I don't think it's that much worse playing Reinhardt in Ryan Sigma. I just don't think that's true.
Don't have the proper tanks, 2 tanks, then and the enemy does, you get blown out in the space trade battle, whereas in 5v5, you always have the opportunity to flank and just ignore the tank fight if you want. Now, that's not true with the highest tiers because there's less mistakes getting made on the map, but the masses, I think, are going to feel the lack of space and just how it's sort of like a non-contest, basically, if the enemy has a good tank line and you don't. Whereas you think that happens—
But you said that you haven't tried it. So what are you talking about? It's always this mix-up between the maps and the gameplay every single damn time. He'll conflate the classic Hanamura with the Overwatch 2 wide map and just be like, oh, everything's fine. Suravas is wide and open. You can flank on this one because there's less players. But he never even tried playing 6v6 in these maps. So he's just arguing really dishonestly. You can't argue without trying it. I like how Rolf is still holding on to Freedo's argument by a single thread, while chat just gives up and has their own discussions.
Now in 5v5, but that's mainly because you focus on the tank fight as a squishy instead of just going and finding a different matchup you can win elsewhere. Like, you can win lots of games in 5v5 with losing the tank fight. You kind of can't contribute in 6v6 if—
You can't win a lot of games losing the tank fight in 5v5. That's just not fucking true. Right? Can we just like draw a line under that where you can't win games while consistently losing the 1v1 tank fight? If it's about even, you're fine. Sure. But if you are like, we literally had 6 months, Freedo, 6 months, 9 months-ish, maybe, where the biggest word in the Overwatch community was counter-swapping. Like, what are we talking about? The tank losing the tank line in 5v5 doesn't matter as much as it does in 6v6. Like, what does it mean? What are you talking about? Like, come on.
If you, in a lot of fights, if you don't have a tank duo, let's say, tank synergy.
In addition to that, obviously with the announcement of solo tank, a lot of off-tank players, people that used to play D.Va, Zarya, and so on back in Overwatch 1, were rightfully concerned, and that's definitely been a big loss of the 5v5, is losing the off-tank identity of many.
Yeah, I actually think that's kind of weird. Like, I think it's more so that more tanks fight like off tanks. Like, the mechanics of tank in 5v5 is more similar. It's fight like off tanks. Like, the mechanics of tank in 5v5 is more similar.
No, the actual design of the tanks as a resource giver to other people in a bursty way has been removed from the fucking video game because there is no resource conduit for that resource in the initiating tank. It is an invalid thing to make in the game. It is a design space limitation, right? It's a design space limitation.
Off tank. So while I understand what he means in terms of like healing and the position you play, whereas every tank is more or less on the front line now, the mechanics of the tank were re-engineered so that the one tank gets to have the shooter fun of off tank, because off tank was far more popular, right? While he said earlier that Sigma wasn't very popular, I don't know, I saw lots of Sigma picks because he was a shooter tank, and there was a lot of shooter tanks people liked to pick. The drought and the player deficit was always on the main tank position, which was arguably a lot more powerful but far less popular, and that's a problem for the design of the game if you're not playing at the high.
Yeah, that's another thing Rita she does. Off tank equals shooter fun. That is an equation he uses quite a bit.
If you're not playing in a competitive environment, if you're not playing with a full team, who's going to draw the short straw of playing the fundamental role that's required for the team to function and the game to function, but no one wants to play it, you know? So you'd get a lot of games where there'd be 2 off-tank players on your team, and someone's like, all right, I guess I'll pick Winston or Reinhardt, which, you know, I didn't understand, because
You're saying that off-tank players are more popular, and then saying that main tank players can't play without an off-tank, and that's why people don't want to play main tank, right? It's that nobody wants to pick off-tank with you, so nobody picks main tank because that's boring. Therefore, like, but you just said, yeah, I get the argument. I do get the argument, but you're making it a really shitty way. The argument is, you have demand on you to get more resources in order to be as effective as an initiator. So if you only have the type of initiator that needs loads of resource in order to be able to do anything, like maybe Reinhardt, Winston, and Orisa, remember those are the three of the 4 initiators in Overwatch 1, where Bull had a really high skill floor, so you couldn't really play him if you were pretty bad at the game, right? These 3 characters had a really big resource demand. You actually needed some sort of resource to back you up, and it was kind of sad if you didn't have those resources. But you've already argued that these resource characters are already being played more than the main tanks, and they have to play one fucking character. So at a certain point, right, if we just have Roadhog removed from the game, what happens then? Are we fine if Roadhog gets removed from the game? Because there's always going to be an off tank on the team, so you always have a chance to play main tank. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, and you have to barrel in the effective priority pass into all of this. The fact that players were incentivized to smurf as DPS players onto a lower role, a lower SR role of tank. You have to barrel that in, and the way that players were playing around that by picking Roadhog more often than they were before. I remember when Jeff said they wanted to make Hog into a DPS. Hog always was kind of a DPS. Freedo, stop haunting my day. He haunts everyone's day. But I have to respond to it, right? Because he's just going to keep making the same arguments over and over and over again, completely unchallenged, apart from with downvotes.
I liked playing those heroes. I like playing those heroes in Overwatch 1. I like playing them in Overwatch 2. But there's so few of us is the problem. There's very few players that actually dedicate to that, learning that aspect of the game, and it was like required for everyone else to function. Everything was focused on the main tank, and if you just didn't have one, how do you play? Well, you didn't.
Those characters and the tank synergy that so many people enjoy.
And that's the worst thing. I get his argument, but he's making it in such a poor way. Honestly, I think it's a bit of a wash. I get it. I do get it. Like, there is some demand on team comps for 6v6, but there's also demand on team comps in 5v5. So what are we even talking about? We're literally comparing the fact that you can have some degenerate compositions in the 6v6 format, which could have been mitigated in some way, by the way. You could have made Roadhog into a better combination with other characters. You could have made Zarya and D.Va into a better combination together. Those 3 were really the trifecta of bad combinations. And then in 5v5, you literally have this counter-swapping problem that we spent 9 months trying to fix. So which one's balanced more? I think it's another dichotomy where it's probably more personal preference than anything else. I say we go with a 6v6 format because, as I've described, there are specific areas of design that you cannot make in the 5v5 format. So I say if we're going to let Blizzard just make random bullshit as they tend to, because let's be honest, characters like Mauga seem to have not had a great deal of thought put into them, then maybe we need to make it so they can't accidentally make something completely and utterly degenerate like Mauga. Maybe we need to pick the format that allows them to make stupid stuff. Really stupid stuff, because they're going to do it anyway, so why don't we just let them do it?
That the variety of tank combos is obviously just completely gone. One of the nice things about having 2 tanks is that introducing a new character into the hero pool is that you're going to have multiple different ways of comboing that character with all of the tanks. But when a new tank is introduced, you're just going to play it and nothing else. It can make the game feel a little bit more samey because instead of adding this new tank in combination with all the other tanks, it's just a new tank by itself. Finally, perhaps we have a little bit more confidence in our balancing to make
I think overall counter swapping is much less of an issue right now than it was before. Yep, I agree. The tank itself is so strong that the important part ends up being how quickly you can kill the squishies and ignores the tank mashup. I agree entirely. But that in itself was design restrictions, right? That's how we got it to a good state. We restricted the type of design that we could have with tank. We restricted the format by making the tank be a larger portion of the power level. We had to acknowledge that tanks actually do need to be pretty much unkillable by default in order to be easy to balance, didn't we? It's not that Blizzard don't think that tanks should have the lower health pools or the lower armor pools. It's that Blizzard couldn't design the tanks with the 5 health per bullet reduction in armor. It just didn't work. It just led to too much counter swapping, and we had to design around hundreds. I say at least 20 individual interactions between the different tanks. Like we're having to move stuff around and test stuff, like Ramattra's punch being able to go through shield or not. That's a design limitation, and that's probably something we should be trying to avoid, is my argument. As to whether it works, of course it fucking works. Sure, yeah, 5v5 works. The tanks are working. I think it's more boring. It's working. I never said it wouldn't work, but it's just restrictive.
Aggressive changes as necessary for 6v6. You see,
So the point of like the team comp depth of 6v6, this is one of the bigger, stronger points for advocating for it. So much so that I would even argue I would rather have open queue draft rather than 6v6 roll queue, because then you could be drafting lots of different pieces of the different roles in order to make these complicated team comps. And so I understand this at a fundamental level, but also at the same time, it's like, you know, there's the I want to play 2 Roadhogs teammates that you might get, whereas they play Winston Diva, Reinhardt Zarya, and then they have all the space, walk over you nonstop. Like those things happen. The big problem with this is that and I said this on the podcast I think that I was on with Spilo, and I don't think I've heard any other creator say this incredibly key point, that the design of the Overwatch 2 tank
Was that the one where you played on your phone for half an hour? Was that the podcast?
Is inherently boom or bust. If you look at Queen, Doomfist, etc., you know, Roadhog's mixed in there as one of the Overwatch 1 tanks, but one of these shooter tanks that don't provide synergy with another tank necessarily just makes the
shooter tanks. Like Junker Queen is not a shooter tank. Roadhog, I'd say, is not a shooter tank for the most part. Roadhog's explosive, but that's just because he has sharper pressure. It's such a weird way to define it. What is a shooter tank? It's his way of bringing into the discussion that he thinks tanks are more engaging for the more like higher proportion of players if they have a mechanical demand in terms of aiming. That's his argument. And yeah, I agree. Yeah, Malga's a shooter tank. I agree with that. But it's a weird way of defining it, because when we're trying to attract people to the role, we aren't pushing characters in a direction. What we're doing is we're filling out the design space so all things can be represented, right? So we're filling out Malga so that people who like shooter mechanics can play Malga, and we're filling out Winston so that people who don't want to interact with mechanics can play Winston, right? Like we are filling out, we're not pushing it in a direction. I think that's kind of how he ends up. He's called Sigma shooter tank. Yeah, they have to click on people. They'll shoot. You have to click. You shoot. It doesn't mean anything for the most part, or at least I'm not entirely clear what he does mean apart from what I've just said.
The gap of team comps even worse. In Overwatch 1, you had a couple of these heroes like Roadhog that they were widely unpopular to have on your team because of just how much of a detriment it was to the frontline battle. Now we have lots of heroes in the tank category like that, so that's not going to make them better, in my opinion, because any amount of tank synergy, especially like Diva Matrix, Diva was competitively one of the top tanks with the highest pick rates for like the entire history of the Overwatch League in Overwatch 1, because of just how much you could do aiming that.
Diva was overpowered. I'm going to be honest. If Zarya had a relatively similar pick rate, Diva would have been balanced. Diva was actually too good for the majority of Overwatch 1.
Matrix peeling, like a lot of people, they fondly remember that, but then they forget that makes meta dominance, right? You have a hero with like a 97% pick rate across all these different metas because of the tank synergy you can have weaving in and out. And if you don't pick that hero...
Okay, so why... Okay, sure. Like, Diva caused meta dominance. Why was Zarya not picked instead of Diva with Brawl? Is it specifically because Zarya was significantly worse than Diva, and maybe that was the reason for the meta dominance? Or was it the format, right? It seems like Diva was being picked because they were really, really fucking good at in the game. But the problem is that Zarya's gimmick is fragile and mobile with high damage. Yeah, no, Diva is very close and also offers high ground control. Yeah, I agree entirely. Diva also has one of the highest DPS of any characters in the game while they're continuously shooting and no reload. There's a lot of reasons why you pick Diva. I don't think they ever were closely balanced.
And you try to pick a shooter style tank, you just get laughed at because they easily manipulate the space of the game, and you do no damage and they do damage. It's pretty simple, right? Like if you can cycle tank cooldowns in front and make space and the enemy tank only can shoot, well, you're just going to slowly lose over time. That still happens now in 1v1 tank gameplay, but they only can be at one spot at a time. So maybe you can get some damage off and actually fight a squishy or start to manipulate and someone can make something happen. Whereas when you lose the tank battle in 6v6, you don't just...
Very, very interesting there how he goes from one to another. Basically what he was comparing there is he was comparing the front line of Zarya with Reinhardt against another 2-tank combination, and how these guys would win by default on main if they were able to use their resources to basically alternate. But then he immediately went from that to cross all of this out. The alternative is this, right? But that's not the alternative. to like everyone being on main. The alternative in the 6v6 format to everyone being on main is that these two give each other resources, they pump it down main, this person gives a little bit of space, and you have a tank over here. That's the alternative. So essentially what we're doing is we're rotating instead of doing anything else. And sure, this is problematic on linear maps or choke points, being able to only have this thing going on where you're all down main and you're just fighting here. But it was never necessary, and it's got easier to balance over time as we move to more open maps.
It's like stalemate, you like can't move basically, whereas there could be movement in 5v5. There's the potential for the format to do that. Now we'll get into in a little bit later why that might not be fully the case.
Part of the reason why people have such a negative opinion of 6v6 is, as I said earlier, the design and balance of many of the characters at the time. Nowadays, while things can still be pretty ugly, at least there's quick adjustments and things they're willing to try and then dial back if it doesn't work. I don't think we would have had double shield with the current Overwatch 2 balance team for as long as we did. So how did we actually try?
Definitely true. It wouldn't have lasted. Nothing would have lasted as long. My question is, I truly believe that 6v6, based on the peak power of certain synergies and how stable a team comp can be, it inherently makes
Note to Spider's editor, never do this again, it's so red.
difficult for multiple team comps to be meta at any given time. Now, 5v5 is veered a little bit more towards that with support.
6v6 makes it hard for multiple team comps to be viable in the meta at any given time. I don't think that the amount of players on the field determine that. Why would you think this? Does he back this up at all as to why he actually thinks this? Sorry, just 1 second.
Synergies?
Overwatch 2 balance team for as long as we did. So how did we actually try?
Definitely true. It wouldn't have lasted. Nothing would have lasted as long. My question is,
Oh, there you go, guys. Okay, yeah, I get it. Guys, he's just asking questions, guys. He's not making a point. Don't hold him to this. He's just an honest participant in this conversation, asking relevant questions that we should probably think about.
I truly believe that 6v6, based on the peak power of certain synergies and how stable a team comp can be.
Based on the peak power of certain synergies and how stable a team comp can be, the stability of the team comp is based on balance. The peak power of certain synergies is also based on balance, but I understand why he has a little bit of a problem with that, okay? That's the only point he has. The peak power of certain synergies can be a little bit awkward because you have more things to combine. There's no reason why you can't balance around that, obviously, with relatively little effort, but you know.
It inherently makes it difficult for multiple team comps to be meta at any given time. Now, 5v5 is veered a little bit more towards
I'm lost, I'll be honest. You're not the only one. Freedo's also lost.
that with support synergies and support just getting too strong in general, or DPS lowering in power. Like, there's a lot of reasons why 5v5 can get more stagnant as well. Maybe you start to default to the one tank that's like the least counterable, but we've also seen the most competitive hero diversity.
Maybe also known as it has happened, it is happening, it's been a problem for months.
In Overwatch 2 of any iteration of the game, even versus Overwatch 1 patches that were quite good. So this is kind of a problem, I think, for 6v6 defenders, because I would need to see that we can have the same amount of hero diversity as we have in 5v5. Like, you see heroes all the time in ranked, like quick play, you see a bunch of the heroes get played, and it doesn't really feel like most of them are a throw. Whereas in 6v6, if they have a top meta synergy and you don't, it's like, oh my god, like half my team is just throwing. How do I fix this as the individual? Whereas in 5v5, I feel like
I just don't think that's true. Have you fucking tried it, Freedo?
for me personally, on all three roles, I have multiple heroes.
If you don't make any argument, why do I have to make an argument?
Always can go to. They're gonna.
You just state what you think instead of just like giving a reason for what you think or saying it's on experience or anything like that. You say, I have no experience and this is what I think with my completely uninformed opinion.
Contribute in a big way. Now, maybe that's not the case at the highest tiers of gameplay on any given patch because some synergies or heroes are just too overstated. If you look at Sojourn, for example, for quite a long time, or Widowmaker or whoever at any given point, that could be the case.
Isn't that the same as 5v5 if your tank goes on overpick into their tank? I don't know, Lucas. I feel like he's half-baked. And that's the idea that I get off him. This is why I need to respond to it. Because I feel like he says things and then starts fucking quoting himself in order to make points later on. He's like, as I've said many a time, and you're like, yeah, well, it was dumb the first time you said it.
Or often like Winston is kind of the default competitive tank in a lot of cases as well. I think 5v5 is prone to a few skill expression characters being top meta, but the alternative in 6v6.
What the fucking Orisa? Who cares about top meta? Like, what are we talking about, Rita? We're talking about the average rank. That's what you care about. You care about the average rank. That's what you say every time, over and over, damn again. You say, oh, the average rank's all that matters. The high-level players don't care about the average player experience, so they can't talk about this. So why are you talking about the high ranks? At the average rank, people pick fucking Orisa and hate their lives because that's the default thing that is the easiest to play. Like, what are we...
6 is BS combos that were easy to execute, like double shield or multi-tank or whatever. Different versions of Ghost. It always is attempting to be some sustaining BS comp. And if
Freedo's belief is that two good tank picks are so overbearing that 1+ Hog has no chance. Those are you playing Hog versus Sig on Havana or something. Yeah, despite the fact that the devs never made even a slight attempt to balance the mode. The apples to apples comparison is 5v5 before the devs started putting in any effort and people realized that counter swapping was a thing. So Orisa was the default play character in 90% of the maps, and if you don't play Orisa, we just counter swap to Orisa because you can't play Brawl because we're just gonna shut it down with Spin and Spear. Versus 6v6 at the end, and that's what we have to compare against if we're going apples to apples. But I don't want to go to apples to apples. I want to go to their current level of ability to balance the two modes. That's what I want to go for. Sounds like Hog is the issue then? Yeah, it always has been. Always fucking has been. It turns out if 1/7 of your cast is relatively highly picked because of the priority pass and causes massive synergy issues with every other initiator, it causes bad problems to your game. I'm sure there's nothing we could possibly do about that. I'm sure, yeah, it's completely untenable as a problem, surely, right?
If there is skill expression in that teamwork, then those sustaining playstyles will always try to thrive in the meta, and it's hard for that to happen when there's limited defenses, meaning that offense is always biased in 6v6, in 5v5, and 6v6 is the opposite. Defense was always biased.
Offense is always biased in 5v5, and 6v6 defense is biased. You could say the bigger majority of the player base was contributing to the offense, but realistically in 6v6, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that's just because you're coming from, like, Freedo's coming from the idea of poke being meta for the last, like, 2 years of the game. Yeah, and the fact that the maps in 6v6 were so defensively biased by default. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think it's true by default. I don't think it's true in general. I do think 6v6 has a little bit more tendency towards stable poking angles. I'll give him that. And by stable poking angles, I mean a tank with a DPS on an angle with some sort of support behind it. I think that's true. I'm happy to admit that. I don't think that's a problem, especially when it can be moved. You just have clear winners in the die poke brawl category, like D.Va's always been worse than Winston in 5v5 unless dramatically overtuned. Well, that's just the thing. If you make it so that the tanks operate fairly similarly, what will happen is that players will work out who's actually best and use that character. It's just kind of weird that he's arguing the opposite. I just don't think any of his ideas track with reality in any way. It's so hard.
Workshop comes to the player. The workshop is a tool developed in Overwatch 1 that allows people to make up their own custom games and really get quite complicated with it. What the workshop developers attempted to do is bring back Overwatch 1 for those who wanted to try it.
And then Spilo completely ignored them and put 250 HP pools in because he's stupid.
Really competition with the current developers of Overwatch 2, so much as an opportunity to go back and play the game.
Oh, everything could be changed, but I didn't want to put the 200 health pools in because I don't think the devs are going to do it. Shut up. Come on. Why didn't you give it the best chance it could have instead of a random bullshit chance?
Remembered it. My adjustments that I made to this was to introduce the Season 9 projectile and health changes that I feel will not
Spilo, you're stupid? I call Spilo stupid all the time. I call him stupid to his face. I'm happy to do that.
You see, one of the limitations of the workshop code is that with the increase of projectile sizes in Season 9, they were not
He knows I love
able
him.
to convert those. So while they had the original health pools,
This point's a little neither here nor there for me.
Were easier. So it basically meant everyone was getting two-shot. Didn't feel that was a very honest testing ground for what Overwatch
I do love how the one thing that I really have a problem with is Spilo's test. Freedo hasn't even thought about enough to care about.
To have in the future. So what I did is I had post-Season 9 health pools, post-Season 9 projectile sizes, and to give that as our testing environment for today. So overall, we're going to be looking at the good and the bad, noting that no matter the format, there will be upsides and downs.
No, you can't decrease projectile size in Workshop. You can't do anything with the hitbox sizes. You can't do anything with the spreads. There's a load of things that you can't do. You can't also change the armor mitigation. So when 7HSAW had the 10 armor per point in there, all they could do was reduce the armor amounts in order to account for it a little bit. It caused a lot of problems. Yeah, there's a lot of things you can't do. Projectiles is one thing.
On science.
And I agree with him, the projectiles. Okay, so this is an interesting conversation. Once your time to kill gets lower because the damage coming into you is more consistent, players adapt to that over the course of 5 or 6 games and then realize and don't go out into the open for quite as long or know the type of damage that's coming into them. The thing that actually kills people isn't high damage, it's unpredictable damage. Right, it's not high default damage like this. Like, let's say the damage line is like this, because they can predict that and they can move behind a wall. It's the unpredictable damage, because the unpredictable damage peaks to ridiculous bullshit levels and kills you. So what we've done by increasing the projectile hitboxes, if we increase the average damage but made it more consistent. So realistically, I don't think there's that much of a correction you need to make once the players correct themselves to how the new game's flowing. And know kind of to go behind a wall. I definitely think this matters less more in low ranks. I think people are more likely to die to higher damage coming into them by default that's not peaky in the low ranks because they don't predict damage in general. But at the medium to high ranks, I'd say after gold, I definitely think this is the more lethal format than this is. I definitely say that personally. There's like 15 arrows on the screen. Excellent diagramming from me.
So please draw your own conclusions from your own testing, and also reserve final judgment, of course, until you finally actually test the 60.
So essentially, that's all to say that I don't think the change was actually necessary in any way. I don't even think the devs needed to correct for the higher health pools and the bigger projectile sizes. I think they could have just loaded the health pool and players would have corrected for it themselves after a little adjustment period. I guess the reason why they did it is they wanted to keep the game feel the same as in the standard format. Hey, June.
because this is just our best guess. Immediately upon testing, I noticed that sustain watch was a lot weaker. Orisa's rework, the mobility creep of some of the cast, the weaker position of some of the sustain/poke heroes like Baptiste, Brig, and Hanzo, especially in the code, made it feel nearly impossible to just turtle and sustain. And we tried. We tried with the best variation of double shield. We tried running Bat Brig, and a lot of those combinations just didn't really work that well. On the code that we played, and
by the way, I'd just like to mention here that Spilo didn't really know how double shield works. He just picked 2 shields. If you want the best iteration of double shield, what you should have done is get poke enabling tanks that also have a big cooldown to stop initiation into you. Realistically, Sigma Hog is a better double shield poke and is more unhealthy in the same way than Sigma Ram. Because Ram realistically, apart from the AoE, doesn't have anything in. Yeah, Mauga Sig as well. Yeah, you're looking for extremely pokey characters that shut down a Winston jumping into you with a DM on them. And Cardiac Overdrive would essentially do that by default, which is why it needed to be guided so much. So in terms of a test, he didn't actually test the worst variation of it. But it took like 15 minutes of thinking about it for the devs to fix that in the mode, so whatever.
What feels like the direction of Overwatch 2 in general is that mobility and higher skill heroes felt a little bit more dominant.
I don't really like this result, because while he was very good to try to curb the data that he got based on the Season 9 health pool changes and projectiles and whatnot, I feel like this can fluctuate based on balancing. Don't we think? Like, if something's overstated, and if something feels too easy, whenever there's skill expression or some part of the meta that overperforms, the devs always autocorrect. So what we shouldn't do...
when it's the 6v6 format, and we're thinking about it in a vacuum, it's definitely the problem with the format. But when it's something that has been tested, it's well, it can change based on balancing. I'm sure they couldn't balance the game in general in order to make the format work in a better way. We're always going to be talking past each other because he's purposely not connecting on any argument in any way.
Who as the community is trying to balance in a way in our test environment that the devs wouldn't do. Now maybe even it's a better version of the game, but the devs try to balance for all tiers of play, and they really won't ever allow certain skill heroes like Genji, for example, to be dominant.
Hey Gulag, are you in chat still? I see you there on Spilo's chat.
Make any version of the game where double jump Genji is dominating everything, like mobility is king, well, they're just gonna buff Brig or something. That's what's going to happen, because in the metal ranks of play, they hate playing against the flying characters and the double jump characters. They want to be able to easily pick Moira or a character like that who can look at them and stop them from winning. So I struggle to think that this version is one that the devs would implement, and we have to be careful when we're making test environments that aren't gonna mirror what's going to go out to the live game.
This was good because it shows that while
it's so hard to argue with him because everything is the test environment when it disagrees with him, and it's the actual game mode when it does agree with him. It's literally just no true Scotsman. It's like every single fucking time.
While the Overwatch 2 development team has had its hiccups, overall the game has moved a little bit away from the teeth grindingly slow sustain aspects of Overwatch 1, even if you do bring back 66. And this means that one of the big arguments against 66 may not be near as much of a problem as people think. The bad news, well, ignoring the Q times issue, which may be improved with making more appealing tank design,
Never happened. We had 6 years of this. No, the tanks were as appealing as they could be at the start of the game. People still didn't play them, and then they only made them more.
Were they? Is that true, Freedo? Or were there 4 of them and 12 DPS characters? Like, I'm sorry, we literally just tested Overwatch Classic, right? And nobody fucking picking tanks, right? Nobody picking tanks. D.Va isn't appealing on release, Freedo. Yeah, like, nobody's picking tanks. D.Va's not appealing. Nobody played these characters because the characters were awful gaming experiences. They had to make it so that Reinhardt could walk with shield up, and they had to make it so that Roadhog didn't get stunned on the breather, and a load of other adjustments just to make it so that anyone wanted to play these heroes. And he's like, well, when it was launched, people didn't play them because people don't like tanks. And it's like, no, the tanks were just really boring or really awkward or gameplay flow problems, or there just was incredibly low variety of tanks. Like, everyone and their daughters played D.Va on release. I think they didn't actually... I think quite a lot of the people that picked D.Va for lore reasons or other things like that didn't play the game that much or played very much casually. I definitely think there was a big community, but I think that the big community didn't play a lot. If you design fun heroes with fun gameplay loops, people will play them, no matter the role. Surely not, Joseph. Surely not.
More interesting over time. So I'm the most excited to see people play squishier tanks and realize that that's not, while it's more healthy for the game in a lot of ways, certainly is, takes a lot more skill and teamwork and whatnot, a lot of improvements for splitting the tank category. It doesn't make it more popular. I mean, it's going to make it less popular, in fact.
Specific problems stood out.
Ow! What are you on about? What are you on about? The proportion of tanks. I went over a full video on my YouTube a little while ago where I just literally went through the combinations of tanks that are reasonably playable and revealed that before there were maybe like 15% of the cast that was realistically playable in terms of the combination for tank, whereas it was like 80% of the cast are DPS, and now it's like 50. Right? The tank flexibility, variety, and ability to play different things has just massively increased in terms of synergy, in terms of actual heroes and gameplay variety.
And we're gonna go into
so how do you do that? How do you disagree with this? Where do you disagree with this? What's the argument? It's always, well, I don't think that's gonna happen every fucking time.
Very thorough detail. Number 1, the space problem. Space is just generally more contested in 66 with or without double shields, often limiting solo capability to retake that space. Some of this is a stylistic choice, however.
Okay, hold on. What did you just say?
I say
limiting solo capability.
this is the part that I disagree with Spilo on. I think I'd say a good third of the problems that Spilo identified here was self-inflicted by the format he chose. And I made a fairly decent response to him on that. I did say I would make it as a YouTube video at some point, but then I am bad at creating stuff.
So this means you can't move without your team. Whereas in the self-regen, extra health, everything's sustainable, more deathmatchy style of Overwatch 2, if you want to go get a good spot on the map, and you know it's the power position, you know it's the one that can win the game for the team, you can go get it. Can't do that in 6v6.
Number 2 is the hero problem. 66 did not seem to solve many of the tank hero design.
And this is the one thing that I give a little bit of ground on this. By default, I do give it. But this is the argument, like the two things. Like, there's one thing over here of, like, things are contested, and then there's another thing over here that is, the things that are contesting you can fight. So in 6v6, there's a lot of angles that are contested, but you have a reasonable chance of fighting them. In 5v5, the angle's just naked and bare, and then once you get to it, you can shoot into the middle. But when the tank does sweep your angle, by default you lose that. So it's a bit of a dealer's choice kind of thing. I definitely say that Spilo made it worse, specifically on this side, by making it so that contesting an angle against a tank was a lot harder to do because of the health pools. I think that's true. I do believe 6v6 are more positions to get to. You mostly disagree with this? I think it's massively overstated, personally, Flute. We've been playing 6v6 every weekend for months at a time. It's good that... Did Freedo even play the 6v6 test? Don't be stupid. No, he didn't play it, you idiot. Why would he play something he's going to make an hour-and-a-half video, like, talking about? You just shove your uninformed shit opinions into the ether, don't you? That's how you do it as a YouTuber, I'm pretty sure. And Freedo said in that other video, if we watch it, hopefully he's back on form with how he was when the game first released. And just, was this how he always was? I don't know. I watched quite a bit of this stuff back in the day, but I don't remember it being this bad.
Even with some of the balancing efforts done by the 66 developers. We're going to elaborate deeply on both of these points because both are extremely important to fixing 66 in the future. First off, let's talk about the space problem. Many of the 66 fears comes from bad memories of being held hostage in a 2CP choke with double shield. The good news is that while space was an issue, it was less of an issue than I expected, partly due to the reduction of sustain watch, what we talked about earlier.
Good news.
Will you make a short video responding to Freedo and just play on your phone for the full time? The tri-linear design of the maps means 3 routes, and you have one for main tank, one contested by the off tank, and the third is free still. Yeah, I think the argument is that realistically in 5v5 you have more chance of one of those routes being completely free. I agree, you still do have one route that's more contested by the DPS, but I would say, Flu, on the other side, that if you have 2 tanks that are likely to swap to your angle in order to stop you, they are going to do it more often than if there's 1 tank by default, because there's 2 people instead of 1 that might do it. So just by Brownian motion, you're going to get more tanks on your angle, right?
This map design in Overwatch 2 has evolved for the better. That being said, even without as bad chokes, there's still a clear increase in defender's advantage in 66.
The map design saves a lot of things. And I think, like, one big, strong benefit to 6v6 would be that they might just rework all of the maps again, if they have to, right? Like, let's say the game's going to 6v6, we'll just take out all this cover, and now you need two tanks again to move across, but overall, more pathways. We don't even play the game modes that were the worst for these choke holds, but the point is there's still going to be plenty of spots where you can choose to deny access, and then the game becomes about chokes again.
Are there, Freedo? Or are you just talking absolute shit because you haven't even looked at it? That's the main question for this entire video. Is that actually true? Or are you just randomly saying words that mean nothing because you have no interest in trying the mode?
Even with the best possible map design.
As a tank setup plus proximity, being able to close the distance, is still a major factor in controlling space. Let me demonstrate. So if we look here, Havana first defense here. Essentially, you have 2 tanks split on either side of the choke. In Overwatch 2, with 5v5, there's more space for the enemy team to rotate around right side to attack the high ground, and it's a little bit harder for the enemy team to control that space. If there's anybody controlling that space, it's going to be a DPS or support, which is a little bit easier to clear out at that proximity. However, if you replace that DPS with a tank, that tank is very difficult to clear out.
A diva. This diva means nothing can ever happen here.
I feel like that's more on Diva's balancing in the 66 game mode, personally. I feel like Diva should have had some more kind of like residual value on main in order to enable the skill to value curve to be up that high in terms of shutting down angles at high rank. But they never tried to balance it in any way, shape, or form. They just put micro missiles on the character that necessarily makes this kind of a problem work.
So poke that tank out, you risk running into the enemy tank or the enemy DPS. And to close the distance to quote unquote brawl that tank out, well, that's just a lot harder to do to a tank than it is to a DPS or support. Anytime there's any sort of choke where a tank can basically play around a corner, contest space, close the sight lines, it can feel a little bit harder to retake.
2 tanks in the way. Take a left, take on the right.
Case on a lot of maps.
Don't worry, we got a wrecking ball. Everyone loves retaking with this hero.
Although interestingly enough, on Flashpoint, just because of how broad.
Well, let's look at this again. Like he's using this as an example. He's hoping that you just think this is obviously clear to understand.
So it's an interesting one here because what's happening is the enemy team
This is annoying to retake on 5v5 as well.
The enemy team have a Winston and another tank up here blocking. So they have 1 tank here, 1 tank over here. You have your Ram trying to clear this, and your Wrecking Ball still in spawn back there. If you see the Wrecking Ball rolls past later, they actually choose to go in on the off angle. If you note here, if anyone's worked out, there's a fucking door free down there for the DPS to occupy right now. Yeah, there's a door free. If somebody actually occupied that door, there's another angle to use. And this is probably the worst example of a big choke in the map that's problematic. So if the DPS goes down there, the Winston drops, then we have 2 tanks versus 1 tank, and we win this, right? It's dynamics to the balancing of where we put characters. It makes no sense to say that 2 tanks can block it, because the 2 tanks blocking things only really matter, and being better by default at the brawl only really matters when you have a straight linear fight with no off angles whatsoever. The moment you have 1 off angle, it makes no sense to make this argument. It just makes no sense. But I want to force a 5-man through the Winston who can zap us by the corner. I want to. Yeah, and I still say, do you know what? In low ranks, this is likely to happen more often, where people are stupid and people are going to try and barrel in a line. But if you're a DPS player and you want the ability to make an impact, all you have to do is learn that going to an off angle and doing stuff there is more interesting, and you'll immediately climb up ranks. Yeah, we do have to make some accounting for very stupid players barreling their head into a brick wall over and over again because they're stupid. I agree, that is a problem, but it doesn't mean that there is not depth here that lower players can learn in literally 1 sentence in order to fix the problem. But Rolfie's talking about lower rank players that sit on main the whole game. Yeah, so we have to balance the entire game around the players that are just going to barrel straight into main over and over, WM wanting at the cart, is the argument. And I don't think that's true. I just don't think that's true. I agree that there is some thought to be made for these type of players, but I don't think that all brawl scenarios have to be roughly equal so that you have a chance of pushing out a brawl, and all off angles need to be cleared so you have like a 100% surety of being able to push that without being contested. No sense. No sense.
But any choke that looks like this, not only do you have to stay with your team in 6v6 just to survive anyway.
Get fucked. No, you don't. Piss off. That's just not true in any way. Like, 1 tank is there, 1 tank is there, the map is open, go over there, it's strictly better. All you have to do is space yourself a little bit right there. Like, if Spilo just walked around there, they'd be infinitely better right now. Just go down there, do a 5-orb, the Winston comes for you, literally just walk away. That's all you do, and you are absolutely fine. Shut up that you have to barrel down main because you have 2 tanks in your team. Shut up. It doesn't make sense. It's not true. It's just not true.
You have to clear these angles and push these tanks out just to play the game. There's 1 shield to the right, 1 shield to the left, and we're retaking with a Ramatra and a Wrecking Ball. It's so...
We're not retaking with the Wrecking Ball. The Wrecking Ball just got out of spawn right now. The Wrecking Ball's only just back. So it was 1 ram against 2 enemy tanks on 2 different angles at the top, and nobody on their team even slightly tried. This is the worst case scenario for very stupid players, and it is easily fixable, like with just 1 sentence to the player.
Easy for anything to look at that direction.
And the weird part is the fix to it is to go to the unoccupied angle that you claim doesn't exist.
You don't have mitigation. How do you get through this? How do you retake onto the map? And look, they only lost the first point not so long ago. This is their respawn after this. Maybe there was 1 fight here, let's say.
We watched that fight. Yeah, they staggered.
How hard is this to do? They put 1 on cart, they put 5 up on these doorways, and you're 6 because you don't have the right heroes. You've got Ram Ball, which is just
yeah, Ram would be a good pick to push the top anyway. He's actually wrong about this as well. The Ram is a good pick to push out the Winston and whatever other tank was up there. I didn't actually see what they were on the left side. The Ram is actually a very good option for pushing this, especially a very good option for pushing this solo.
You're going to be a tank line, right? You've got a bad tank line. Whereas
it was Sigma Winston, yes. Like you can literally just walk at the Sigma. That's absolutely fine. The Winston's still going to cause you problems, but you're 1 tank against 2 tanks, so of course it's going to cause you issues.
You just had 1 of these guys, right? And then you, as the flanking Curie or flanking Tracer or Sniper or whoever, you see the tank here, you can go to the right, and you automatically are in a squishy trade. This is what he was explaining earlier, right? About the space control.
So we can go further into this analogy because we've done the 6v6 scenario here. Now let's do the 5v5 scenario. Do you know who's up here, guys? Against your Ram? Who's on this corner in 5v5 when your Ram's here pushing main? Who's on the corner, guys? Who is it? We all know who it is. It's not Sigma. Not for the majority, it's fucking Orisa. There you go. You have an Orisa here, and the Orisa's just shutting you out, cycling cooldown, sitting in the door. Maybe they use an ultimate. Maybe they parallel in nano into it. There's nothing you can do. Oh, but you can go contest this. Well, you can go contest that in both modes. We've already shown that if you have a disadvantage on main, it necessarily means that the angle on the side is more open. If it's just the Sigma here against a Ram, and the Winston's over here contesting this, then you win this by default. You're happy to go down main. What crazy things to say. It's literally the potatoes comparison between the 2 modes and the dichotomy that you have between the 2 problems in the modes. Yeah, like they're fairly similar, they're fairly relatable, but I don't think there's a problem that is significantly better or worse in either mode.
Yeah, tank line, right? You've got a bad tank line. Whereas in 5v5, you just had 1 of these guys, right? And then you, as the flanking Curie or flanking Tracer or Sniper or whoever, you see the tank here, you can go to the right, and you automatically are in a squishy trade. This is what he was explaining.
You see the tank here, you can go to the right, and you're automatically in a squishy trade. Okay, so we got our Ram here. They've got the Orisa here. Cool. We can go into a squishy trade. Cool. That's true. We've got a Ram here. They've got an Orisa here. They've got a Winston here. We can go into the squishy trade. They've got a Ram here. They've got an Orisa there. They've got a Winston down here. We go into either a tank versus DPS trade, which isn't favored towards a tank. I want to be very clear that a tank versus squishy fave is not favored towards a tank necessarily. That's based on balancing, always has been based on balancing. It's not a squishy trade, you have Bull right there with you. Very true, that's the other side of it. So, like, my argument is that this squishy trade on the side with 250 health pools is less favored towards the DPS. That's my general argument, but he's just so wrong about this. He's not right in any way. 67% dislikes.
Or whoever, you see the tank here, you can go to the right, and you automatically are in a squishy trade. This is what he was explaining earlier, right? About the space control aspect of this. We'll mute this and look at his example. My question is, do we want a tank here on the left, making sure that this will never
How can you be so
worth your
wrong
time?
consistently?
Or the reality is, like at the higher tiers, maybe just pulling this tank off, right? Surviving at all. Like, you're not expected to even get a kill here. Your goal is to move the tank and force it to peel, so then maybe you have an advantage here.
Yeah, space control. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about space control. You have to fight the tank and move the tank. You can blink past the tank, that's fine. But the idea is that if the Reinhardt's there and the D.Va's there and you're a Tracer and you have a Harmony Orb on you, you actually win the fight against the D.Va when the D.Va's not a kaiju god that runs over the entire lobby in 6v6. You win that fight, the D.Va has to go back to main, you've won that angle for your team. Compared to the opposite, which is by default, your tank's there and you go over here and you just get it for free or you get to do a 1v1 fight. It's not necessarily better or worse. It just depends whether you want to be a DPS fighting a DPS or you want to be a DPS fighting either a tank or a DPS, right? Or being free. So it's either DPS or free. I just don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. How do people consistently... It's like they've repeatedly said this to themselves and never thought about whether it's actually true. I don't know how we got here. Freedo is learning basic space control by the looks of it. What we talk, you can say I don't like being a DPS fighting a tank. It does not mean you're disadvantaged being a DPS fighting a tank. It never has. That was always untrue. If a D.Va is here with a Harmony Orb and you are a Tracer here with a Harmony Orb, you win. If a D.Va's here with a Mercy and you are a Tracer here with a Mercy, you win. That's just by default. Now, I will give you that if you are a D.Va here and a Tracer here and there is no support on either of you, it is more likely for the D.Va to be able to win that fight and push out the Tracer, okay? Do you know what we have there? In order to favor the fight towards the Tracer, do you know what we have? This funny, interesting map design thing. What do we have that favors the fight towards the Tracer, guys? It's why we fucking put health packs on the map. That's the point, right? That was the whole idea of having fucking health packs. There's a health pack there. Man, we literally purposely designed the maps with minis or megas based on how advantaged we want DPS to be in a 1v1 duel against the tanks in that kind of space. Like, that's just how it works. The DPS normally have more access to the health pack because they're more maneuverable and can get the health packs more often. And the smaller the health pool on the health pack, the better it is for the DPS in general. Space is more competitive in 6v6, but you can actually win the 1v1 and force someone back if the enemy is not a raid boss tank in your face. Yeah, 100%. And people aren't wrong to say they like the 1v1 DPS fight more than the 1v1 tank versus DPS fight. They're not wrong, but it doesn't mean that you can't do anything. It doesn't mean the angle is blocked. It doesn't mean that you're by default losing. It just means you have to actually fight for space.
But in 5v5, one tank usually on the cart. It's like the most
Man,
efficient place for a tank to be, right?
How do people just repeat this ad infinitum like idiots? I just don't get it.
This Tracer gets to fight a squishy instead of have their damage denied indefinitely by a tank. That's the difference.
Reactionary, I don't know if health packs should stay because we have the passive healing now. This is actually the argument against tanks having proportional healing from the 5-second passive. It's actually the argument against it. If you are a Tracer, you need to be able to consistently go back and fight this guy. That's what the health packs are for. If you are a Tracer versus a D.Va and both of you are on a half health and the passive healing kicks in, you do not get an advantage from the passive healing like you get from a health pack or like you get from residual healing. So if you want this to be balanced in terms of the passive, the D.Va should be healing the same amount in total as the Tracer gets. So that's the argument against proportional healing for tanks. Yeah, I think tank proportional healing is a mistake in 6v6 for Bull at least. Yep, that's the problem with that in general. Yeah, removes the need for a second mega too often for Bull uptime. I agree. I think proportional healing is probably an issue. I feel like Bull is the biggest health pack enjoyer. Yeah. And proportional healing makes it a lot harder to whittle down a Bull if you're somebody like a DPS who have the lower health pool because you do not get that additional amount from the passive healing or from the health packs.
Or the lopsided nature of 6v6 would mean maybe this player doesn't even pick a good tank. Maybe one team has the good tanks and the other team has bad tanks, and then this player is also effective, and you're hoping that your non-mitigation tank somehow offsets the value of how easy it is to just hold Matrix against the damage.
I'd love for Freedo to give me a specific example of what tanks are bad combinations. Like, is he thinking Rein with Roadhog on defense? Is he thinking Rein with Roadhog on attack? What does he think the Rein with Roadhog is doing? Like, what if we have Rein here and D.Va here? I think that's what he's saying. The D.Va can contest this. That's kind of like the worst case scenario and the best synergy that their team can have. We have maybe a... What's the worst case, right? It's going to include Roadhog, I'm going to guess. And then one other tank. What's the other tank? What's the worst combination? D.Va? Roadhog D.Va? Is that fair enough? Yeah, so Roadhog D.Va. Zarya? Yeah, Roadhog Zarya. We can say Roadhog Zarya. Roadhog Zarya. Bullhog? Bullhog is an interesting one. They're a little bit more divey, so I won't go with that for the example, just because we're talking about a little bit more a static comp. Bullhog is actually a good combination, and always was a good combination. So we've got Roadhog Zarya against Rein D.Va. Rein D.Va wins against Roadhog D.Va, Roadhog Zarya in the 1v1 fight. I think we all agree with that. I think we're all comfortable with that. Okay, so these idiots who are stupid are going to stay here and bash their head into Rein D.Va. By default. They're going to bash their head into it. The angle's open. Worst case scenario, the angle's open. Next scenario, right? Maybe your Zarya is smart and goes on the slight off angle on the opposite angle, right? I'd say that Roadhog Zarya actually beats Rein D.Va by going on this, and the angle's still open, okay? Another scenario, let's say they group up Zarya there, and the D.Va goes over here. D.Va's over here. They go in there, they win the fight against the Reinhardt, because they actually have better linear pressure, and the Matrix can't go that far. That's contested, okay? But we can actually fight this and move out the D.Va while their tanks are winning the angle. Every single argument seems to have some sort of implication that the second tank doesn't fucking exist or disappears off the map for some reason. I don't really understand. This is fine. We're happy to do. This is worst case scenario. The worst case. Like, can somebody think me a worst case scenario than this? That's a basic frontline exchange in 66, isn't it? Yeah. So what is his example? Why is he... give me the worst case, show me how it's bad, generalize it to the rest of the types of interactions that you can have, and then I'll engage with your argument. But you're not even giving me an example, so how can I argue against you? You're just wrong. You're actually just wrong.
A lot of maps, King's Row, Flashpoint, and so on. Although, interestingly enough, on Flashpoint, just because of how
he's really frustrating me now. Like, really frustrating me. Mauga Hog, exactly the same as Zarya Hog. I think that's even better than Zarya Hog. Aggressively against their tank linearly. I think that might actually be better because they're going to shell out more damage, and the Zarya's not guaranteed to be charged.
66 felt a lot less congested.
I like this point a lot, actually. I think like the Flashpoint maps being massive, biggest run backs, biggest space, 6v6 might be the best on that mode. And it kind of makes sense too. If you've ever played a game like Battlefield or something, you think about the map design of those bigger maps. Having more players makes the most sense there, and it makes the least sense.
He likes uncontested angles. There's going to be more uncontested angles in the bigger maps. Yeah, sure, I get why he likes it. But why didn't he back up his point? Is it because he can't back up his point?
Smaller map, and we just got Clash, right? I think you're really going to notice, and Control even, in Overwatch 1 mode, the choke points that are existing on all of the Control maps, I hate with 2 tanks. And they're not great. Still, like those are the map designs I think they should look at again. A lot of the other maps like Hybrid they've taken a look at, but it's not great to go off a bridge in Lijiang. People remember it, but it's kind of BS gameplay as far as I'm concerned. And having multi-tanks to gum that up with defender's advantage, retaking into space is just so annoying. You have to play the MOBA game before you get to play the shooter game in that instance.
I did the maps were 66 felt a lot.
Do you mean fight the D.Va on that angle? Is that what he means by playing the MOBA game? Is that what we're saying? Is by default what he means is a DPS versus a DPS is the only interesting interaction in the game. Does he say a DPS versus a tank with support is boring? Is that just his argument? Does he not like DPS versus tank with support? Is that what we're saying? That's fine. You can make that argument. It's not even wrong to make that argument. I just really need to know what the fuck he thinks so I can actually argue against it.
A lot less congested. You see, the problem here is that a lot of people like to push out this narrative, which
interacting with tanks currently is really boring. Yeah, really boring. Really damn boring. The other argument, of course, Gulag, is that if we're on that map and it's D.Va Reinhardt, and then you're on Hog and Zarya, and your players are really stupid, at least there's a good chance that one of those guys are going to fuck up at some point and die through random bullshit. If we all are idiots and we all shell damage down main, there's a higher chance of somebody dying. If we're talking about the 5v5 mode and we just have Zarya versus D.Va, then realistically, we have no control over whether D.Va dies. No control.
Definitely true to extent that in 66 it's easier to poke out the tank because you have less HP. But the problem with that is that's not always possible with Defender's advantage. You see, tanks in Overwatch 2 largely as a whole are all stronger up close. Now, they're not necessarily stronger up close to each other, but they're definitely stronger up close to squishies. For example, Sigma is largely seen as a poke tank, but if you get up close to Sigma as a squishy, that's a really, really bad matchup for 99% of the count.
It's not, and it shouldn't be. So that's a really interesting one. It's not a bad matchup, and it shouldn't be a bad matchup as long as both of you have a similar amount of HPS in terms of support. As long as it's similar amount of HPS, you should be able to win this fight over the course of 2 or 3 seconds. If you're the same amount of numbers on that angle. If it's literally Tracer versus Sigma, and both of you have a Harmony Orb, you should win as a Tracer. The rest is a balancing concern.
So the problem with that is that anytime that you have any corners, choke points where there are multiple lines of attack, it can be very easy as defending tanks in 66 to choke out all.
I love these points because somebody else is making an argument and I have no arguments whatsoever. All I do is just make my completely biased opinion with no relevant touch point of context, so I haven't even tried the mode.
Lines and force you to close the distance onto the tank to create space. It's not so easy to just simply take an angle and poke out the tank and a lot of these choke points. And while
it's only a bad matchup because landing accretion is a win condition for Sigma winning the matchup up close, but I'd even argue that yeah, there's quite a lot of DPS that can get around accretion or do other things with, like against accretion. And I also argue that since accretion has a slowdown on Sigma, even if the hit scan are playing properly around the corner, the hit scan actually do win that matchup against accretion. But I do agree that accretion is a big skill check onto DPS, like a big skill check onto DPS. So it is worse at lower ranks. I agree with him on that.
Do get the opportunity to do that, it's very effective. If you don't, you're really relying off of your tank to take the space for you.
I think a big problem when you listen to a guy like Sam explain the inverse of this, right? Like Sam's argument is tank health points are lower, so you get the right positioning, you poke the tank out, and you force them out and make space. Whereas tanks in Overwatch 2, they're built to just be able a wall if they manage their resources appropriately.
Yeah.
And a lot of players don't like that.
It's nice to hear him state somebody else's point so that he can make his argument against it. That's really nice. I wonder if he ever bothers to.
Because it's a lot of stats. Now, of course, the counter argument that often isn't said is, well, you're supposed to get space. You're supposed to flank the other direction. You're supposed to find different matchups. You're not supposed to expect to beat the tank from the front only or on the cart. Because even as Spilo says here, interestingly enough, this is something I did forget about Overwatch 1. There's certain tanks that kind of would lose against other squishies because of the health points being lower, right? So right now, Sigma against any...
He forgot about it? And that was a word salad as well, because he starts talking about Sunito's position being good and correct, that you can win them, and then he turns around, like, he got there in a really circuitous way. I don't know what his brain was doing there.
Squishy up close is heavily favored, and every tank works that way, which is kind of nice in a way because you don't have to worry about certain squishies dominating your tank fight and forcing you to play in these really precise positions. If you get on an enemy squishy one-on-one as any tank in the game, you feel favored, and that's kind of a good thing for the playability of the game at an average tier of play. Whereas at the higher tier...
Okay, so he's saying that tanks... What? So he's agreeing that squishies are favored sometimes against tanks and can fight angles against tanks when they are contesting in angles. He did give that, right? He actually agreed with that. Think he's talking about tank busters? Yeah, I think he's talking about tank busters too. And then he starts complaining about he's like, well, the angle's always blocked by a tank and that's really boring. And then he turns around and he's like, and that's a problem when they can fight the angle. And it's a problematic thing for lower skills because you have to work out whether you can beat the DPS. And it's so much easier as a tank player if you win every single DPS fight. Like, what? You don't get both. You don't get to argue both sides of the coin at the same point. Like, what? Yeah, like, it makes no sense. Why would you want it to be easier to play tank into DPS if the problem is tanks not being easy to play into DPS not being easy to play into tanks because you can't do anything? Tanks should just kill you. I put summary for Freedo's argument and off topic. Is this good?
You give me back the sack, and I'll give you 3 wishes.
Make it 5.
4.
3. Take it or leave it.
Fuck's sake.
Here's what they want to be able to do is get more strategic position and slowly move the tanks out of the way and get map control. The problem I have is that from a casual point of view, if you play the wrong tanks, if you don't have teamwork, that just...
See that you see the loaded phrasing here? The loaded phrasing of you need to move tanks out of the way. Do you know what he said? Slowly, right? That's the loaded phrasing. He considers to be a slow version of play to have to fight a tank. And I agree, it is slower. I agree, obviously, like, DPS duels result in the DPS dying on one or either of the sides. Tanks duels in play, you have to actually be able to get them out of the angle. But he implies that that's a bad thing instead of important texture to add to the game. That is one of the things that I say was positive, that you can actually take a fight in a slower way against a tank and whittle them down and move them around and do the resource war in that way. Interesting, like, the phrasing he uses sometimes.
Isn't playable in the same way. It's more playable at a higher tier, it's less playable at a lower tier, and that...
Gulag, I'm trying to translate as much as I can, I promise you. I'm trying really hard here. This is the most effort I ever have on stream. I want to just specify.
It's pretty problematic when you start to look to the format to solve some of these problems that otherwise are going to exist. A lot of the problems are universal Overwatch problems in Overwatch 1 or 2. And
wait. Sorry, he did a brain thing again. It's a Freedo rewind.
What I want to be able to do is get more strategic position and slowly move the tanks out of the way and get map control. The problem I have is that from a casual point of view, if you play the wrong tanks, if you don't have teamwork, that just isn't playable in the same.
We're not talking about tanks. Like, Freedo, we're actually not talking about tanks. We're talking about DPS versus tank on and off angle. Like, he just... Do you see him change the conversation there? He said that DPS can have a favorable matchup against tanks, and then he said that this is a bad thing because that means that tanks have a harder time playing into DPS in obviously the 6v6 format. And then he goes on and says that if you don't play the right tanks, you can't move the tanks. Was that the third point there? One more time. We're gonna see if he...
same tier of play. Whereas at the higher tiers, what they want to be able to do is get more strategic position and slowly move the tanks out of the way and get map control. The problem I have is that from a casual point of view, if you play the wrong tanks, if you don't have teamwork, that just isn't playable in the same way. It's more playable.
Why? What? We weren't talking about tanks. We were talking about the DPS versus the tank fight on the off angle, right? That's what we were talking about. Was it not what we were talking about? What discussion were we having? What? Yeah.
Playable at a higher tier, it's less playable at a lower tier, and that is pretty problematic when you start to look to the format to solve some of these problems.
Whoa, no.
It's less playable at a lower tier, and that is pretty problematic when you start to look to the format.
Why is it less playable at a lower tier? Because the topic was DPS's matchup against tanks, right? So I really want to... Okay, I know this is belaboring the point, but I want to go over this because this is fucking insane, and this is terrible argumentation, okay?
Flank the other direction. You're supposed to find different matchups. You're not supposed to expect to beat the tank from the front only. Or
okay, we're just like,
for example, Sigma's
we're doing this, okay? We're doing this.
But if you get up close to Sigma as a squishy, that's a really, really bad matchup for 99% of the cast. And so the problem with that is that anytime that you have any corners, choke points where there are multiple,
I love these points.
It can be very easy as defending tanks in 66 to choke out all those sight lines and force you to close the distance onto the tank to create space. It's not so easy to just simply take an angle and poke out the tank and a lot of these choke points. And while if you do get the opportunity to do that, it's
sorry guys,
effective.
just 1 second. I really need to pin this down. This is crazy.
For you.
I think a big problem when you listen to a guy like Sam explain the inverse of this, right? Like Sam's argument is tank health points are lower, so you get the right positioning, you poke the tank out, and you force them out and make space. Whereas tanks in Overwatch 2, they're built to just be a wall if they manage their resources appropriately. And a lot of players don't like that because it's a lot of stats. Now, of course, the counter argument that often isn't said is, well, you're supposed to get space. You're supposed to...
Okay, players don't like this. This is fine. We're happy with this. We're on board. The counter argument against this is that you need to get space. That doesn't fucking make sense. That's not a counter argument. That is to the point. You get space. That's not a counter argument. That's just an extra point. I don't know what the phrasing was there. I don't know what happened in his brain. But
the counter argument that often isn't said is, well, you're supposed to get space. You're supposed to...
No, that's not a counter argument. That is the point. Was that him saying that's a counter argument against what 2 tanks winning against DPS and players don't like this? Or was that a counter argument against this? Or was that further to the point? Hard to say.
To flank the other direction. You're supposed to find...
Get space, take empty angles. Hi, August. Hi, August. What's this? This is insanity.
Find different matchups. You're not supposed to expect...
Find different matchups. So it's really not a counter argument. This is just further to the point. In Overwatch 2, you're not meant to win against the tank, so you take angles and do different matchups. I think the first point was made to key onto this.
To beat the tank from...
I think the space part is supposed to be the argument against squishy versus tank matchups. You're not supposed to win as a squishy. Okay, so point 3 is arguing against point 2 and players not liking it, right?
The front only, or on the cart, because even as Spilo says here...
So this is talking about... That's talking about 5v5. 5v5. Because I do think there is some sense to be made from him. I just think it's very mixed and jumbled, so it gets like the argument gets tangled together.
Here, interestingly enough, this is something I did forget about Overwatch 1. There's certain tanks that kind of would lose. I guess
that's what you literally just said. You literally just said that. So that was Sam's argument, and you're like, okay, Sam makes this argument. People say that Overwatch 2 is more boring because players don't like not winning against a tank. You should go around the tank, and Spilo has made the same argument as Sam. I forgot this incredibly obvious point because I didn't think about this video for more than 2 minutes before turning on the camera. Okay, cool.
Against other squishies because of the health points being lower, right? So right now, Sigma against any squishy up close is heavily favored, and every tank works that way, which is kind of nice in a way because you don't have to worry about certain...
Okay, so he's cool. So yeah, cool. So that's 66, and then so 5 in 5v5, it's nice for tanks who always counter. Okay, sure.
Squishies dominating.
That's an okay thing to say. You can have that as an opinion.
Your tank fight and forcing you to play in these really precise positions. If you get on the
squishies, force you to play in precise positions.
An enemy squishy one-on-one as any tank in the game, you feel favored, and that's kind of a good thing for the playability of the game at an average tier of play. Whereas at the higher tiers, what they...
Why is it a good thing at the average tier of play? And this is what I find. I find a lot of loose points that aren't argued for, in my opinion. He's saying it's nice because, and I can fill in his argument here. I'm fine with that. Lower rank players aren't as good at knowing matchups, easily readable. Cool. So it's easily readable at low rank. I kind of get that. That's an okay argument. He didn't really make it, but I'll fill that in for him. That's fine.
Want to be able to do is get more strategic position and slowly move the tanks out of
What? So 66. Sorry, Sam wants to move tanks through strategy. Cool.
the way and get map control. The problem I
I'm on
have
board.
is that from a casual point of view, if you play the wrong tanks, if you don't have team
Okay, 7. If you play... And you see where we go off the fucking deep end here, guys. The wrong tanks, you can't move the enemy tanks in 66, right? You see, right? 1, on a line. 2, adjacent, interesting context, still arguing for the same point. This, Spilo's made the same argument that I've already said, but I've said that I didn't think about it, despite it being pretty much the most common argument. Next, it's nice for tanks to always counter squishies. I don't agree, but fair enough, you can do that. 66, Sam wants to move through tanks moving. Cool. 7, if you play the wrong tanks, you can't move the enemy tanks. So this whole argument has been about DPS against tanks, and then he just turns, right? And he's not talking about the same conversation immediately.
teamwork, that just isn't playable in the same way.
No.
Tanks, the problem I have is that from a casual point of view, if you play the wrong tanks, if you don't have teamwork, that just isn't playable in this.
And then he makes no point. He just said, not playable. Casual. Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the interesting thing, reactionary, isn't it? Because the moment that he gets to the end of a thought and pivots and doesn't know where he's going, he goes straight back to this, right? Straight back to the top thing. High-level competitive design players, the opinion doesn't matter for the average type of player. And he just brings it back to that constantly when he doesn't know where the argument's going.
Same way. It's more playable at a higher tier. It's less playable at a lower.
So we aren't even talking about the same conversation. This is completely separate. Like, what? We're not talking about tanks, we're talking about DPS versus tanks. I think what happened here, guys, do you know what I fucking think what happened here? I think he made the argument, he backed himself into the corner halfway through the argument by steel manning the opposition position too much. And then he realized halfway through and was like, shit, pivot. Because he realized the only thing he has is that, okay, I mean, this works theoretically. The angles are really not stuffed out. I guess it's nice for tanks to be more consistently favored in the matchup against DPS for newer players to learn. Sam says you can move tanks, and that makes sense. Red herring deployed, yes. We lit them like the flares, guys. Shoot them into the air like the flares. We accidentally made too much sense. We need to light the flares around them. Red herring argument. You can't steel man too much. You can steel man too much when you're not trying to make an honest argument. That's an easy thing to do.
Tier. And that is pretty problematic when you start to look to the format to solve some of these problems.
Problematic when you look to format to solve these problems. And I really wanted to slow this down for you guys because I really... This is why you struggle with Freedo. This is why. Because halfway through, he will literally pivot on a dime and argue about something else when he realized he made... And I would be fine at saying this is a good point he made. Do you know what? That's a fine point. If you want to argue that, I have no problem whatsoever. But then you work through it all and you realize, and I think he realized that his argument about space didn't make any fucking sense. And then he just pivots.
That otherwise are going to exist. A lot of the problems are universal Overwatch problems in Overwatch 1 or 2. And if we
what does this mean? What does this mean? No, we'll keep going, I guess.
Playable at a higher tier, it's less playable at a lower tier. And that is pretty problematic when you start to look to the format to solve some of these problems that otherwise are going to exist. A lot of the problems are universal Overwatch problems in Overwatch 1 or 2.
We weren't talking about universal Overwatch problems. We were talking very, very specifically about DPS's matchup against tanks and their ability to move DPS tanks out of an angle or fight against tanks in a favored way. That's what we were talking about. What problems are we talking about? Like, genuinely, what are we talking about? You can play the wrong tanks, you can move the enemy tanks, that's not even relevant. Doesn't scale properly with rank? Question mark, question mark, question mark. Deploy the flares, we're not talking about the same topic anymore. Flares out, guys, flares out. Problematic when you look at format to solve these problems? What problems? The problems of the tanks being able to be grouped up? That sentence doesn't even make sense with the previous sentence if you look at it. What are we looking to the format to solve? What's the problem we're trying to solve? The problem we're trying to solve that he was just talking about is the fact that you can pick non-synergistic tank pairings and therefore you can't move it, which isn't related to the previous argument about DPS versus tanks, which seems to favor the argument that both formats are absolutely fine.
And if we over-obsess on trying to make benefits in one way, we're going to like inherit all of the weaknesses of the poor queue times as well as the lack of being able to move the tanks out of the way, and then
he gets to the end of the argument, and then 10 deploy the flares. Queue times, move tanks. MMO team comp builder. Deploy the flares, guys. It's not going well. Man, I can't, man. It's so hard. It's so fucking hard. Oh god, man. But you get me. It's so difficult to argue against him because he's not making arguments. He's just like cutting up and like it's like a stitched together amalgam of 15 different conversations every single time.
Just don't see a team fight, basically. Like that, when I look back to how much chaos is on screen in these 6.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Team comp builder, visual, clutter, team, chokes are bad, and stop team fights. Deploy the fucking flares, deploy all of them. Argument was really bad. We need all of the flares today.
These 6 games, it's like, it's utter chaos. It's less of a shooter game and more of a spam fest. You're playing tiny Overwatch out there.
It can be very easy as defending tanks in 66.
Like quadrillion fallacies, like arguing against that would be so annoying unless you take it apart word for word. But this is the way that you argue against it is pretty simple. You ignore everything he fucking said and go back to the point. Ignore everything he fucking said, go back to the point. Over and over, back to the point. So what are you saying about DPS versus tanks then? So DPS versus tanks is a fine matchup in both like formats. It's actually better in terms of Overwatch 1. Right? It's better in terms of 6v6. So why are we talking about the problems with the format? Why aren't we talking about this? Like, this was the topic. This was the topic. Bring them back. Or you just go down with him and you roll in the shit with a pig, and you just do exactly the same. You deploy as many flares as he does. That's the only way to do it because it's not possible because he's not arguing honestly. He never has been.
Choke out all those sight lines and force you to close the distance onto the tank to create space. It's not so easy to
I didn't turn this stream on with the intention of catching him or the expectation of catching him in such absolute bullshit. I didn't turn it on with that expectation, but I always get here with Freedo. I always get here.
They take an angle and poke out the tank and a lot of these choke points. And while if you do get the opportunity to do that, it's very effective. If you don't, you're really relying off of your tank to take the space for you. The importance of mobility and range to open
Okay,
up.
I need a break. Overwatch Classic, guys, get into the lobby. I'm sorry, I need a break. I can't keep it up. We need a palate cleanser. If we don't have a palate cleanser, I'm gonna go insane today. Okay, palate cleanser achieved. Let's go back. Oh, the insanity must continue. I'm so sorry. Let's go.
It felt very oppressive because to get to the hits.
Weirdly enough, all of the data proves my preconceived notions. It's crazy.
You had to kind of crank through 2 angles that tanks were holding in close range.
Look at all these shields, guys.
Attacking as a hit scan when you didn't have space could feel very miserable because closing the distance with most hit scan characters just isn't really a good option, even if the tanks are a little bit squishier. So finding angles and sightlines felt a lot more difficult. I found the binary impact of hit scan sometimes oppressive in defense, sometimes underwhelming on attack to be a very difficult problem to solve with 66, especially with characters like Widowmaker who
I can solve it, just don't actively make it worse. That's the solve.
From being completely worthless in some situations in our testing to being absolutely untouchable. You are very reliant on your tanks to create space. So this is
All right, I love this point. Hitscan's a very popular role, guys. People like playing hitscan characters. It's the most similar to other shooter games, Call of Duty.
It's such a weird argument that we should be the most similar to other games. Like, yeah, sure, we do have to have that be valid. I agree entirely, but in general, he wants it to be a massive part of the game. I'd say about 40% at the minimum by the looks of it, including the tanks being able to be hit scanned, the sports being able to be hit scanned. For the most part, we have it. Overwatch has the most diverse audience of any game, and they should be cultivating all of the audiences. Yeah, hit scans should be valid. I feel like Spilo actively made them less valid by putting their higher health pools in and making it harder for them to actually go toe-to-toe against any of the tanks. But yeah, it's still hard.
Arent. Basically, every shooter game has a hit scan, and what he's explaining here is that the 2-tank phenomenon, the MOBA gameplay being so much better, it either means your hit scan's untouchable, where you're protected. I mean, look at the shield he's got up here. And then you start
That's not that much protection. It's a very small shield.
playing these shield break. We haven't heard that term shield break in a long time. What a lame idea. What a lame Overwatch 1 idea. Competitively speaking, you wanted to try to like do the math on your shield break versus theirs, and that was part of the calculus of understanding, does our team comp successfully push the enemy tanks out or not?
Yeah, because the tanks were way too... The shields were just big. They were just way too big. Like, that's just true.
That makes your team comp picks more punishing, because if you don't have the right amount of shield break, your team might never shoot an enemy player.
Yeah, that's true. 100% that's true.
Let me say that again.
Yeah,
You might never
100%
get
balance
the
issues.
space
So
or
what
angle
are we
to
even
shoot
talking
the
about?
enemy. Think about that.
He's not even arguing against the mode they're currently testing. He's arguing against literally the mode before they fixed it.
We haven't seen gameplay like this.
I've never tried it, and I can't be asked to see if they fixed it, so I'm just gonna assume they haven't fixed it. It's the best argument that Freedo would ever have. Like, it's so completely asinine.
Our team comp's good, their team comp's bad, and I can't functionally build ult off anyone. That just doesn't happen in 5v5. Like, there's lots of other problems, obviously, of course, but bad hero picks...
It does happen in 5v5. It happens when Arissa's in the game.
Like, bad hero picks have a space to just go play their position in 5v5. If you get into a spot as even weaker damage heroes...
Is Freedo ever going to listen to a reaction to this video? No, Freedo wouldn't listen to a reaction to his video because Freedo's right, so he wouldn't have to listen to any reaction. Because what's the point in listening to any reaction? Because if they disagree with him, they're obviously wrong, so...
Gimmicky, like Symmetra, Junkrat, whatever. Oddly enough, because they at least can hold their spot and see lanes to deal damage, it's less of a... I have to only clear space in a 6v6 choke, right? It's more of a, I'm playing the map. And that's what it comes down to it for me, that it'll be really hard for me to be convinced that 6v6 makes the gameplay better, because what we lost...
Because I'm not trying it!
...was the inability to go play the map. And me as a...
It's going to be really hard to convince me, because I have preconceived notions I have no desire to disprove, and will give you no chance to disprove them. I mean, it's going to be hard to argue against me, because I have no desire to be convinced by the evidence.
A shooter-reliant player, I prefer thinking about the game in terms of map control as opposed to like...
Yeah, there you go, reactionary. He's not watching Spilo's opinion. He's just showing which parts of Spilo's opinion reaffirms his preconceived notions. Yeah. Thank you for the sanity check. I need...
Getting the right picks to even go get it. You know, I want to be able to do it myself as any of the three roles. All right, let's get back to his video because he's kind of going off on one here. And talk about Widowmaker. Another interesting point.
He's going off on one here, and I interrupted him to talk about a different version of the game that he wasn't currently testing in his video about a very specific test he did for the current version of 7HSAW, which is the most likely. And as we've already gathered, the devs, and if people have actually looked at what the devs have revealed for the 66 format from Spilo's interview, I've looked through the notes. It looks like it's very similar to 7HSAW, which means we fucking won! We won, guys!
Remember, Widow was either utterly dominant and untouchable or worthless. And a big 5v5 argument is Widow is just better in 5v5. Well, yes and no. I mean, she's better...
No, where's the and no?
In that she always has a lane to fight. She's always...
Is a derivative of 7HSAW. I was involved in the dev and testing process. Yeah, I feel like it's a strictly worse derivative, but it certainly isn't double shield. And that's what Freedo's arguing against, right, Gulag?
More relevant. It's less that she's going to be irrelevant, but I think she's also quite counterable by dive here. You just got to go play the shooter battle against her, right?
We thought the Spilo code would be a dumpster fire, but it turned out to be decent. Yeah, because the balancing for 7HSKW is very good, and you didn't change that much about it apart from the health pools. It is a bit of a dumpster fire, because I feel about a third of the problems that Spilo complained about in terms of the DPS's ability to fight tanks was specifically caused by changes to that code. And it's really affected the conversation into the future. And that's why I called Spilo and had a complaining session to him on stream, because he'd accidentally gave it a very bad shout. Like, he'd accidentally just caused half of the problems that he expected to be there to begin with. It is hard. Spilo wanted to preserve all breakpoints. I get it. Yeah, no, I do get it. You made it as good as it could be with the health pools, but I do think the health pools are the things that are making it hard for the DPS to be able to fight the tanks in the way that they really used to be able to and currently are able to in your mode.
Whether you beat Widow in 5v5 or not is whether or not your team flanks her right or you counter sniper. It's a shooter game. Whereas in 6v6, it's more of a MOBA team comp builder game. She was still utterly dominant on some maps. This came out a couple...
Wait, we'll go back to this. I briefly skimmed a comment that mentioned it was possibly part of the reason they're ending support for 7HSAW due to legal reasons. Could it be that Blizzard has taken these changes very specifically? My reading of Toasty is that Toasty's been pretty burned out of the project for a little while now and has put a completely disproportionate amount of passion into it compared to the amount they got out of it. Yeah, I seriously doubt it's any legal reasons. I don't see any reason for Blizzard to do anything like that. I think it's as he says, it's come to pretty much the natural conclusion of the mode. That's what it is, right? Yeah, Toasty would have just said something very simple. Even if he couldn't, I don't think it's reasonable. Who wants to move on? Yeah, quite a few of the devs are going over to Marvel Rivals. Gulag, are you going over to Marvel Rivals out of curiosity? I don't think personally that it's going to be even close to as good. Like the third person format of it really screws with me personally, and I think the balancing of it is completely fucked. It's probably more fixable than Overwatch in a way because the devs are more likely to be more receptive than the Overwatch devs. But I mean, we're in the golden age of Overwatch where the devs listen to Spilo, so maybe it's going to be fine, right?
Or you counter sniper. It's a shooter
right,
game.
Let's go for Widow arguments.
Remember, Widow was either utterly dominant and untouchable or worthless. And a big 5v5 argument is Widow is just better in 5v5. Well, yes and no. I mean, she's better in that She always has a lane to fight. She's always more relevant. It's less that she's going to be
When Widow has an uncontested lane to fight, Widow dominates the map. That's it, right?
But I think she's also quite counterable by dive. You just gotta go play the shooter battle against her, right? Whether you beat Widow in 5v5 or not is whether or not your team flanks her.
No, because you don't win by winning the shooter battle against Widow, because Widow is better than on average than the players in the lobby. Widow will always win the shooter battle because she's necessarily favored in the shooter battle. The way to actually win Widow is to play against Widow is to play the MOBA battle, to play the space battle. You don't fight Widow on her own terms. That's kind of the whole point, right? That's the point.
Right, or you counter sniper. It's a shooter game. Whereas in 6v6, it's more of a MOBA team comp builder game. She was still utterly dominant on some
Sorry, let's just there we go. RPG team comp builder. There you go. RPG team comp builder.
maps. And I think this came out a couple weeks ago, so maybe he feels differently about it if he tested it now with Havana having its sightlines toned back in. But even old Overwatch 1 Widowmaker dominant maps like Junkertown were in his testing, reworked now to have the sightlines reduced. So it's like, yeah, I don't know. Like the up and down performance of heroes is indicative of exactly my point of how much more punishing 6v6 is to the meta. Because if you have heroes
What the fuck are you on about? I'm trying so hard. I'm trying so fucking hard. We go to talk about Widow. He makes a completely asinine point as to the way that you fight Widow is to be able to shoot them in a shooter, despite that being like not even a slight part of how to fight Widow. He said it's more to do with the MOBA side of it, which is true and will always be true. And that's why Widow's so much more oppressive in 5v5, because there are less MOBA elements and less space control elements of the map that don't exist in a 1v1 fight. And then he's just like, oh, well, I don't know which one's better or worse. Widow dominates the game in 5v5 to a ridiculous degree because on average at a low rank there are one less person on the field that might be able to contest them in a more resource oriented way compared to a breakpoint kind of way. Like, that's the problem. In too deep to 4.5k flex CPS player commitments to team makes sense to me, considering switching to Deadlock or Counter-Strike 2. I've heard good things about Deadlock. Again, it's third person, so it's a bit sad. I also don't really like the MOBA-esque elements personally of Deadlock. I'm very much a hero shooter kind of guy. I don't like creep and other stuff like that.
like this, who in 5v5 are pretty stable, or like if you put a certain amount of skill in, you know what to expect, somewhat counterable shooter game. 6v6, it's like does everything or does nothing. That's far more the case. And so because that's the fundamentals of 6v6, we should expect somewhat counterable shooter game.
Somewhat counterable shooter game. Widow is not somewhat counterable. Widow is still all or nothing because Widow's an extremely wide design. The trouble with extremely wide designs and extremely problematic designs like Widow, or sharp designs maybe I should say, or very focused designs, is that focused designs rely on focused answers in order to actually be able to stop them doing stuff and stop them being able to dominate the lobby. Widow is still all or nothing in 5v5. It's never changed. Widow is all or nothing because Widow either completely dominates the DPS players in the lobby or runs the lobby in 5v5. 6v6 added one extra mode of interacting with the Widow, which is that one of the tanks can go at her and displace her, and that's not too many resources. In 5v5, if the tank tried to displace Widow, what happens, guys? You fucking lose. That's just how it works. You cannot dive a Widow as a ball in high rank 5v5 because you will lose the video game. That's actually do you know how Widow fights work in high rank Overwatch? The ball dives the Widow, the rest of the team peel for the Widow has 16 deaths when the rest of the team has 8, and they win the game. That's just how it works because the individually one tank is too many resources to be able to throw it in. So you may as well build everything around protecting the Widow. Like it's still the same. It's got the same problems. Yeah, sure, it's going to happen less on average than the low ranks. I agree with that. But then again, the low ranks are much more abusable for Widow when Widow's completely free, when the DPS do not win that matchup against her. It's so much worse in 5v5. How are you even cutting this halfway?
6v6, it's like does everything or does nothing. That's far more the case. And so because that's the fundamentals of 6v6, we should expect that the team comps are less diverse always. It has to be the case.
Deploy the flares. We have finished our point. Deploy the flares. At the end of every single sentence, he's like, flares out. It always has to be. I don't fucking know what he's talking about because he'll just bring in random other points into it. 6v6, Widow is all more or nothing. That is factually not true. Anyone that's played both of the modes knows it's not factually true. Factually not true. In 6v6, the Widow is more likely to be fully shut out by tanks. Still not really like something I click with, because the thing that fully shuts out a Widow is losing fights against DPS, not being zoned. That's what Widow does. Nothing on a match when they're losing a fight, not when they're zoned out of all angles. For the most part, zoning out of angles is something that gradually or can reduce the effectiveness of a Widow by a certain percentage. Sure, like both tanks can go sit on a Widow in 6v6. That's too many resources. One tank can go sit on a Widow in 6v6. That's more likely to happen, but that's not going to completely shut them out. That's only going to shut them out 40% of the time, and then the Widow still has creative ways of getting around that. So the Widow can be 100% effective in their DPS fights when they do get in, but be shut out occasionally so they can't always get in. Whereas in 5v5, it's not. Oh, exclamation mark drops. Yeah, sure, I'll do that. So close bracket. So open bracket, exclamation mark drops. There you go. You happy? I put drops in it. I don't even know if my stream has drops. It doesn't matter. My conspiracy theory is that Freedo never played Overwatch 1. It was just a charismatic face for a YouTube channel. Then Overwatch 2, the person getting gameplay footage left. And now Freedo has been left to play the game himself and attempt to make a living. No, he played a shitload in Overwatch 1. I know, it's just hard, man.
In some situations in our testing, to being absolutely untouchable. You are very reliant on your tanks to create space. So this is again where the 66 versus 5v5 preference is. Do you prefer the more team coordination of taking space with your tanks, or do you prefer the individual opportunity or the individual impact of 5v5?
See, I don't even agree for that. The fact that is this like two split formats, right? It's the DPS, tank, or free fights versus the DPS or the free fights. So 6v6 versus 5v5. 6v6 has less free fights because there's more tank fights in there. Is that more individual agency over these fights? Not necessarily. I'd say you need a little bit more supports in order to do the DPS versus tank fights, but I wouldn't say it's more than 10% difference personally.
You need your tanks to take space. What that means is you cannot move on the map without them. And if they're on
That's just not fucking true. You don't need your tanks to take space. That's not true. You win the DPS fights against tanks. We've already confirmed this when you went through an entire rant about how this is true and then flipped on a dime and started talking about something else. Like, we confirmed this. You can take space away from tanks as DPS and have individual agency. Just you have to actually fight for that space instead of being given it for free. It's not necessarily better or worse. It's just true.
never move on the map. So
that's not true.
Their bad picks will force you.
You've argued against this already. You've already said this isn't true, and then went and talked about something else. Like, what are you? This is your argument.
To probably have to swap to something you don't want to play. Just because you physically can't see a fight.
Fuck off, swap to something you don't want to play. Fuck off. Oh, we have like 9 months of solid straight talking about counter swapping, and he's like, well, you're going to have to change off your hero. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, this has been the discussion about Overwatch 2, the discussion, and now you're saying that no, piss off. Come on.
On the heroes that you're on, especially.
It's why Overwatch 2 feels more deathmatchy. Not that there's necessarily less strategy, there's just more space. So there's more individual opportunity to take and hold space appropriately. It's more democratic, and there's no real guaranteed safety really in any position that you're holding because there's always another angle the enemy team could take.
Love this point. I don't want guaranteed safety. Guaranteed safety gives me acid reflux. And guaranteed safety isn't just double shield, the worst version of 6v6. It's also Rhine Diva. It's also the enemy has position on the map, and they have Rhine Diva, and all you have is defensive.
Okay, I'd argue that low-rank players do want guaranteed safety. That is exclusively what they want. They want to play from a narrow angle. They have always wanted to play for a narrow angle. Like, that is what they want. The reason why double shield was played is because people do want to stand behind shields. People don't want to shoot into 2 shields, but people do want to stand behind them. So is it a bad thing that it is a little bit more guaranteed safety on the map? No, because that is better for low-rank players, the players you pretend to actually argue for when you're not sniffing your own farts half the time. Double shield was not the worst of 6v6. Double shield was more fun than most of 5v5. God damn it. Like, it's so hard. Flute, yes, we're doing this. Piss off. Thanks to the channel points.
And you hope you're a Roadhog, a Junker Queen, get a pick for you, I guess, to make some space. Like, it's so much harder to do, I think, with bad team comps. Now, the argument Sam makes that is completely true is that the supports are giga buffed to compensate for this fact, so they dual DPS now, and they've got a turret, and they deal as much damage as the damage. So it's like you're not free killing the supports.
Yeah, it's an interesting point there. That before there were 4 people on the map, the 2 tanks and the 2 DPS to control angles. So essentially, you had 2 tanks on main, 1 DPS was supporting the backline. And that was how we worked at most levels. And now at most levels, we have 1 tank blocking a lane, 2 DPS, and 2 supports fighting angles. And they're all on an angle instead of sitting in the back line. At most, you have 1 support playing the flex support spot that's further behind. But even then, the flex support spot at low ranks is more likely to be dittoing on an angle. Otherwise, they just don't gain SR. So, is it more congested in the 5v5 format? Are the angles more, are the angles more free? I don't even know if that's necessarily true. It's that's
necessarily, but My point is, I don't care who wins the exchange. I don't care who's the best role of the three necessarily. What I want is the map to move. I like to see different parts of the map, the angles of the map. I want offense to be favored. Whereas in this version of the game, inherently, defense is favored and ult combos become much more important. I don't know if he gets into that at all in the video, but when you get into—
No, he doesn't, because he's not playing double shield from 20fucking9. He's playing 7HXAW, which you can try now before you make 2-hour-long video talking about it.
a format where stagnation and neutraling happens, where nobody can move.
Oh,
Well, in a
God.
plat level game, it's like no one will die until you grab dragon, and that's just not a shooter game as far as I'm concerned.
In addition to that, I want to point out there's also a serious hero design discrepancy at taking different types of space. You see, a lot of the ugly stepchildren of hero design, like Malga, Roadhog, really struggle taking space when they could just constantly get poked out.
You could pick these two against Drawing Diva, guys.
I think he's missing almost every single point Spilo made so far. Yeah, I think he listened to Spilo, then talks about whatever he wants to talk about. That's basically how we function with a reaction thing, because he hasn't even tried the mode, so how could he? How could he?
And whether they revert armor, don't revert armor, it's like 2 damage mitigations that shut off this and shut off his ult. Meanwhile, their ults are pretty good. Asking for 6v6 means you won't just get one of these on your team. You could get 2. So
And then we got an Orisa versus the Reinhardt, an Orisa versus the Ram. It's exactly the same issues. It's hero design and balance issues. They are mitigatable by very simple interactions. They're very mitigatable by these guys splitting up versus if you've got a Rhine Diva against you and the Malga goes over here and the Roadhog goes over here, I'd say the Malga Roadhog is favored against this. Yeah, you're never going to win by just like gunning it down main on Malga versus Rhine, because they're going to have 2 seconds of DM and you're going to shut out most of the stuff you do. So what? So what? They're poke heroes.
the caps and team comps are ridiculous.
Down. You're very reliant on your tank tree to take space, so if you don't necessarily have the right tank combo to break the choke, then you might have a bad time, even though those chokes are. The big difference is there's more individual autonomy in 5v5, but also one bad apple can ruin the bunch a lot easier. Do you find the tank trade / complexity of using C—
Oh, he didn't elaborate on this point. Having an off teammate is harder to hide. This is a big pro 6v6 point.
No.
Where
No, fuck off. If your tank's not doing anything, you lose in 5v5 the same as in 6v6. Yeah, there's 2 tanks that might be throwing. Would you argue that 1 tank throwing in 6v6 is more important than 1 DPS or 1 support throwing? Yes, I'd say that's true. In 5v5, is the 1 tank throwing more impactful? Yeah, that's much more true, but it's more likely to happen in the 6v6 game mode because you have 2 tanks. But then, is support throwing more impactful than DPS throwing? Yes, that is always true. It's easier to make up for DPS in every single format. I think this is another complete just wash. Another SpongeBob meme? Oh, God.
Yep.
And this is your ID.
Yep.
I found this ID in this wallet. And if that's the case, this must be your wallet.
That makes sense to me.
Then take it.
It's not my wallet.
Oh, you gimbo! Take what you wanted.
Instead of saying it's not my wallet, what Freedo says is completely something unrelated.
if the rest of the team comp functioned, especially if your comp was
With 2 tanks, you get 2 chances for a non-throw tank versus 5v5, where if you get a throw tank, you just lose. Yeah, it's much more sharp if the tank does throw, but I don't think it's better or worse, personally. I think it's about the same.
better than the enemies,
Deploy
you
the
can hide
players!
as like a trash
Players
can
out!
in the 6, whereas it's really hard to be the odd man out. Like if the matchmaking is bad, or someone's having a bad day, or you have an easily exploitable team member for either their playstyle or their hero pick or whatever. You know, like if you're forcing a Genji into multiple beam weapons and he's—
Are we talking, which mode are we talking about, dude? Because I don't think this is an argument for you. I think this is an argument against you, to be quite honest.
it's hard to save him, you know? And then once you're down that guy, the game's kind of over.
9 months of talking about counter swapping, my dude. 9 fucking months. They've more or less fixed it now. It's a lot better now. But it doesn't mean it's a format issue. In either way, it's just a game design and balance issue. I'd say counter swapping is the yin and yang of the fact that you can pick 2 tanks that work together. In fact, I think with the very common sense balance changes, 6v6 is a much less sharp format in how bad it can be. Maybe it happens a little bit more often, but it's less sharp. Is that fair? It's not an issue that I want to talk about. It's not that interesting.
From a strategy point of view, like you're going to lose the game. The difference is, in my experience, losing that game is far more fun than losing in 6v6, because losing in 6v6—
Pretty sure Freedo just agreed this was a pro 6v6 argument. Are we not just misunderstanding? The trouble is, Freedo will agree with that things are a pro 6v6 argument and then not seed anything, or he will literally just like sign off.
means you can't even shoot back, and you probably won't even get kills with your ultimate, and you'll just get blown out. Losing in 5v5 is we're down a guy, but I'm still building ult. Maybe I can pick off one on my own, and there's still like—
The not building ult is specifically targeted at double shield every time he says it. I just want you to bank that away in your mind as an argument about something that's completely fucking irrelevant.
stats and frags and shooting game happening. But in 6v6, like I think players get too good and know too much about this game, and then they obsess over the result of the meta theory crafting, as opposed to the playability and the feel
here
of
we
it.
go,
If you
guys.
need to shoot the enemy or not.
Here
That
we
matters a lot to me.
goes.
DDs on the enemy tanks with your tanks to scratch.
He gets to the end of the point and he deploys the flares every single fucking time. He gets at the most it's a bit of a wash, and that's fine as an answer. And then he's like, flares out, flares out. And this is like, well, high level players always think about it this way. They don't think about the average player. Or he says RPG team comp builder. Or he goes and he's like, oh well, you can move tanks a little bit more in the 6v6. Oh, sorry, that's an argument for the enemy. Visual clutter, I guess.
Competitive-ish.
Every damn
Tank
time.
players especially like this, and for good reason. It's a lot of fun. Or do you like the complexity responsibility of reading the situation in the space available to you as a DPS or support player? Overwatch 2 has more options in that category. On the flip side, Overwatch 1 has objectively more immediate complexity on the tank trades, where Overwatch 2 has objectively more immediate complexity in positioning and controlling space. As often by the time we're
I'm gonna shut my window. Sorry, the sun was getting real low then. I'm cold now.
considering
I like this point a lot, and the complexity of the brawl has many more steps, because it's like this cooldown and that cooldown, and then there's an extra ult mixed in as well. So the complexity of like taking those angles that he's talking about, especially when both team comps are good, okay? When both teams are competent Overwatch players, amazing. Some of the best gameplay we've ever seen. You don't get people stuck at the choke, or the gameplay doesn't get as...
What chokes? What chokes? Tell me what chokes. Are the chokes in the room with you right now? Where are the chokes?
degenerate at high levels.
You say, so we're talking about the average gameplay experience for a regular person being more in depth with 2 tanks as a tank gameplay experience than with 1 tank. I don't think that's true. That if you do not have backing resources for the initiator, that the gameplay experience is worse than 6v6. I think an initiator with a poking tank still gives you more depth than just an initiator in the 5v5 game mode. I think 2 tanks, regardless of whether they back you up, is more engaging for that tank that is initiating. It's a better gameplay experience regardless of whether they're with you or not.
As it would in the casual gameplay. But then all of the casuals can't get out of any choke, right? Because 1 or 2 heroes not doing their job in the perfect harmony then kind of breaks that all down and you get blown out.
the control of the space outside the tank trade.
Hog Ryan is more interesting than just Hog Ryan. Yeah, I agree entirely. Yeah, King's Row first, King's Row second. There are some chokes in the game. Very little. I'd say like 90% of the match does not have a choke in it. If you go through any of the maps and go through any of the points, I'd say 90% of them are not choke-based points. That is not a thing that's in the game anymore.
For example,
so important there, it's like outside of the tank trade, and he's showing Ana, I think that's a good one. Another one's Widow. It's like the other alternative was like, well, a Widowmaker main who wants to play a hit scan character in a shooter game in Overwatch 1, you might never see a fight and your hero is useless, kind of like you said earlier, right? Whereas in 5v5...
That's not true. You just need to fight for the space you're given and exploit space that the enemy teams don't give you. You can still do that. Just in Overwatch 2, it's like the DPS shut you down or nobody does. In Overwatch 1, the tanks shut you down a certain percentage of the gameplay and then you get to do the DPS shooting experience if you want to.
There's always an angle to carry. These are just shooter principles. What he's saying is like Overwatch...
And when he says an angle to carry, he means an angle to completely and utterly dominate the game without the enemy team being able to do anything about it.
Shooter game. Overwatch 1 wasn't a shooter game. Like in Overwatch 2, you could pick a shooter character and do shooter things and play the shooter game. In Overwatch 1, we put 2 tanks back, all that could be gone instantly, and you might never contribute.
Yeah, it could be gone. I wouldn't look. You know what? It could be gone. I haven't checked, guys. Just bear in mind that I don't fucking care to look before I make a really long video on YouTube.
In the shooter game.
take a Route 66 attack with double bubble Winston Zarya trade. My Winston Zarya might need to try to look for a favorable angle on the enemy tank, try to set up a DPS angle at the same time, and then off of that trade, look for the opportunity to stage for backline as a final result. Whereas in 5v5, you can more immediately set up your DPS on the high ground, the left side, the low ground on the right side, and look for a trade off of your Winston dive. This makes things a little bit more creative for your DPS, but definitely limits your tank options. So how does this affect DPS play?
Important to say there. I think he explained that in great depth, but the simple answer is your damage or support get an angle and contribute, and then you can win that way, as opposed to being stuck at a choke.
As well, there's more
What
targets
fucking
to shoot, but the
chokes?
choices
What are you on about? I have excruciatingly slowly described the way that chokes are not more oppressive in 6v6 than 5v5. There is exactly the same fucking problems in 5v5 with chokes. We just removed them. It's why 2CP is worse in the 5v5 format than it ever was in the 6v6 format. Everyone agrees with this. It's worse. It's worse than that format. It's not good, and that's why we had to remove it. Like what? But it's removed. Why are we even talking about this? He's so wrong that he's the opposite of right. He's not even like tangentially there. First off, it's not a problem. Second off, it's more of a problem in the format he's talking about and everyone agrees. Like, what are you on about?
practice are generally not always super available. You can put a lot more pressure as a DPS character onto tanks now than you were before, but you might not always have the positions that you'd like to actually shoot what you'd like to shoot. So there's more options if you can get the space, but you probably won't always get that exact same space. However, for certain characters that have more mobility, I found this to be a little bit less of an issue. We'll talk more about that later. Supports, there's just more responsibility to heal. There's now 2 tanks to heal, even if the health pools are a little bit smaller, so you're gonna be doing more of that. And also there's a little bit worse individual matchup.
I need a
versus
stress
poking
ball,
the
man.
tank. Now,
I need a
that
stress
definitely
ball.
got better in 66, but unfortunately, a lot of support characters just don't do great versus tanks and damage, with the exception of maybe like Zen or Bap. So even though tanks are a little bit squishy, it's not really going to change how you position all that much compared to damage characters that just generally burn tanks better. This means the support with positioning is generally impacted a lot more in terms of not being able to take proactive angles near as much.
Tanks, supports are going to do less using angles themselves and more acting as a person that flows their resources through a conduit of a DPS in order to use that angle. It's fairly simple. That's what people play support for at the low ranks. Casual players like supporting things. That's why they're playing the fucking support category for the most part. And sure, there's some that don't, and there's some supports that want to be more active, and supports in general are not disincentivized from being more active, because that's still good and still what every single player coaches them to do.
I think it's really important because especially the history of the game teaches us this as well, where the heal botting supports, even on player maker supports, was pretty common in our community, because you would basically only shoot your team.
Because that's what the average player wants to do. Low rank players want to support when they play support. This is not insane for me to say.
Bits as Ana. But in Overwatch 2, I think we've already adapted that the support role is offensive. It's balanced.
Yep, there you go. You made the support role something the average player doesn't necessarily want to play, or you made them engage with a system they didn't necessarily want to engage with in the aiming system. Like, that's the reason why you play support over DPS for the most part. People on average don't come to Overwatch expecting support to be DPS/support hybrid with space control like tanks. They expect support to be able to enable somebody else to support, and that's why we have so many problems with heal botting, because heal botting is actually invalid.
Right? And I think players find that more fun, I'd have to guess. I personally do. I think support is way more boring in Overwatch 1, where it was sort of like, I just set up and my tanks are outplaying their tanks, and I AF.
Do you know what, guys? High-level competitive players like Freedo's opinion on this probably doesn't matter, because they're always looking at what the higher rank players want to do in the game, and they're really not talking about the casual players like I do. I'm a man of the people, don't you know? These people like Freedo, they really have no ability to talk about it, because they're so jaded, and they don't think about the context behind the things that they say. They just kind of, yeah, you know, right? Their arguments are kind of wrong because they're too high rank and they only think about DPS play, right?
Okay. And you win. And maybe like being a worse player makes you enjoy that experience, because you're going to get more gains hiding in the back, not really needing to play a shooter game.
Obviously, Freedo, obviously the lower rank players want to support when they're playing support, obviously.
But Overwatch 2 is more competitive in this way because you need to be able to duel. Like, in the instances where the...
in the dev interview, Arent said they have an example of making support going from least queued to like most queued in recent times in Overwatch 2, in the context possibly making queue times in 6v6 balance and possibility of appealing to tank players. Yeah, so I've read a summary we're gonna look at some point. I'm probably gonna do the whole interview. It's really interesting to see Arent actively engaging with the argument that putting a correct amount of players in heroes in the role and making them reasonably well balanced means that you can balance these things. That is possibly the most optimistic I've ever felt about this game in the last couple of years, reading that. That is really, really damn good and cannot be understated. Like, Satan's damn right about that. And in case anyone's misunderstanding this, that this might be an argument for Freedo on the supports needed more damage type stuff in order to be higher played in Overwatch 2. The reason why the supports weren't able to be, or the supports were Q4 less at the start of Overwatch 2 was specifically because the supports wanted to be heal botty, but could not be heal botty because they would either die to people being all around them, or heal botting was just significantly worse. So essentially what we did was we had to cultivate an entire new support player base by making them more DPS-y. I cannot underestimate the amount of players that must have quit because the support role was no longer supported in Overwatch 2. Genuinely, I can't overestimate it.
The tank trade is being won. The enemy damage are going to come after you to stop that from happening, right? So you need to defend yourself or have a plan B. You can't just AFK and hide and expect to win. It just doesn't really happen in Overwatch 2. Now, that caused more responsibility on supports, and maybe that then biases more towards like Brawly or sustaining supports that can run away. You know, Moira's been kind of like a staple for the whole history of the game to this degree, because other characters, maybe, especially if you're like a meta rank player, you're going to struggle to duel a Genji just because of his mobility, no matter how strong any of the characters is. Like, maybe at a higher tier, the Baps and Anas will reliably beat the Genji, which is why high-ranking DPS players, especially streamers, etc., rage about it, because it's like, well, how do I beat an Alari turret? Well, at the average tier of play, the more problem is like the enemy support's just going to pick Moira and easily duel you. They're not really going to outskill you as Alari, because if they were that skilled to easily make that play, they wouldn't be in a middle rank to begin with. So yeah, we'll keep going.
I don't think any of his arguments there were either here nor there. I don't think he really made any sense.
Remember early Overwatch 2 where every support player was crying that they were dying off of cooldown? Well, that was part of the adjustment required.
Do you have any problems with dying to Moira? I don't think... I get this a lot. There's loads of complaints about Moira. I think they've made these from the ether for the most part. I don't really see many complaints about Moira. Obviously, I see a low bubbling undercurrent of being generally unhappy about Moira existing because she's low skilled in the way that she aims. But for the most part, I hear it on the Group Up podcast all the time. I hear people who complain about it all the time. But for the most part, yeah, Moira is neither here nor there as a hero. They're just fine.
Support players to be a lot more proactive and a lot more dual-oriented.
Playing into Moira's Genji makes one off myself, fair enough.
Going back to 6v6 would be dialing this back, going now.
I'm also curious, like the player base's skill set on any of these things, even my biggest criticisms, okay, would we adapt? Because I think support players adapted to needing to duel more, and maybe they didn't need as many buffs as they eventually got. They did tune it back a bit, eventually over time. Once there was that era of supports doing everything, now I think
the support players didn't adapt. You just generated an entire new area of support players. I'm going to be honest. The support players quit and new players joined. That's what happened. They didn't really adapt.
They could get tuned back a little bit, I think, but all of the roles are somewhat balanced. It's just damage is like clearly the hardest one. But I don't even know if I would say that damage right now is just straight up worse. It's just harder to play because you have less options, less flexibility, and supports fundamentally can just do a lot of things. You know, they can choose to be offensive or defensive, whereas damage, you know, there's a couple that do CC and whatnot, but they just have limited options. Like you gotta pressure something and get kills.
Yeah, DPS players saw support and went in for easy value. I agree.
Is shallow by nature, and of course the alternative would be like the interaction damage were too strong. So I don't even know if this is necessarily the worst timeline. But my question is, like, if we bring back the 2-tank gameplay, will players adapt? Like what will happen? We don't have the same player base. I think our player base is more hardcore. That's probably the biggest like argument against some of my worries about a Mauga Roadhog tank line. Culturally, we might just not allow our team to do it and know it's going to be a throw.
No, people will do the things that are good. People will do the things that are good the most part. Will we allow them to go if it's bad? I don't think we're talking about whether it's bad. I think Roadhog Mauga is actually quite good and it's quite scary. Like what?
No one would even try it. I don't know. In Overwatch 1, they did. And I think Overwatch 1 players were a little bit more RPG minded. Of course, remember Overwatch 1 brought in...
One of my friends said it. I think they said it well. With the removal of the off-tank, the responsibility of the off-tank went to the DPS, but the power went to the supports. That's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah, 100%. I don't think it can be any other way, but that is what happened, right?
In a lot of MMO players, World of Warcraft, it was a classic Blizzard type game. We've kind of shed that identity, I feel. Overwatch 2 is just a shooter game now, and a competitive game at that. So if we say the competitive game, you kind of need an off-tank and a main tank, will our community...
Why do people conflate mechanics with competition all of the fucking time? It's so weird. Overwatch was always a competitive game because it was made into a competitive game. As long as people are willing to compete at it, it's competitive. There is skill curve that exists on all of the heroes, apart from a couple that were badly done. There were things that were less competitive because they didn't have aggressive skill curves or they allowed low skill for high value. At the high ranks, we kind of all kicked up against that and removed them. They were a couple of outliers, not really anything else.
It'd be different. I don't know. All I know is that's not what was the case at the time. Really important. And I don't know if Spilo has counter arguments to this because he didn't include it in this video. He didn't counter me on this point when I said it to him on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm going to be very specific here. When I say the 250 health pools are bad, they are bad because they reduce the power of supporting DPS on angles and therefore take power away from DPS. That's why they're bad.
Like, Ryan and Winston are not as popular as you think. Ryan is, Winston's not.
That's just not fucking true. That's not true. You haven't looked. It's not true. We looked at it.
So automatically, like, off tanks and off tank playstyle is more popular.
That's not true. That's not true, Freedo. It's not true. It's not true.
Anyway, we're talking about supports in this section. Supports being offensive.
He's just catching himself talking about something completely unrelated to what they're talking about. He's like, wait a minute, I was talking about absolute random bullshit.
Once you're defensive again, are you actually going to find that more fun? I hate playing BAP in Overwatch 1. Hate it. Because it's all shield pressure, holding corners, hiding. Overwatch 2 BAP, insane. Incredible shooter gameplay. I see that echo out in the distance.
No, BAP was a type of character that could choose to do the linear fight, right? He was part of a wide range of characters, some of which did the angular work, some of which did the linear work. In Overwatch 2, every single character has to do the angular work. It's not that you like BAP in Overwatch 2 because he's good at doing the angular work. It's that you like BAP because he can't do the linear work. He just can't. It's just bad. It's just bad to do.
I can take a position over here, I can pressure here, I can heal this, heal my tank, I can be a DPS.
So essentially every single character now has to be angular. Every single fucking one, right? Instead of there being options on what to do, you now have to do one thing. And you think that thing's more interesting, so it's fine. I say having a diverse variety of different things that we can do is more interesting.
Burst my tank. BAP I love in Overwatch 2. But
a lot of old sports was scared of being killed. It just stuck. It wasn't really a 6v6 thing. I agree entirely. Arch, yeah, no, I agree. The trouble is, supports always were better at DPSing than DPS were for the most part. If they could take an angle, it was always better to, and everyone would always coach them to. They just didn't by default, and maybe like a good portion of that is just due to the education of the player base.
Way I feel he functions in Overwatch 1. In their version of the game, it's almost as if he was saying BAP is bad.
Yeah, he very much conflates MMO mechanics with and resource wars and space control with not having a big ramping skill to value curve into high ranks and therefore not being competitive. He very much thinks that shooting is the only thing that can, well, that's what he implies. I assume he wouldn't agree with it if I said it to him, but he very much thinks that shooting is basically the only skill to value curve thing that works properly. Yeah.
That great because mobility wins. But we know for a fact the devs don't allow heroes to be in the gutter. At least unless they're like the most unpopular ones, I think. Like Orisa, they kind of don't seem to care. But they'll more likely overstat a character
like who has been on 45% win rate for the last 9 months.
like BAP. So he does function for the average player. And then once you do that, what happens is the highest tiers of gameplay will really abuse the stats that he has. Whether he has the instant heal on the regenerative burst or not. The AoE healing will get nuts again. AoE...
What? That's actually interesting. What's he talking about there? He's talking about Baptiste. You're not responding to Freedo the way you deserve by texting. Violence.
So automatically, like off-tanks and off-tank playstyle is more popular. And we're talking about supports in this section. Supports being offensive, once you're defensive again, are you actually going to find that more fun? I hate playing BAP in Overwatch 1. Hate it. Because it's all shield pressure, holding corners, hiding. Overwatch 2 BAP, insane. Incredible shooter gameplay. I see that echo out in the distance. I can take a position over here. I can pressure here. I can heal this, heal my tank. I can be a DPS, heal burst my tank. BAP I love in Overwatch 2. But there is no way, I feel, he functions in Overwatch 1. In their version of the game, it's
the same fucking character. They haven't really changed it, mate. They genuinely haven't really changed it in any way, shape, or form. They've done a couple of things. They give him an extra HP burst when he uses shift and stuff like that. They made him a better duelist. But like, how does that not function in Overwatch 1? Like, what are you talking about?
as if he was saying BAP is bad. And isn't that great because mobility wins? But we know for a fact the devs don't allow heroes to be in the gutter. At least...
What the fuck? How did you get here from the last sentence?
Their version of the game, it's almost as if he was saying BAP is bad. And isn't that...
No, it means that BAP has to play a little bit more narrow because BAP is one of the characters that is better played narrow when you're in a format with more heroes on the map. And there are other heroes that are still better at being played wide.
Great, because mobility wins. But we
What the fuck are you talking about with mobility?
know for a fact the devs don't allow heroes to be in the gutter. At least...
How did these two sentences get here? How did they get here, Freedo? Am I just misunderstanding? Am I just going crazy? I feel like if I break down Freedo really slowly, he makes sense if I really pass it out. But who the hell can be asked to do this? Who listens to this and thinks it's making sense?
Unless they're like the most unpopular ones, I think. Like
That actually has to be more careful and reasonable instead of being a giga chat getting everything inside.
But they'll more likely overstat a character like BAP, so he does function for the average player. And then once...
Why wouldn't BAP function with the average player? What are you on about? We said he plays a bit more from main, and you're like, well, they're going to have to overstat him. And I'm like, the fuck are you on about? Like, how'd the brain go there? Like, what's happening? Can anyone pair me on to what the hell he's talking about?
Once you do that, what happens is the highest tiers of gameplay will really abuse the stats that he has. Whether he has the instant heal on the regenerative burst or not. The AoE healing will get nuts again.
Just debate him. You can't debate someone that has no train of thought. Like, it's rolling in the muck with the pigs. They like it more than you. You both get dirty.
Healing is not that big of a deal in Overwatch 2 because you have all these off-angle threats. Whereas it was a massive deal in 6v6. You can try to undertune it, but the problem with that is the skill of...
Undertune it! It was fine! In the October patch, put it back to the October patch numbers. It's fine. We have evidence of it working fine. It's fine. Why? What? This is what happens when you get ChatGPT to write your script. Yeah, so the prompt is, like, can you write a script? Like, my brain is falling out of my ears. Pretend to be somebody who's struggling to keep consciousness.
Teamwork changes significantly. The players that have more teamwork make more abuse of AoE healing, but it also has to be scaled for where players aren't synchronizing together very well. That's a whole other aspect that I think isn't really in this video, and maybe that's something to highlight of, like, if you're the type of player to join in a lobby testing 6v6, you are not necessarily the mainstream free-to-play player. You are
there we go. We've made no sense. So do you know what we do? We go back to the old trusty high-level competitive design. Your opinion doesn't matter because you're a type of player and you don't talk for the common folk, and I do. There we go. Right, we're back onto track. There you go. At least I can follow this because he just like goes back through the same point over and over.
Vested player, so you probably know.
Like the flares quickly.
Whereas in 5v5, regrouping is...
I do not think anything he said about Baptiste there made any sense whatsoever. I don't think he understands what we're talking about right now. I don't think he understands like what Spilo was saying, that they're played a little bit more close to main. I don't even know how he got there. Like, does anyone else know? Does anyone else know?
It's very important. They've kind of reworked it a bit to make it easier, but it was unplayable if you didn't regroup properly in 6v6. Whereas in 5v5, because there might be small little windows of time for you to get a flank or get a position and do something with it, in 6v6 that didn't really matter, because getting a kill or two on your own, your team still can't get out of spawn because the two tanks are gumming them up, right? Like
Quite typical reactionary on the voice of the people type of argument. Yeah, that would piss him off, wouldn't it? Saying he's a reactionary. That would 100% annoy him, because he is the guy as far as he knows, right? He's just on the wrong side of the argument. And these type of people, they do really, really well when they're arguing for the average person, because the average person, if the average person is wrong, they're just going to agree with him and not listen to anything and listen to the white noise and accept everything he says. But the moment that they're wrong, they really get revealed, in my opinion.
supports in 6v6 kind of didn't matter if your team still couldn't
Like
get
Trump. He doesn't make any fucking sense. But he's found an audience that likes him, and that works. Won't think critically about it? Yeah. And it's even better if you can convince people not to think critically about the things you're saying, because you really internally think something different, right?
out because you have to kill even more to have an impact. Whereas in 5v5, you go and flank that Widowmaker on Havana. Now all of a sudden the whole map is opened up. Like the map you get from those individual elims opens the map instantly.
He's actually saying that Baptiste should go flank a Widowmaker. I don't...
In 6v6, if their tank line's beating yours, 1 or 2 kills might not even do it. And that has to be true if we acknowledge that you could hide in the team comp, right? If you could be like the odd man out and your team still win, well, that means just getting a pick isn't enough. Whereas picks are way more impactful in 5v5. In fact, they
No, the odd one... The hiding in a team comp and being the odd one out does not... What? If you're able to hide in a team comp, it means that is more cog in the gear or cog in the machine kind of like value you can get. That does not mean that having a pick does not matter. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, literally. What is this? What is this whole argument?
be too strong. Like that might be a downside, you might say.
I feel like I could do a 20-minute fucking video on just the last 5 minutes of him talking. Like, what is this? Of just like going one by one through every single point and working out what the fuck we're talking about. The demons are leaking out, the voices are coming through. I don't know what he's talking about.
But I'd rather that individual impact matter more as opposed to the team comp and choke formation mattering more.
Oh. See, we're at the end of an argument, guys. We're at the end of an argument. RPG team comp builder, bring it up, deploy the flares. It's so consistent. It's so consistent. If he goes on a ramble, he like right at the end of the ramble, he just whoop back to one of the points. The 2 points he's allowed to make in an argument. It doesn't matter if he's made sense because he said something that somebody as a Barnum statement is going to agree with right at the end. Sleeper phrase, yeah. When he's sleeping next to his partner, he's like, RPG told me. Comp builder, high-level competitive heroes. You don't think the same thing as casual players.
Again, personal preference.
Oh,
I found support skill
God
expression
damn
to
it.
diminish slightly, tank to increase slightly, and DPS feels about the same, just different. Finally, some heroes are going to leave you feeling gatecapped in terms of taking space, just like it did back in Overwatch 1. Off of that, let's segue into hero design problems. Let's talk about the good first. Some heroes felt pretty darn good from our testing. Doomfist, Junker Queen, and individual hero tweaks like Rhyme Pin Cancel all function really nicely in the new environment. Oh, and both enabler tanks, Zarya and D.Va, felt great again, as their original identity has been restored. The bad, well, Malga had his moments, but felt demanding of the right tank combo function. Turns out self-heal on the
I'm just watching him process this.
Isn't such a great design. Ramatra felt sluggish and survival focused, and his long but overly impactful CD cycle left him with massive windows of vulnerability, like a Winston bubble but without the mobility of Monkey. Orisa lacks all identity besides focus tank and Overwatch.
Each of these are really interesting. I'm just gonna
He's not processing. Sorry, guys. Sorry.
Therefore, that carries over to Overwatch 1. But
He's accurate. Is he thinking about RPG team comp building?
that's now much worse as she benefits less from other tanks supporting her, and she doesn't really support the other tanks either.
I had a problem with this when Spilo said it. I think Orisa, it's fine to have something that doesn't demand a lot of attention from the rest of your team. Isn't being able to play with your team well part of your individual skill? No, individual skill can only be found in 1v1 DPS duels on an angle that require aiming. It's nice of you to come here, but clearly you're incorrect because Freedo's here.
And then Roadhog, well, he's just awful in every single way. Turns out that while some heroes definitely feel better in the 66 format, notably off tanks, some heroes don't. But turns out a bad apple is still a bad apple, and a different, even better.
This is another one that Spilo's kind of right on, but also wrong on. The bad apple's still a bad apple. Bad is kind of like a really weird argument. Roadhog is less bad in his current form in 6v6 than he is in 5v5. Like that is just a default thing. Having a hero like Roadhog that's dumpstering your team is less impactful in the mode with 2 tanks, so that somebody else will be able to hold space while you're fucking off in a corner. Like that is just a true fact. Sorry.
Matt doesn't change that. My experience with playing versus some
just saying it's bad, so it's bad doesn't mean anything. Like you need to compare different weights of bad apples, and it's giving up to do anything else. Is a slightly less rotten apple any better to eat? True. true. It's not any better to eat, so why are we talking about it? Is my opinion, honestly.
Bad apples mentioned before was a funny balance of being amused at how inconsistent and awkward they were compared to the voluptuous tank combos of Winston, Ryan, Zarya, Doomfist.
I love how the editor zooms in on when he says voluptuous.
Not word used.
Ball and Junker Queen, and how annoyed it made me when we had one of those heroes in my team, especially when we didn't have space. You see, that's probably the biggest consistent theme between Roadhog, Orisa, Malga, and to an extent Ramatra. They all either have glaring weaknesses in their defensive capabilities, usually reliance on sustain or just survival, are tank buster focused, something that's a lot more awkward in the double tank format.
I just don't think this is true, by the way. I would firmly disagree with Spilo on this point, that tank busters are more problematic in the 2-tank format. I just disagree with this. I don't think he's even thinking clearly here. I'd love for him to say more on this. Spilo has never elaborated on this point and made arguments against, like, for it. Tank busters are less problematic in 6v6. Everyone agrees. I've never heard an argument against it.
Severely lacking consistent mobility or range.
He said so many good things about all the different weird tanks that are designed in the game, and then now some fundamental stuff that, like, we should understand. So
yeah, I think he said awkward. Yeah, I think he said awkward because he has no actual point there. I don't know. Sometimes Spilo says things that are kind of like sitting on the fence on these kind of issues, and I'm like, okay, how? And then I look at everything else that Spilo said, and he has never made the argument. He'll just brush past it as kind of like paying lip service to other people's arguments. And yeah, I think that's one of the times where I do think he's sitting on the fence, when he says these kind of things that don't really make any sense and never elaborates on them, when he knows that's the type of thing that I want elaborating on.
Awkward in the double tank format, or
tank busters are more awkward in the double tank format. Come on, like, come on.
Do this, okay? Look through his whole list. Tank buster tanks. I don't know if that's necessarily the case anymore. Like, does Roadhog tank bust? I think the sustain of Mauga needing to be off a tank is still a problem. But these picks are playable in 5v5. I think they're bad right now, like in the current meta. But if I had one on my team, I wouldn't feel like I couldn't contribute to the game. Whereas what we're looking here, or the gameplay in the background as he's saying this, is a brawl mirror. Both teams on Ryan Zarya. He's on BAP. This gameplay's sick, right? Well, he's got a brawler and then there's a tracer off to the side, but
what does that matter about whether Mauga's okay in this format? Why are you talking about the brawl being sick?
This is the gameplay 6v6ers want, right?
Oh, he's just saying that he's not even addressing the thing. He's not even addressing the point that maybe this isn't true. He's not even backing up Spilo's point that tank busters are more problematic in 6v6. What he's doing is he's just using that as a counterpoint to, well, you think that that's not going to happen because, whoop, high-level competitive design players, your opinion doesn't matter because I am a casual player and I speak for the common folk, and you only think about brawl with like every single fucking time it comes back to this.
Like, I got my cooldowns, I'm safe, I'm moving in, my tanker are making space, maybe my flanker gets a pick. That looks like Overwatch to me, right?
You're getting dono wall guys, Flute and Peopling. Channel points, please.
But as we're watching that, he's explaining how, like, what if we just didn't have this though? What if we had some of the terrible...
It saves a minute and a half, I believe, at the moment, so it's actually saving quite a while if you want.
Tanks that just don't make any sense as heroes. I don't know. Do we hate having Orisa, Mauga, Roadhog in 5v5? Like, I'm not gonna say I love it, but is it like I can't play the game when they're on my team?
Bad apple is really impacted. Diva felt
Go through each one of this little list that he goes through.
Oh, and both.
Can you clip this? Yeah, sure. There you go. It comes up for me twice because it's I can't set the permissions properly.
And Diva felt great.
But it did work.
As their original identity has been restored. The bad, well, Malga had his moments, but felt demanding of the right tank combo to function.
Yeah, because if you don't protect him or cleanse him, or if you have another one who's like him, he's gonna get mitigated. Like, I think an easy thing to forget about Mauga is his damage requires crit. So even shooting a Rhine Shield is really, really bad. Like, you don't want to have to be shooting the Rhine Shield.
Self-heal on the enemy tank isn't such a great...
But if the enemy tanks have 2 tanks that may have some sort of mitigation, then you can get around the mitigation. When in one tank, we're playing linearly, and if they have a mitigation shield, then you can't get around it, right? If we have 2 tanks, then we can go on split angles like we actually poke, and the character can work how they're meant to by getting it damage into the backline or getting damage into the other tank. Right? When we're in 5v5, it doesn't work. When we're 6v6, it does work. I do not think there is anyone that has ever disagreed with this, but holy shit, he's making an argument that does just not make any sense. Like, how does this argument make sense? Somebody, send me somebody making this argument in a cogent manner that actually makes any sense whatsoever. What the fuck is he talking about?
Anything that slows him down in 5v5 or 6v6 is bad, and if there's 2 versions of those mitigations, like, when does he ever get to play? I don't necessarily hate...
If there's 2 versions of the mitigations, let's say like we're talking about Rhine or Sigma, so we're talking about the linear, this is 5v5 mode to here, right? 5v5. And then Sigma and Rhine together. Yeah, they're going to shut out more of the angles, but you actually force them to put resources into an off angle. You cannot straight brawl them if they are 2 mitigations, but you can pull ridiculous amounts of resources away from them by being on your angle, like you should be as a DPS, as an angular tank or an angle poking tank. Six just got auto-modded by putting fucking French in his message. Okay, we don't care about racism versus the French here. The French are allowed, as long as you hate them for good reasons.
8 Mauga in the current version of him. I think he's weak in the meta, but like they've made a lot of improvements to Mauga over time, where he's a bit more about the stomp, which is the most interesting thing about him. And the shout is more of a quick regen as opposed to long sustain. As long as they just get him away from I bully the enemy tank over easily, that's probably a good place for him to be. But I don't see any iteration in 6v6 where Mauga isn't just like the odd man out and always bad. Like, he would need to be reworked, you'd have to think.
That's just not true. That's true, and nobody disagrees with me. Nobody agrees with Freedo here. I've never heard anyone disagree with Freedo here. The only time that anyone ever heard anyone say this is when Spilo brushes past it in 1 second so he doesn't have to talk about how it's actually not true.
Ramatra is my favorite tank in 5v5. Super stable, super adaptable, can really transform, literally, as the team fight devolves. What we forget a little bit is, like, it was easier to clean up fights, I think, in 6v6, if you have a pick on their tank, at least. Once you force their tank out, they all have to run. Whereas in 5v5, while that's the case, there's only one tank on the field, right? So there might still be squishy kills to always get in every opportunity. Ramatra is too generalist, I think, is probably what his point is. What we saw a lot in 6v6 over the years is you just wanted the best version of an archetype and commit to that combo. Where, and remember, this was from a couple weeks ago, so...
What the heck is he saying? He's just saying he likes Ramatra in 5v5. That's all he's saying right now.
Through shields in this version. Ram's just, like, probably doesn't have a strong enough singular identity. Like, why do you need what he does if you can replicate it with another tank who just is going to have a more severe downside, but will be supplemented by another tank, you know, ideally.
Sluggish and survival focus.
So he's saying you may as well pull the really... So he's saying, right, in terms of extreme design, Ram's closer to the middle in terms of design, in terms of the amount of resources he takes and the amount of value he gets from taking resources. So why would you pick a Rhine if you have resources like Zarya? Ram over that. If you have Rhine or JQ, and the answer is you basically pick your tank based on, first off, what you actually want to do. I mean, if you have a more linear fight, you're going to take like Ram over some of the others. Do you want to hold space more efficiently with Ram? Do you just want to be able to contest? That's the reason why you pick Ram. Do you have lower support? You can pick Ram with Mercy Zen, like in 6v6. That's the thing you can do. You can't do that in 5v5 because Mercy Zen isn't enough to keep up the Ram, because this Zarya can provide the resources. So you pick Ram over Rhine, because Ram would be able to be picked up, like kept up by Mercy Zen in that situation. It's a scale of value versus resource demand, and Ram sits at an interesting point in that and has more contesting. If we're talking about characters being relatively similar, it's exactly the same fucking like same in 5v5. So why are we talking about it?
And his long but overly impactful CD cycle left him with massive windows of vulnerability. Like
it's just that suffer as I have joked by taking us captive for almost 2 hours.
Without the mobility of Monkey.
So like he places his things down and then he's easily surrounded would be my thought, because tanks that demand space in a brawl, like the game, the 6v6 becomes more like my tanks fight your tanks in a lot of cases. And Ram, like, part of the reason he works in 5v5 is he's a threat to squishies, right? And then there's only one tank and he can kind of block it out. But if he can't do that and the enemy tank's running over you, I mean, that's how you beat Ram anyway, a lot of cases now, is run him over. But he's going to be able to go run over your squishies in that time.
Yeah, if you had a Ram with Sigma, Ram Sigma would be absolutely 100% fine with Mercy Zen. That's why you pick Ram Sigma. Why are you being deleted? Oh, you put a dot in Diva. Sorry, reactionary. That's my bad. I need to whitelist Diva. I don't actually know how to whitelist stuff, and this has been a problem for ages. Yeah, you put a dot in Diva.
5v5, whereas they might be entirely safe in 6v6. So interesting. Orisa also still sucks, both versions, it sounds like.
Orisa lacks
I'll read it since you took the time to write a comment that was relatively long and got modded. One of the most defining features of Overwatch 6v6 is the presence of 2 tanks, and with that comes a level of strategic depth that simply isn't possible in 5v5. The interplay between 2 tanks, it's literally ChatGPT, copy and paste. I hate you.
Identity besides focus tank in Overwatch 2, and so therefore that carries over to Overwatch 1, but that's now much worse as she benefits less from other tanks supporting her, and she doesn't really support the other tanks either. And then
yeah,
I actually find leaving the dot in Diva mod for like bot quite funny, so I like leaving it in anyway. I don't care that much.
Yes, character. The thing about Orisa is that she's actually kind of weak against squishies. I think that's what people don't realize. Like, a lot of squishies have the cooldowns to survive her damage and then poke her out. And while she has 4-5, she has Spinny Spear, that only lasts so long, and then she's just a big hitbox, right? So Orisa's best version so far in this rework, in terms of her playstyle, is bully the enemy tank with BS, stuns, and easy damage. And that's a lame reality for Orisa to be in 5v5, but she had even lamer versions in 6v6. All right, now returning back to the spot we were at.
Severely lacking consistent mobility or range. Pre-rework Orisa Roadhog were horrible to play versus an Overwatch.
I don't want to talk about Orisa. We've already talked about Orisa. We'll just let him yap for a little bit.
But they function a little bit better due to one reason. They had ways to contribute outside of the tank trade, with also more team utility to contribute as well. Orisa's shield, hull, range pressure, and bongo were all phenomenal tools to pressure and create space and range. Not in a good way for balance necessarily, but in an impactful way. And for Roadhog, ironically, the rework made him worse, because he lost nearly all neutral pressure with the rework to his weapon and his alternate fire. It's either close range tank pressure, hook, and that's about it. You can flank, but if the map doesn't provide those options, or you get poked out, you're cooked. Even newer kids in the block like Ramatra and Mauga were a bit awkward. Mao was very reliant off of Zarya or another dive tank to enable a lot of his all-in slam cardiac cycles, while being denied by 2 forms of tank mitigation to get his self-heal rolling. And Ramatra
That's just breaks.
Mauga's just stuck between brawl and poke at the moment. I think that's the issue with him. He demands a lot of resources while poking, and he demands the same amount of resources while brawling. So he's very high intensity, and that's why he's struggling. All you need to do is up his self-sustain and reduce his brawling capabilities, and he'd be fine. As we have done in our format.
To think like you could have 2 mitigation tanks and a versus Mauga. Like, how do you ever balance this, guys? Like,
Very easily. It's not actually that hard. It's really not actually that hard.
Already hard to balance in 5v5, but the argument is that 6v6 is easier to balance.
It is, and they've done it, and it's not that hard.
How could you possibly balance it easy? Like, Mauga's an okay hero right now. What we're describing is a world where he easily...
Mauga's an okay hero because they spent literally, they spent at least 11 months changing around Mauga to make them an okay hero. Hog is okay right now? Actually fucking wrong. Yeah, Hog's not okay. Mauga's okay. I'd say Mauga's okay right now. I think Mauga still has a lot of issues. Because Mauga, has anyone played with a new stamp or against new stamp? You can literally just, before people react, stamp on the enemy tank and fucking delete them. Like, if the tank ever goes below armor, I'll show you how fast it is now with 15% movement speed. It's crazy, man. It's crazy good. It's removed all reaction time. People are going to start complaining about overrun real soon. Just watch this. Look at that. There's no reaction time whatsoever. If they're out of armor and they're on that corner, for instance, we literally just... They cannot escape that. Easiest crit of your life. It's not really skilled anymore because of the amount of time it takes. You don't have to set it up. You don't have to go, like, preempt them. It's the easiest thing in it. And wait till you see it with Juno Circle. Yeah, well, it's just gone from predictable for the enemy tank to play around to completely unpredictable. Moment they go under armor, instantly slam. No, go away.
Easily is... you think counterpicking is bad now, right? Like, counterpicking is way more severe. And not only do you counterpick the tank, the entire enemy team can't move, right?
That's just not true.
Just not a game. And the thing is, there's a cognitive bias with this, right? Like, we tend to delete the results that we don't like. You know, it's like this confirmation bias, right? With this, where when you played that game in Overwatch 1, a lot of players would have just like memory hold this from existence and said that didn't happen. It was so bad, that experience was so bad, you refuse to remember it because you want to hold on to the memories of when you played the good comp versus the enemy good comp, and it was a great experience. But that wasn't at least half of the gameplay.
It's not exactly that point. It's not exactly that point, but it's close to that point, man. It is close to that point. Because the alternate side of that is high-level competitive players, your opinion doesn't matter because I talk for the common folk. And the other side of it, high-level competitive players have confirmation bias towards the previous mode of the game, right? Because they played it more, and low-rank players didn't play it as much, so low-rank players didn't know about this. So, yeah.
Said something else here that I want to reiterate.
And Ramaja's CDs are so long and his Omnic form poke so bad at
busting out psychology 101. Well, you have confirmation bias, and you remember the good things in your past more strongly than the bad things in your past. Haha.
Up and just take aggro because bullying the solo tank doesn't work so well anymore. Tanks that demand support without providing consistent utility in return.
How is 6v6 easier to balance then, guys?
Easy.
By nature, 5v5 is easier to balance.
That's not true. Give me an example. I'll tell you how to balance it. It's really fucking so much more easier. In terms of easy to balance, that's one of those where, like, I think it's pretty much even. I think 6v6 is a little bit more easy to balance. In terms of the total amount of things that you can design that aren't oppressive, 6v6 is so much more permitting on balance. So much more permitting on design, maybe. Maybe we should split the two, balance and design, to be different. 5v5 is inherently more volatile to balance, always has been, always will be.
Because counterpicking is at all useful,
didn't he just agree that 6v6 is easy to balance? I'm pretty sure he did. I think we're going to talk about high-level competitive design and the fact that your opinion probably doesn't matter because you don't think about the common folk like me, and that the game is an RPG team comp builder pretty soon.
That means it's inherently more balanced. Now, we might not want counterpicking to be good.
How would you balance 5v5? I think they're doing a great job already. Honestly, I think they're doing a great job. I don't think it's as engaging. I don't think the gameplay loops are as good. I don't think it's as interesting in general. I think the tank has a worse experience, but I think it's relatively well balanced, personally.
But for the Overwatch 2 format as we have it now, before we get Hero Draft and Hero
I
Ban,
certainly wouldn't buff Kiriko and Mauga and Anna in the same patch. That's probably something I wouldn't do if I was balancing the game personally. That's probably not a good idea, I'm going to bravely say.
And all that, it has to be somewhat good. Whereas the counterpicking gets even more severe from the team comp level in 6v6. So much so that how do they balance it with numbers if they can pick 2 heroes that utterly win the game easily, and you can't even contribute? Those are
see, that's literally all. He just goes straight back to the point. The point he's never proved that two, like, and he'll just make these crazy wild claims like 2 heroes and you can't even contribute, just over and over and over again, and he won't ever interact with anyone else that will ever like come back against him. Because I could pull it apart and I could say, do you know what? Of course, like your argument makes no fucking sense that you can't contribute because there's 2 tanks on the team. What the fuck are you talking about? I could do that till the cows come home. I should be here for hours, and he's not going to change his mind because he doesn't care to change his mind. He just
auto losses. The auto loss in 6v6 is so much more severe than what you're used to in 5v5. You assume it is because if you misplay and don't make the right adaptations for 5v5, or you lose anyway, and you think you do what I say, you play the tracer, you go at the back line, you get your picks, but you still lose the tank trade, then you lose the game, and you're like, well, see, it doesn't even matter, 6v6. But those losses will still happen in 6v6. They'll just happen more severely where you get to do less.
They don't do well. Maybe there's a synergy in here that can make these heroes.
And more importantly, less heroes will be viable.
I'm gonna wait till he moved on,
but
because this is one of those arguments that he does where he just clusterfuck, but like spread pattern, buck shots out his ideas randomly, and I would have to spend like 3 minutes on every single point, and the points come so fast every single sentence because there's 2 points per sentence half the time. So I'm just gonna let it play because it's completely fucking useless to respond to him at this point.
we weren't able to solve them in the short period of time that we tried. The point remains, whether weak, dull, or frustrating to play with or against, these heroes are still flops in my eyes in the hero cast. And whether 5v5 or
How is an auto loss more severe in one format than the other? An auto loss is an auto loss regardless. Is he saying to argue auto losses are more common in 6v6? I probably wouldn't think about it reactionary. He certainly hasn't. So yeah, I probably wouldn't bother putting my brain to it, man.
66, much work is needed to match the creativity, complexity, and dynamics of the other tanks in the cast. Now we're getting into some feedback here. The last day of Pugs that we did, we spent around 4 or 5 hours playing with only high elo players, Masters, GM, and so on. And we wanted to try to create a more environment where people...
The actual answer is it's pretty obvious, guys. 5v5 has a format with less players, so it's an auto loss more often and more severely if that one of those many players ends up being throwing. And it's an auto loss more often if it's a tank, because the tank has more of control of the game. That's it. And then in 6v6, it's the opposite. It's a little bit more soft, but it's going to happen more often, more softly. There you go, right? That's it. And I don't know how this correlates to either mode being better or worse. I think it's a bit of a wash. I don't care.
We're communicating, trying to play optimal tank strategies, and just trying different things. I got some feedback from all these players I want to share with you guys here, which will echo some of my points before and also provide a different perspective. Number one, let's talk about tanks. Tank felt more limited, but it...
All right, high-level players should like this more, in my opinion. That's what you should.
This is the part why I said I don't fucking care to Spilo. He should not have took his feedback from high-level player. He should have took his feedback from average players or low player ranks. That's the thing that actually matters. That's the thing that definitely matters to the devs. I said this to him, and I think he took it on board as a mistake, to be honest.
You should expect, because they know how to break out of those choke points. They know the order of operations. They know how to pick the right team comps. Like, a lot of the issues of 6v6 falls down to the playability of the average player needing to know more than I think is reasonable to ask of them. So overall, we should expect that the tank players are very happy and all the high-level players like...
It's a mistake to see how it affects everyone? No, specifically because Spilo didn't take that vertical slice. He just took the feedback from the people in the high-rank lobbies. That's a mistake, not the rest. The point is, you think you do, but you don't. I was going to say, don't you guys have phones? Man, Overwatch Mobile. I'm sure it's coming soon.
To the complexity. Also, if you're the type of player that wants to get in one of these pugs, you would think you'd be biased towards even like considering it as an option, being open-minded. Like the harsh, I don't want to play this pugs, right? I know all of this already. You know, I don't need to see. Like, there's some revelations that were nice for him to point out here, but getting stuck at chokes, I already know I hate that more than anything I've ever had.
Spilo didn't say you get stuck at chokes. Nobody ever said you get stuck at chokes. You were the only person that ever mentioned chokes. Can we just process that he's actually responding to himself right now? I am closed-minded. I don't want to talk about this, and then responds to a point he made earlier. I don't want to try this. I know all of this already. About sums up Freedo's thought process. Man, I can't even bring myself to mock him because it's just so depressing, isn't it?
Had for 2 years in 5v5. So a player like me isn't going to even enter these pugs. So it should be biased towards preferring them.
necessarily feel worse. Another player says tank combos heavily affected their enjoyment. Very, very high highs.
I actually don't think Spilo's audience is very much 6v6 inclined compared to the average audience of a competitive player. I don't know if anyone can agree there. I think Spilo is a lot more balanced in his audience because his audience are a lot more in tune with Overwatch League than most audiences. Obviously, the audience is an audience that watches Twitch, but I'd say on average, for an audience that watches Twitch, his audience is more likely to be inclined to like 5v5, personally. I don't know if anyone disagrees or agrees with that.
Low lows depending on their partner.
Really important because Arent said exactly this, right? And this is what I try to stress about the 6v6. It won't solve everything. All it does is make the game more severe, more streaky, less reliable. And perhaps there is something...
That's just not true. It averages out to the middle if you have more players. That's just a fact. That nobody disagrees with this. It's just a fact. It averages out to the middle if you have more players. This is a true fact that has always been true.
Want this, right? I could be wrong. I could be wrong in that the community prefers this chaos.
In addition to that, the good news though is that...
But that is the truth. You have to say that's just the nature of 6v6. And I don't know how we can say
How do you make this video without ever trying it? It makes no sense. Ah!
that's the nature of it, and then not also admit that balance is impossible. Because if the hero performance is so...
I think his audience is an echo chamber like ours. Everyone's audience is an echo chamber. I think for his audience specifically, I don't think whatever audience he pretends to have is the audience from this video because it got a ridiculous amount of downvotes. Like both formats, the biggest downside of 5v5 to me is it's lonely. Go back to main tank if 6v6 ever comes back. I love playing Winston or Reinhardt when I have a team that'll play with me. Probably so many people look at Winston doing a leap and think idiot and still sit making a play. So that's 1 out of 3 agreeing with him. 6v6 tank is an art form. 5v5 tank is just horrible, basically a beefy DPS. I'd say I simply prefer 6v6 from a fun perspective. I say the audience in here completely disagrees with him.
so synergy dependent.
Oh, you're talking about Spilo's audience. Yeah, I mean, that's true. People gravitate to people with the same opinions as themselves. Like, the people that gravitate to my channel are exclusively the people that hate the French. By the way, this is all... The French stuff is a joke. I just want to confirm to you guys, it's a joke.
you can't balance in the community choosing to pick the right or wrong thing, because not everybody can play everything, which makes it more difficult. And this is the high tier player saying this. Typically, the high tier players should have the hero pool to always play a good team comp, but it's like, well, we tried one and then we just got utterly rolled, right? Well, that's how most players are going to experience the game.
Combo worked, the attention split from the other tank was definitely noticeable when coordinated or had the right combo. And this is great. In the 5v5 environment, one of the big problems is that all the attention is being put on you. Well, this player says if you get the right tank combo and you communicate and you synchronize well, it's really nice to not feel like everybody's focusing you down all the time.
That's cool.
It's about what people in the comments said.
Higher highs are better because there's fluidity to the tank gameplay.
It's great feedback to hear. Now for the DPS players, some of them said that Genji Tracer felt all very good. Some of the more mobility options, because you could set up a little bit easier than some of the hit scan characters, felt great. Flexible positioning, and you could actually have decent impact on tank trades.
Keep in mind, I think this would be changed because I don't think the build that he said they used would maintain. Like, if flankers are too strong, the devs buff the supports that stop them, I feel, is the nature of things. So I doubt that would maintain. But the point is that if you have to look at shields, then ranged characters are miserable to play because you need your tank to make space, a concept that hasn't existed since 5v5.
Why are we talking about shields? What the fuck is happening, man? Why are we talking about shields? What? Oh, you got crunchy Cheetos? We don't have Cheetos. We call them something different. I think we have the same brand, but they're not called Cheetos. I don't know which brand is actually. Obviously we have Wats's. I don't know if that's the same brand. Cheetos? Yeah, Cheetos. It's like water.
It said that poke heroes felt tough, and it felt sometimes hard to take angles with some DPS. It could be even hard
Bad
to
balance only counts for this game my preferred format. One of the interesting things is when people say higher highs and lower lows, when they say higher highs, they mean the higher highs are there because of the format, and when they say lower lows, they mean the lower lows are there because of the balancing. Exclusively, the higher highs cannot exist in the format that does not enable the higher highs. So we cut off the top of it to enable the balancing to not be as bad at the bottom. That's kind of like the idea. So that's my bad balancing only counts while it escaped my preferred format. That's my one. Hey, dude. Thank you for the prime. Hello. Hi. Thank you, dude. Really appreciate it. Never been to a corner shop before? What are you on about? We don't have Cheetos. Are you crazy? We don't have them. How do you not have Cheetos? They don't exist. They're not a thing. I'll Google it for you. UK. Is Cheetos available in the UK? No, that's just an advert for Cheetos. Cheetos are just What's-its, right? What does the UK call them? They're like Lay's and they're like Lay's and Walkers. They're Walkers in the UK. Oh, sorry, I've got too many things open. There you go. What's it?
Support on these angles because your supports were more tied up supporting the tank trade. Chokes didn't feel quite as bad as expected was the general take. For support players, building certain support ults a lot faster was interesting, but you did have to play a little bit more conservative. We'll talk more about that one later.
The phrase is so, the phrase is also so shit because the bottom tank, it's an argument that we should cut off the top experiences because the bottom experiences might be a little bit easy to balance, right? When we've already confirmed that Aristo is one of the bottom experiences, isn't it?
So there was a lot less room for solo play, and there was a lot more healing, but it was still fun to play. One of the questions brought up by one of the support players said, is there less room for OTPs?
They're not the same route the home is. What? Did Cheetos have a cheater on them? Is that why they're called Cheetos? I genuinely don't know. I'm not fucking with you. Those Cheetah. What? I've seen the cheetah. I've never seen it in the UK. What's it? What? How do you spell what's it? What's it? Hey, look, it's me pirating Walking Dead. What's its cheetah? No, we just don't have it. It's America, so you have to market to kids really aggressively. That's what it is.
There's less playstyle flexibility in 66. Now, you might, before you say, oh, playstyle, you can poke tank, poke DPS support, we're talking specifically about positioning, because one of the challenges of having more congested chokes is that more of those chokes congested means there's fewer positioning options for an unorthodox people. Depending on the choke, you might need a certain couple of different DPS characters or support characters to break that choke. If you pick the wrong one, you may not have the space that you need to function with that character in that situation. Something worth considering. Now,
so many intelligent, I love the way that he talks about the game. You know, it makes me salivate to hear Spilo talk. But I think...
All right, man, he's my boyfriend. Fuck off.
That I add to the conversation of this community is remembering what this means, okay? Bad picks are far more severe to your team's ability to play the game in 6v6. And he's talking from the support position, because from a strategy point of view, the supports need to be able to push the tank out. That still exists in 5v5. You have so much power to flex pick in 5v5 from the support role, because they do everything. You can choose to tank trade, you can choose to backline, you can choose to frag and duel, you can have a good ult, there's so much in the support category in 5v5, but what he's describing is pick the right support or your team can't move, okay? This is important to me because I spent years making guides.
Sorry, I think he broke me. Pick the right support or your team can't move. The team needs an average, probably 10 HPS higher throughput of healing in order to be able to move on an average team comp. I think that's probably true. I think everyone agrees with that. In 6v6, you need a little bit higher HPS value in terms of the average for your team. So Spilo did a whole talk about that, and then Freedo picked out that one thing and was like, well, let's see, that's a bad thing about 6v6. You can't move at all if you don't have the right healing. And I'm just trying to work out if there's any relevance to that or not. I mean, yeah, like, some of the support combinations are less optimal, But then again, Mercy Zen is completely untenable with a ram in 5v5, where if Mercy Zen were a ram in 6v6 and one other tank like Bull would probably be really, really good. So maybe it's the idea that there are a lot less poke combinations in 5v5. And there's a lot more brawl combinations do lead you to need a lot more healing throughput in general. So I don't even know if that's true. I definitely think that 6v6 is a lot more permitting to poke hybrid comps and poke dive or poke brawl hybrid. And they are the ones in general that require the low healing throughput, so you do need less healing on them. I think on the average low rank game, sure, at a low rank game, I'd say you need about 10 HPS more. At a high rank game, I think it's a lot more flexible as the format on how much healing per second you actually take. So that could be an argument in his favor if you want, that a low rank lobby requires a slightly higher healing throughput in order to be able to generally do things. But I think that's mostly tank design and how many tanks on the field need a load of resources than it is anything else.
It's trying to...
Certainly, if we put the Venture in the tank category, the Venture doesn't need many resources. So that's a big like boon to how good Mercy Zen kind of comps are.
Get the players of the game to do what
You're being too generous. I'm not being generous. I'm just trying to engage with the arguments, not the person. So I don't care about Freedo. I care about the arguments Freedo's making.
he's saying, right? Like, I felt like I had to beg them, kicking and screaming, pick Lucio.
You're basically saying you throw easy on 6v6, which is absurd. That's true. That's true. Low rank players like healing and getting healed. No, low rank players, I have on good authority that low rank players like dueling on an angle with a Baptiste and trading. I'm pretty sure Freedo said that at some point during this video.
Your team can't move.
Okay, I disagree with the tank pairings. Like a Devo Zarya can give support resources to the main tank because a bit of breathing room compared to spam healing one tank. He'd argue that you're using the best case scenario to argue against the worst case scenario. But yeah, I think we're always going to talk past each other because people don't want to talk past each other in general. Interesting. In order to really look at it, I think I'd have to go through the tank combinations and work out which ones are resource intensive without extra resources. I think it's a bit of a wash. I definitely think in low rank, but in low rank in 5v5, they demand a lot more healing resources as well. So I'm really comparing low rank 6v6 to medium rank 5v5 in my head there, I guess. No, my friend, I will be finishing this at a belabored pace, I'm afraid.
No one wanted to. Very unpopular hero. So you get these necessity heroes for your team comp to function, that if your team doesn't pick it...
You're welcome to shove it in after we're finished, and I will.
You auto-lose. That's what he's describing. Pick the right thing or you can't get out of a choke. Even here, it's still the case. Like, on one hand, the DPS players' feedback said, well, chokes aren't as bad. Well, they also have the flankers and mobility to be able to get out. And probably other benefits like the self-heal passive will help a character like Tracer. Some objectively good improvements for Overwatch 2 applies to both 5v5 and 6v6. But the MOBA team comp builder is what he's describing, right? I railed
Sorry, I put RBG. It really should have been MOBA, shouldn't it?
against this for years in Overwatch 1. I hated it. Meaning that you have
another player for the lighting. Yeah, it's really weird how he just throws it out arbitrarily at random.
Draft the right deck of cards from your team to even function as a hero shooter. Not a fan.
Now let's share my study notes. So I spent the last day studying.
I played Junker Queen and Hog in Max 2, and we full held first choke on Route 66. I was high, Hog was sitting on point. Could honestly work okay in low ranks. Hog is a bullet sponge. Junker Queen actually does stuff. God. Not liking the MOBA team builder seems like it goes against wanting a draft mode. Well, he sees the draft mode as being able to shut down the enemy team's ability to have a mobile team comp builder. He only considers it to be against or for his point when it backs up his point. So he ignores it at all other times. He'd say it's a strategic thing to be able to shut out things that the enemy team does. But while you're in game, etc., etc. Yeah. That's what he'd say. It's a way to shut down the MOBA team comp builder aspect instead of an extra thing on top of it. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. Freedo also wants hero bans. Yeah, so we shouldn't listen to him, I agree.
From overheads over many of the high elo games we talked about, and not just playing the game, but actually strategizing and taking notes on exactly what could have been done, what felt good, what felt bad. Couple of notes here. Number one, staggering was a bit worse in 66 because there's just more people to mess it up. It's interesting to see how this changes with the waves.
He says this, and I kind of agree, it is a little bit better, but also people are adjusting to this this format, so it could be partially due to that.
Currently testing in Overwatch right now. Number two, distance is key for living tank.
Stagger, another reason why you can't play the game, because your teammate died too early. Still makes it hard to win in 5v5. Still very bad, but because you have more space, you at least could...
No, staggering 5v5 happens less often because there are less people to die, but it's significantly worse to be one person down in 5v5. That is not true in any way, and you're being dishonest by saying it.
Positioning yourself. The psychological aspect of that, I think, can't be understated, for me anyway. Like, okay, my teammate's staggered, but I can gain a positional advantage for the next fight. Or I can do something. I can contribute to the base hero shooter game. Whereas 6v6, you're constantly like regroup simulator, MOBA team comp builder-a-thon.
combos / dives as a support or DPS. Proximity is very, very risky because in Overwatch 2, in 5v5, generally you can take a closer angle.
Man, do we need to make MOBA Team Comp Builder a meme? Shall I put as a voice command MOBA Team Comp Builder?
Twice as many tanks, even though they're a little bit squishier. So you actually need to create a little bit of distance between yourself and the enemy tank, and do so consistently because there really isn't any good close angle. I found myself dying a lot more often as a support or DPS.
Fucking MOBA Team Comp Builder, man.
No, but a bubbled Winston, a bubbled Zarya, a Matrixed Winston, a bubbled Ryan, even something like a double.
Ooh, that almost sounds like...
I argued at the point that this point by Spilo is absolute horseshit and doesn't make any sense. Go watch that if you want me to respond to that.
Oh, word. Oppressive tank synergies? Is that what he's talking about?
Well, dive tank. We're diving on top of me.
Yeah, I just actually think Spilo's wrong, and most of these problems were created by the format he chose.
That was a lot harder to avoid through taking angles. You just had to do more stuff, more work, distance management. This reminds me a lot of my old Overwatch 1 coaching, which a lot of time if you're playing support DPS was about kind of playing a long distance, playing a corner, trying to keep a long distance between yourself and the enemy tank dive or tank combo.
What he's describing is the tanks dictate the entire game. This is the Jake argument, of course, right? And somehow Sam thinks he's outplayed a Jake at this point.
No, the difference is that supports will take an angle that's aggressive, because if they find someone, what they're going to find is a DPS and they can win that duel by default, or just like in general. Like Kiriko will just fight a duel and TP out if it doesn't work to them, so they can stand wherever the hell they want. In the other mode though, you can't really push yourself out because you're going to find a tank and supports. Squishies without support have worse matchups against tank by default. Yeah, that smile on his face, that disgusting smile, yeah.
Because tanks are oppressive in 5v5 as well. They're oppressive in both, right? Tanks dictate the game in 5v5, especially at a high level. But from a fundamentals point of view, what Spilo's saying is if he's chosen for death, he just dies. He's got to play a million miles off, and the tank combos...
That's just not true. It's a little bit more volatile, I'll give them that. And I do consider that to be a bad thing. When I say volatile, I mean how high the peaks are compared to the average. So if you have a D.Va and a Winston, the D.Va and the Winston can throw themselves at you and do a load. And you have to predict two people, and there's a lot more skill required on prediction of where the enemy teams are, prediction of what they can do. I agree with that. Of course, like space control is going to be more sharp. But in the 5v5 mode, you still have one person, and the one person's going to be able to jump you. And you have a lot more texture there, right? You have a Winston jumping at you on their own when you're on an angle, which is going to put out some pressure, so you can predict that and react accordingly. Then the D.Va gets close enough to them to be able to DM, and you have to move further away because that pressure is implied to be higher. It's a lot more texture, it's a lot more interesting. It doesn't mean it's oppressive, in my opinion, because one person throwing themselves at you on an angle already blocks you out. And as we've already covered, you can still fight that person off an angle if it is one person. If two people jump you in 5v5, you have to move anyway. It's just less likely to happen.
Remembering, of course, that your tanks might pick bad ones and the enemies pick good ones, you won't functionally contribute anything ever, as opposed to the map control space.
Yeah,
game.
much easier to decide to trade a squishy as a tank in 5v5 than in 6v6. I think it all comes down to this one argument that I made like halfway through this video, which is the different types of scenarios that you can have and how they are not thinking clearly about this in any way, shape, or form. I think that there's multiple different types of fights that are just favored in terms of the DPS that they're just not giving. And that's just a non-starter, right?
Game of a hero shooter in 5v5, you could go get map. You could contribute to that. But if you're not contributing to the MOBA Team Comp Builder-a-thon in 6v6, you're not playing the game.
For fuck's sake. Shut up! Jesus Christ.
You won't even see daylight to be able to contribute.
That was inevitably coming in. Something to point out. However, after those tanks do commit those goals, they are a lot more vulnerable than they are in Overwatch 2. Moving on.
Very big point.
And by the way, what he's saying for MOBA Team Comp Builder is literally that it matters more what you pick, and you have to fight for space. That's literally all he means. That's literally all he means. He doesn't really mean anything by it. It's just a buzzword he's got into his lexicon, and he just keeps bringing it out over and over because he has no actual point. That's my read of this.
Misplaying as a tank is far more punishable in 6v6. That little thing that he just glazed over is like, I feel such a huge percentage of Samito, my good friend Sam, why he loves 6v6 is because it's like, he's tracking the cooldowns, he's doing the math, he's like, oh, this Arisa used this, like, she should die now, you know? Like he wants that to resolve, and players that really are pro 6v6 love this a lot more than he's elaborating on in this very short, concise
Misplaying a tank is more punishable in 6v6, what a lie. Man, it's so weird.
Making mistakes as tank was far more punishing. Now, there's a downside to that, where if you don't learn tank properly, and if you're not good at tank, then you get rolled over, which I think is a problem for the average player, because average players in 5v5 can kind of just learn their FPS mechanics and do a lot at an average tier of play. But in 6v6, you have to learn calculus.
Why are we making the fucking game for somebody that doesn't want to play the fucking game? Why are we making it for people that don't want to interact with space control, spacing, and other stuff like that? Why do you think it's good that the game's less focused on that? Why would anyone think this? I don't get it. That's not Freedo's chat. That's Spilo's chat from the footage, dude. Do you need a hug? I feel like I need a hug, man. I feel like I need a hug. Oh, God. It's hard. It's hard, man.
On how to not... you have to learn so much more just to have a baseline approach to the game. It helps the high-level tank v tank gameplay a lot.
You don't need to learn more. You don't need to learn more. In fact, it can be staling out of the game. The tank, all the value of the tank is put into one character. You don't need to learn more necessarily. There is more to learn, I will grant you that there is more to learn, but at a base level, all you need to learn is to space around the tank type characters on the enemy team. And I would argue that there's less to learn because the enemy team is more likely to be playing in front of you instead to the side of you in the 6v6 format.
But it also makes mistakes far more punishing and gruesome. Like, you're out of position, boom, you're dead. Whereas in 5v5, there's a little bit more leeway, right? You've got an extra cooldown, a little bit more sustained, got a little more health. So it's like, one thing's not going to blow you up. There's a benefit and a curse to that, right? Pros and cons. It means Sam...
Why is he talking about a bit more health? He just slides between random bullshit over and over again, man.
Can't kill the tank, but it also means the average plat player can step out of position for a second and not need to play perfectly just to survive on the front line.
Is he talking about the tank? Or was he talking about the health pools? If he's talking about the tank, he's saying that the tanks are dying instantly? No, the tanks die when they've massively outplayed their hand on angles instead of just being able to walk over the enemy team. There's a trade there. There's a chance to be able to kill the other person. It's not just like you override the entire video game. Like, he's taken, and this is why, you know, like, he's not arguing honestly. He takes all of the rope he can get. Every single thing is perceived in the best possible way for his argument every single time. It's not ever, this is a bit of a wash, it's not anything else. It's, well, this goes for my argument as a default argument. And it's so tiring to listen to, so tiring to watch, especially when he can't keep a thought straight.
You get to feel tanky in 5v5, whereas you don't feel tanky in 6v6. You feel like you have to play the perfect hero team comp build-a-thon gameplay and cycle those cooldowns.
Like the flares, like the flares.
The barrier of entry to even function and enjoy it is much higher. The ceiling is higher as well, but for the average player, it's like, I really can't wait for these tests to come out, because getting blown up randomly as Winston because, like, your diva didn't matrix you in or you didn't get a bubble at the right time. I mean, it's everything I hated about tank in 6v6, and I'm glad to have it.
The default way to play Winston is to space yourself around them so that if you don't get the DM, you do not die. Then if you do get the DM, you are allowed to press the W button into the enemy team instead of closing the angle on the corner. You should not be just jumping into the enemy team and crossing your fingers that the diva DMs you. And maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe low-ranked players will assume they're going to get the resources like the high-ranked players do, but that doesn't mean that the low-ranked player experience is worse. Like, if the low-ranked players are convinced by the high-ranked players that this is how the game should be played, therefore people will do this, yeah, they're going to find it really annoying. But, like, basically just saying he's bad at tank when he's not a raid boss, where he's saying he's bad at tank and Tiefling, remember, he's bad at tank, and low-level players like him are also bad at tank and enjoy the game less. Remember, you've got to bring back to the point. Didn't he say 2 tanks were oppressive before, and now he's saying you don't feel tanky in 6v6? Yeah. That's it. It's the constant double think of one then the other, then one then the other, one then the other. It sucks, man.
Gone. I do not want it back, you know? Even though I was a much higher rated player, because I understood and exploited those things. But the game being mostly about just cycling tank cooldowns, it starts to sound really silly, honestly. Like why do we enjoy that? I really don't get the appeal. It was far easier to tank just learning that. Whereas in Overwatch 2 tank, I have to learn, I have to shoot, I have to aim, I have to land these abilities. My APM's gonna be through the roof. It's
shoot, aim, and APM was what he says. How is there fucking more APM in Overwatch 2 than 1? There's more shooter heroes because there are more shooter heroes, you penis. Like, how is your APM higher? What does that even mean? Like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah, there's more on average. They're the same fucking heroes. They're going to be ported to 6v6. How are you saying you don't have to shoot as much? You don't have to aim as much? Like, what are you talking about? Like, literally, what are you on about?
It's way more engaging of a gameplay. Now, it's punishing in its own ways, but I think...
It's all built off the false premise that Winston and Ryan aren't popular, isn't it, readers? Right, that's the thing. It's all built off the false premise that people don't enjoy MOBA-type heroes. They enjoy shooter-type heroes, and then it all goes from there. You need more coordination for tanks to feel tanky in 6v6, but that's a good thing for everyone. Creates a good skill curve, making it good for everyone, including casual, compared to making tanks broken at the skill floor. Yeah, and he's saying that if the tanks do coordinate, they are unstoppable in the 6v6 format. Whereas, personally, from me, I feel like if the tanks do coordinate in terms of putting pressure into the DPS, they are about as good at putting pressure into the DPS as one tank is in the 5v5 format. Yeah. Someone do a comparison of Ralph at the start and end of this video for signs of exhaustion. I feel like there's a bag bullet. My voice is dying, I can tell you that. It's hard, man. People only want to play Soldier.
Biggest buff to the enjoyment of Overwatch 2 tank will be to play Overwatch 1 tank again.
From here, tanks must clear and hold space on angles. It is your responsibility to clear space, not just to group up and choke, but also to contest other chokes. DPS and supports cannot consistently
Yeah, in that tank gameplay, if you don't do it, your whole team can't play. Just remember that.
in most spots, especially if there's an enemy tank there. Angle still matters.
No, in 5v5, you cannot clear that space because you have to be on main, and you do not have enough mobility to be in 2 places. In 5v5, the alternative of that is you have to be on angle. So you see the difference, right? It's not a potatoes argument. It is a different priority for different like characters. And you can pick some tiles of tanks that are more likely to want to be on main, and you are going to pick some tiles of tanks that are more likely to want to contest angles. There's more variation in the types of tanks you are allowed to play. In 5v5, you by default pretty much have to point pressure the majority of the time, so there's less total things that you can do.
just as much as they did in 5v5, which are a lot more reliant on your tanks to actually control those chokes and angles than you were in Overwatch 2, where there's a little bit more individual autonomy. There's some interesting dynamics that kind of revolve around this, where is it better to support my tank on main or defend clear an angle that's wide open? It becomes more of a
Man, all characters will devolve into soldier overtime, right? Just give them a grenade, right?
support maybe the tanks on main, but two of them they have to
Mobility and a
support as
grenade. That's all you need to do to know what to do here.
And you might leave yourself vulnerable to an angle. It's a tricky balance. Finally, the last thing here, and this is really important, is when you don't have space in 66, hero pick matters a lot more. We talked about this earlier. There's gonna be a lot of
66 is easier to balance though, remember?
chokes, a lot of positions. Maybe they don't have
When you don't have space, hero picks matter a lot more. Sure. Yes, when the enemy team have a stable position that's advantaged over you, I think that's what he means by not having space. The enemy teams have advantageous positioning. Hero picks matter more. Cool. So you need some sort of initiation to take the space away from the enemy team. I think we can all agree with that. And he's saying it's easier to balance. So he's just making. I don't think that's relevant. I think he's just making a shot at, like, it's not really a balance thing. It's more of just like a static thing where if two people block out an angle, it's hard to take that angle. Essentially, you've got to take space at more like around instead of straight.
Maybe you have verticality, maybe
but we've already discussed that.
Maybe it's close, maybe it's long. You need
nothing to do with these balance. It's not really a balancing concern.
Space with every DPS, with every support character is just not as possible in the 66 format.
And alternatively, in 5v5, the reason why that's not as much the case is because you don't have perfect team comps. The enemy in 6v6 could have a perfect team comp, and you having a wonkier pick, you're not going to have a lane to go play your position and get your value if it's not ideal. And this is why meta stagnation is definitely worse in 6v6, because the top meta synergies are just simply better than the other strategies you could run. Whereas in 5,
it's just not fucking true, man. That's just not fucking true. It's never been true. It's just not true. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Like, it's just not true. Like, if you look at all the good patches that people actually like in the 66 format, there is a whole host of different characters that are all reasonably relevant in the high level, and in the low level, it really doesn't matter what you play. It's just not true. What? Is that why meta stagnation is worse, or because the devs updated the game twice a year?
If you want to play an off-meta hero, you can kind of force it if you just go get your spot of the map that you're good in. And
no, that's not true. That's not fucking true. That's not true. It's not actually true. It's not true. Like, what? Well, I don't know how you end up with this in your mind, arguing like this. It's not true. What?
Get some value. You won't be a hard throw. Now, the tank roll can't quite do that as easily unless you're deciding to do that on something.
We were only talking about the tank roll. We weren't talking about the DPS. Hero picks matter more in the 6v6 format in terms of the tank roll when you're disadvantaged in terms of space. In terms of the DPS and support roll, it doesn't fucking matter what you pick, no matter what the format you're in. It doesn't really matter. It's fine. Like, I perceive Spilo to be saying that if you pick Winston Roadhog, you're going to be disadvantaged against a Rhine Diva if you're on a linear fight and you need to take the space linearly off of the enemy team. That makes sense to me. That's fine. We weren't talking about the DPS and the supports. They're still really flexible. It doesn't really matter what you pick for them. And he just randomly started arguing about the other category. I don't think that's what Spilo intended.
The top picks, like the tank roll, can be counterpicked. So
are you going to look at them? Never.
Comes around that. If they all decide to counterpick you, then yeah, you probably should swap. But for the other four roles, or four teammates, way more reliant. And when you start to talk about required heroes that are unpopular, like Lucio or main tank, I don't know. I'm struggling to see the upside.
It's a funny callback to the rock paper scissors problems that 5v5 has. 5v5 has the tank rock paper scissors, where counterpicking the enemy tank, especially as the tank, can feel more valuable than it has a right to be. And 66, counterpicking the space, counterpicking the map is actually very, very important. Final thoughts here. I'm gonna ride the fence.
Yeah, the potatoes. Like I said earlier, it's two different problems: counter swapping versus combination. It's just like it's two different combinations
For this one, because I frankly haven't played the official attempt at 66, and nobody has.
I'm struggling to see this while my eyes are closed and I'm shouting la 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 la. And Spilo's right here. These two things, they weigh against each other. They're pretty much the same. It's like these two arguments, the tank combinations versus the counter swapping is exactly comparable, and the two arguments of fighting a DPS on an angle and the tank being a full block versus fighting DPS and tanks on an angle and the tanks not being full block are pretty comparable. There's two arguments there that I think were pretty easy to write off as not that important to the conversation, because I think they're personal choice for the most part, and I don't think it comes down either way. I think the arguments that don't come down to personal choice are the increased reliance on the one tanks to be good and the pressure that puts on the one tank in terms of the social aspects of the game. I think people fucking hate tank because of the pressure it puts on them, and I don't think that's fixable in any way, and I don't think it has a viable counterweight in the 6v6 side. I just don't think it is. I don't think that's a tenable issue for the enjoyment of the role in general, and there's a reason why we have high support queue times. I don't know what they are at the moment. 5 minutes, they're okay. This is pretty much prime time on a Friday night, so they should be fine. But I saw, like, off peak, it's like 30 minutes, 40 minutes at the moment, and that's crazy. Personally felt more pressure on me as a tank in 66, feeling like I had to play something that works with my teammates' tank. Interesting. Is that any different than the pressure felt by being counter-swapped when the enemy team picks Orisa and you pick Ryan? Or is that pretty much just even? I'm talking about the social pressure for the most part onto the single player. I feel like there's a lot less social pressure onto the one of the duo players not playing properly compared to the single player being counter-swapped, right? Way more one-tricks in 6v6 Overwatch? Yeah. They've all quit the game.
But I will say this, I did have a lot of fun, and there's a lot of potential for this game, especially with appropriate adjustments to hero design and considerations for some of 66 downsides. Let me show you guys in the comments, but first, seriously, I encourage you to test these things first, not only to give you a better perspective on exactly the feedback of things, but also because it's just a lot of fun. I'll drop my code in the comments, which is the one that's post-season 9, but you can also have your own matchmaker one that's pre-season 9, and you don't even need to do anything. Just
I'll put this in my
join the
description
Discord
as well.
and get ready to roll. It's a lot of fun. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. Let's see what happens in the future.
Okay, guys. So some major key takeaways. 5v5, 6v6. Things that we should know.
You ready? You ready, guys?
I think 6v6 gotta have hero bans. Based on
How? I've just watched you waffle for an hour and 20 minutes on a 20-minute video that Spilo made, and your one takeaway is, like, your first takeaway is something not even fucking brought up in the video. What?
on everything he just said there by the end, because it's like you're going to have heroes that will never function in 6v6.
Okay, that's not true in any way, shape, or form. Like, Spilo made one point at it and didn't even pass it. He didn't even care to explain the point when he said it. He was so non-committal on that point, and I called him out. He didn't have a response, so screw you. That's not true. It's never been true. The design space is more limited in 5v5 than it is in 6v6. Always has been, always will be. Get screwed.
And we'll always have options for the enemy to MOBA team comp builder.
Fuck off! He gets halfway through a sentence and he's like, quickly, let's write, like, MOBA team comp builder. Yes! Fucking text notes moments. But you don't know what to say. You're just like, oh shit, let's get the page. Yep.
He said it multiple times, multiple different ways, where for hero choices matter so much more, right? So because of that, the design of the heroes...
No, that's not true. That's not true. In comparison to 5v5, the difference is that the choice of the tank matters more in 5v5 than it does individually in 6v6, but each individual tank choice matters equally-ish in both modes if you take them together. I think that's... Nobody would disagree with this in general. Counter swapping is problematic in 5v5. Tank combination is problematic in 6v6. It's not... Like, what?
Add to the game is so much more crucial. It's easier to design heroes for 5v5.
Fuck off. No, it's not. Piss off. You don't engage with any... He cannot engage with anyone else's conversations if he genuinely believes this. He has never engaged with this discussion of anyone making any argument for any format if he actually thinks this and doesn't have any context to add to it whatsoever. He is actually wrong fundamentally, functionally. Like, he has no foot in the race. He hasn't even listened to the conversation if he's arguing this. It's crazy. It's stupid. Like, what? How do you get here? How do you get here? Being a person, putting your thoughts out on the internet to 50,000 people and just having no idea what the general discussion is. Like, it makes no sense.
Because we know the different archetypes of what you can do. You can flank, you can tank trade, you can get space on the map, you can hide in a hole, you can play a long range. It's all hero shooter stuff, right? Whereas when you add new elements into 6v6, before you know it, it's like, oh, we got a bunker. Oh, we've got this unkillable brawl thing. We've got, like, the team comps take new formations that break the game.
It's not true. It's not true. You just need to have common sense balancing towards AoE effects and glue to hold positions in place. And if you don't have that, you're in a hero shooter. Like, that's literally it. That's all of it. It's very simple balancing. It is the kind of balancing that I consider that Toasty could fix in one evening of brainstorming without anything else, and then get like 90% to the place where he needed to be for the format. It is fixed. You won't fucking try it because you're scared of trying it, because you don't care for it in general, in an abstract concept, because you already have your preconceived notions, and you don't want to have them challenged. You don't care. You didn't even listen to Spilo's video.
And I think I'll be more excited for them to properly add it to the game if there's hero bans, because at the very least, you could take some of those hard counter options out, so you could play certain heroes you like. I think that's the main thing.
We didn't even talk about hard counters. Nobody even mentioned hard counters. When did people mention hard counters, guys? Was he specifically when he was talking about Widow, which I don't think anyone agrees with him? Why is he talking about hard counters? What, like, he mentioned it 10 seconds ago? What on? Like, we talked about 5v5. How would bans be picked? Is it a team captain or vote team kind of thing? Is a team vote kind of thing is the thing that people keep floating? It wouldn't work because in low ranks, people will just ban the thing that's most annoying rather than anything that actually makes sense. And they'll ban meme heroes and new heroes. So it doesn't really work. You'd have to actually limit being able to ban new hero releases because people just always ban it. And that'd be awful for the game. Ban Mercy, yeah. Enemy team has a Mercy main, ban Mercy. It'd be really bad. It just doesn't work functionally. The community is not in a state where they can do it. Obviously, in high ranked and tournaments, go for it. I don't care. It's fine. Yeah, go for it. If you want that, I don't particularly want it. It reduces the diversity in the heroes appearing in the games, but go for it. It's fine. Yeah.
I think people are going to dislike more is that in a competitive mindset of 6v6, it has higher teamwork potential, but it also has much less forgiving individual expression. And what I mean is, you can't play worse things and expect to win. You can't play suboptimal characters.
I don't think that's true. I just don't think that's true. You can't play suboptimal characters in 5v5. By the way, if you ever challenge Freedo on counter-swapping, do you know what his response to counter-swapping is? Every single time? It's, oh, well, I'm playing tank. I quite like counter-swapping. That's the whole response. That's it. When it's for my point, I hate counter-swapping. Counter-swapping is the problem, and it's a problem caused by 6v6. And when it's for his point, he quite likes it, so it's okay. Every single time.
Whereas in 5v5, there's a lot of budget versions of the same thing that still more or less can do the job. So that means you're less on your hero pick and more on, can you actually even play that hero? Like, you might get into a position in 5v5 where maybe a given hero is the most ideal version, but you're not as good at them. So you can play a budget version and still enjoy your hero, enjoy your time.
There's budget versions of the tank combinations. That's kind of the point. It's just directly comparable, and he doesn't take the other side of it because he's an ass.
6v6, that's not the case, which the biggest 6v6 advocates say the opposite of this. But I just feel like Spilo agreed with me on this point for 20 minutes of his video, an hour of mine, of me reacting to this. Your hero choice matters more. He said it multiple times. So because of that, do you think that means you can express yourself and play off meta heroes easier? Or are you just going to throw for your whole team if you try to do that?
He never said it about support. He said it about support for like 2 seconds, and I think he's wrong about that. He's never said it about DPS. So it's specifically in terms of tank, and it's exactly the same pressure. Like, what?
5 fits the kind of community we have, or at least the one that we had. So I'm optimistic.
Matters more in space taking, not overall true.
That a new, more competitive crowd might maximize what this mode can do, but glossed over here as well is just the queue time reality, right? Like, all these downsides we discussed, plus worse queue times, do we really think that this is going to improve the game, or does it just rearrange the problems we already had, and maybe exacerbated many that you didn't even see coming? Like, the counterpick tank issue getting worse. That's what I feel like he described in this video, is that the counterpicking tank issue can get even worse, which is what I...
The queue times like the flares, guys!
The last time I spoke to Spilo, actually 2 podcasts ago, now that I think about it, on this issue anyway. I said counterpicking on tanks will just be worse in 6v6 because of the tank design.
That's just not true. That's just absolutely not true. 100% not true. It never has been true. It's not true.
And a lot of those tank designs we think are fun. So how do you do that?
This is the guy Aaron will listen to? Well, he's listening to Spilo, and Spilo needs to actually refute some of this stuff or ignore his points. Hopefully, Freedo has a small enough platform at this point that has slowly been imploding. I mean, 774k with 47k views on a hot button issue that has clearly been baited is not particularly great for him. Yeah, hopefully it's okay. Spilo needs to stop fence sitting. Well, by feeding him like literally 5 seconds of saying that tank counters and tank busting is worse in 6v6, he has managed to spin that entirely into himself. He needs just stop baiting. Stop baiting, stop giving them points that don't make sense. I don't know what you're talking about, Spilo. It makes no sense, and he's made an hour talking about it, basically.
All right, guys.
Get the album that shows YouTube dislike. This one's actually 20%, this one. The other one that he's made, we're going to go over tomorrow. It's only 50 minutes long. Is 76% dislike ratio.
Hello, and I wanted to make a reaction. I hope, 90 minutes of it is considered transformative for the community. So much cool things to talk about. I love this conversation. I also think that
in every
regard,
regard,
kind of allowed our obsession with the idealized version of what we all want Overwatch to be to overshadow some very obvious realities. Like, I'm struggling to see anything from this video of this very respected...
No, I've not seen the Spilo interview with devs. I think we'll probably do that. I think I'll probably watch that tomorrow.
That counteracted the main arguments I've made about this the entire time. Like, I really want to be convinced, but he basically just agreed with me the whole time about both sides, right? It's not like I don't understand the benefits of 6v6. It just isn't worth some of my main points, which I'm not sure he necessarily even agreed with originally. So, yeah, I don't know. Too much chaos on screen, too many ults, too much regroup, too much holding hands, too much your team work and team picks mattering. I don't know if the casual players want to play this. Remember, we have a free-to-play audience now.
Squeed, I have actually skimmed the summary, but I want to see it all because I feel like tone matters more than what was actually said. So I've seen the summary, I've skimmed it, I haven't read through in detail. I know they've mentioned splitting up Zarya bubbles, for instance. I know they've mentioned tank passives and stuff like that. So I feel like it's looking up a lot. And I also feel like the things that they haven't mentioned might be more oversight and not mentioning it in the conversation than it will be that they're not doing them, like balancing doing things properly for the format. So yeah, I think it's looking really, really damn good. Like really good. If anyone hasn't watched it, we'll do it tomorrow.
On one hand, some of them are more hardcore, but on the other hand, some of them are more casual. Like, they get to just play Widowmaker all the time now if they want. What happens when you get that player on your team now, and then you don't get good tanks? And when I say good tanks, I mean ones that synergize, because you get a random roll of teammates, remember? Sometimes you'll get tanks that cooperate, sometimes you won't. So you can have an entire team that just doesn't play the game. And that's, by design, I think going to happen more the more they keep adding heroes, because you get people that maybe only play Venture, only play Zarya, whatever.
That doesn't actually make sense. The more heroes you add and the more players are in the game, the more averaged team content experiences get to be, and less sharp the team content experiences get to be. What if you pick a player that only plays Venture, and the enemy team's playing something that counters Venture, Kappa, something? It's exactly the same problem, right? What if you pick a character that only plays Reinhardt, and the enemy team plays Orisa? Exactly the same problem, right? This isn't an argument for or against, and the fact that he doesn't understand this is kind of insane to me.
Overwatch 1, we had a lot of that, a lot of only off-tank players.
Yeah.
I'm excited for this to happen because I'm almost certain the narrative on this has to change. That's how I feel about it. Like, how are we coming out with a video like this and we're still all excited for 6v6? How do you see these?
Because some people aren't stupid. Some people aren't. Some people fucking tried it. Oh, it's like I'm a man in my cave yelling at clouds because the clouds are brown, and I think the brown clouds are bad. But I've never seen the clouds. But you know what? I don't know how people think that brown clouds are good because there are brown clouds out there. Gross allegory of the cave, yeah. Well, if there's shadows on the wall.
Choke points that we can't escape, and we're like, wow, this is good Overwatch right here. Not accessing space ever.
I think that would be the most indefensible thing when he would get into the real debate. Have you tried it? He will not. And honestly, Squeed, the trouble with debating somebody that is a muck roller is that you don't win against a muck roller unless you barrel over them by just talking way too much and interrupting them. It's the only thing you can do. Or you pin them down on individual points. But even if you do pin them down on individual points, it doesn't necessarily matter because people are swayed by the kind of like emotional part of the conversation in debates rather than what is actually said for the most part. I don't get me wrong, the people who are actually actively engaged relate to the things that are said, but the people who are passively engaged in a debate just listen to the emotional context and stuff like that. Flat Earthers of Overwatch? Yeah, 100%. And it's very weird that Freedo brought up Flat Earthers. Maybe it's a Shakespeare kind of situation where the lady doth protest too much, and maybe they are more similar to the Flat Earthers and not me. Maybe they're on your mind for a reason, Freedo. I guess, maybe what I'm saying. Christ. We good? I'm sorry, guys. Man, Freedo days. I have a Freedo day every now and then because I have to, I feel like I have to address other arguments in the space. And this is, he's basically the only person arguing against. What's happened with Jake recently, by the way, guys? Anyone seen what's happened with Jake? Has Jake been tweeting about 6v6 since they started testing it? Or was he just shut up like he always should have, instead of calling people yapping dogs? Anything interesting on here? I'm gonna guess he's shut up. Yeah, he's just quieted down and he's doing his general Overwatch stuff now. Man, some people are such damn tools. What a thing to do to put yapping dog thing on TV on OWCS. What a thing to do. What an absolute shit thrower. The fact that somebody can do shit throwing like that completely unprompted and somehow still have a job with Blizzard is crazy to me. I think it is actively disrespecting a significant part of the community at a certain point. What did he do? In an OWCS offshoot, he put a yapping dog on the screen and compared them to 6v6ers. And this one is at a 67% dislike ratio. I thought I missed. 67% dislike ratio. It's got over 2k downvotes. It's crazy. This guy's parents were shot in a 6v6. This condescending attitude just makes me happy that 6v6 is coming back. Person at a party, man, this is a fun event. Can't wait to eat this cake. Freedo enters. That cake's not going to be good as you think. Let me explain. Oh, man. It's so funny. It's so funny, man. Maybe you are more on button instead of a dislike. Well, apparently that's the comment section. Oh, God. Show us on the patch of Mario where 6v6 touch you. Don't be scared. They can't hurt you any longer. Brilliant.